So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about What If Naruto Assassination Specialist. Part 1. If you guys enjoy this, what if? And you want to see part 2. Comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Chapter 1. 13 years after Kyuubi attack. 1:45 a.m., somewhere in Konohagakure. There was a clear night sky over Konoha, the stars twinkling brightly, the crescent moon smiling down at the earth, and the cool breeze drifting through the air was a sure sign of good fortune for the Hidden Leaf village. However, on this strand of air came the scent of foreboding, as a dark figure could be seen leaping across the village rooftops towards the very edge of the village area nearest the mountains. His form silhouetted the sky, but nobody took notice. Even those walking around the streets thought it was just a bird. The relatively small figure leapt from one roof to another effortlessly before stopping short of a series of houses bordering a small river weaving through this area. His eyes fell upon the bridge arching over it and, marking the next series of houses carefully, leapt forward, skipping on the bridge's railing and up onto the next series of rows. He traveled for another few hundred meters before becoming perched on the edge of another roof. Hidden away in the shadows, the young figure then glared down towards the entrance of what looked to be an estate built into the cliffside of the Hokage mountains. The building was nothing too fancy or too dull. It had a nice wide open garden up front with plenty of foliage and a perimeter fence surrounding the garden. To further the figure's observations, he saw that there were at least a dozen guards outside, and judging from the masks and black attire, he could tell they were root members. The figure watching them was short, wearing black trousers and sandals, a ninja mesh top, and over that a black jacket with a white fur collar, a hood, and it was zipped up. It also had a red flame pattern along the bottom rim, and the hood concealed the man's face almost completely. Even if the hood were to fall away, it would be useless to see his face, since he was wearing an Anbu mask that was red on one side and white on the other, completely covering his face. He also had a huge scroll tied to his back, and several more slipped into a bandolier he wore around his waist. Furthermore, the man covered his entire outfit with a black cloak. To him, it was the perfect mask for his identity. Looking around where he was crouched, perched on the very edge of the roof, he began taking closer looks at the perimeter defenses and building. He saw from where he sat perched about 500 yards out that the fence was tagged with paper, indicating that the fence was rigged to detect anyone to set foot across it and rigged to sound off alarms. He also noticed that the electric wires running into the building had tags hanging from them, as were the poles, and from closer inspection, a lot of the high points that could gain access to the roof of the building were rigged too. After studying the perimeter fencing, he then began to analyze the guards patrolling the area. For several nights now he had been watching the guards move in and out on a regular basis and had gotten a full report on their activities. After watching for a few minutes, he knew exactly how the schedule would run and where the holes were. Knowing that this was his only chance to enter the vicinity and escape perfectly without anybody catching him, he knew he couldn't miss this opportunity. After all, this was a particularly important night. Nodding, the boy held his right hand up to his mouth and from his thumb he bit down on it, drawing blood. Patting his fingertips with it, coating them in red, he placed it on the roof space in front of him and with a puff of smoke, a falcon appeared. The summoned animal, quiet, looked around at its summoner and bowed to him. An exchange of silent words engaged them, with the figure reaching into his pouch behind him and pulling out a paper tag. Slapping it onto the stomach of the falcon, he then bid it to be on its way, knowing it knew what to do. The falcon bowed and then took off, taking flight over the establishment. It swooped right over the fence, seeing that it didn't set off any alarms, before taking flight higher into the sky. Hovering near the most foliated areas, it let out a quick screech. The young male waiting on the rooftops nodded and, forming a hand sign, disappeared with a puff of smoke. A split second later, another puff of smoke appeared, not on the roof, but under the very seal that was placed on the airborne falcon. The young assassin appeared out of the smoke, free-falling and performing a few flips before diving straight into the waiting bushes below. The pair of guards close to the entrance of the gate caught wind of the rustling in the bushes to their left and glanced at each other. "Go check that out," one of the masked root guards said. His partner nodded and walked over, drawing his sword from his sheath behind him. The dispatched guard disappeared into the darkness of the edge of the garden, stepping out of the light of the lamps and out of his partner's sight. Reaching the source of the supposed rustling, the root ninja then began to probe the bushes one after the other. He forced aside vines and cut away at the branches obscuring his view, looking around through the dark and thick undergrowth for any signs of life. It was then, just as he was leaning in to take a closer look at a peculiar-looking flower, it suddenly shot out at him with a hand, striking at his neck and pulling him in sharply and soundlessly. The only sound was the rustling of more bushes. The guard's comrade standing at the gate looked over when he heard the sudden sharp rustle of bushes and stepped forward. Unable to see anything, the guard then called for backup. 3 more showed up and he pointed towards the bushes and trees. "Go find Eagle. We might have a situation." The guards nodded and drew their swords, rushing into the bushes. The guard watched from the sidelines through the dark, listening and watching for any signs of life. It was then, out of the darkness, he heard a light clang of a blade and suddenly a grunt, signaling trouble. The root guard stepped back and drew his sword out. He reached up to his headpiece and growled. "Blasted." But before he could do anything else, a shuriken shot out of nowhere and knocked his headpiece clear out of his ear, at the same time scarring his mask. He grunted in shock and was about to shout out for help, but was silenced. All he heard was a thud and his vision went blurry and he felt a seeping warm sensation escaping his neck. He reached up to his throat, unable to breathe as his own blood seeped out of the wound in his windpipe. Within seconds, he fell to the ground, only to be caught and dragged into the shadows by the assassin crouching behind him. But the bodies dealt with, the short yet well-rehearsed assassin then began closing in on the building wedged into the cliffside. Reaching the edge of the garden close to the entrance, he began counting the remaining guards. There were 7 left, and he knew that he had to take them all out if he had a chance of escaping. Spotting one closing in on his position, he crouched further into the bushes, flicking his wrist. It was with that a blade shot out from under his right jacket sleeve, reflecting a bit of the light from its shine. The guard drew closer. Inside the estate hidden in the mountain, underneath a glass roof, there was a round, conference room of sorts. The room consisted of a red and green trademark design, with large pillars, 3 floors with walkways visible, and on the ground floor, an oak-made, large round table with 12 seats. Most of these seats were empty, and the number of guards there were numbered to around 13 at the most, plenty enough for the 3 figures sitting at this round table. One of them sat in the upper-class seat, reserved for the head of this particular organization. He wore white and black robes, his right arm in a sling, and a majority of his face and head wrapped in white bandages. Furthermore, as understandable for his age, the man also had a walking stick and the only working side of his body was his left side. The 2 other people sitting at the table in seats across from each other were the 2 of the most recognized of the village elders, Homura Midokado and Kaharu Utatane, who were looking upon the head of Root with great intent. "Well, Danzo," the elder Homura began, "what do you plan to do with the container of the Kyuubi? He is, after all, an important asset to this village." Kaharu stated. "His isolation from the villagers should help you to be able to acquire him from the Hokage's circle. The people will hail you as the hero of Konohagakure for finishing off Yondame's handiwork, only in reality, you will be taking the little demon under your wing and training him to become the weapon he is supposed to be. Getting rid of the child will be easy. It's just passing the blame on the person that is the problem." The leader, designated Danzo, lowered his head as he took the elder's words to heart. However, he disregarded their words for the time being and sighed. The Hokage constantly keeps an annoyingly close watch on the boy. He's even gone as far as to paste not only Anko Midarashi on the boy's watch, but also Iruka Yamino as well as extra protection. "Iruka poses no threat to the progress of this village," Kaharu stated. "He is but a pawn, just like the other Chunin. It's Anko Midarashi that's the problem." Homura finished. Danzo nodded his head. "Unfortunately, I cannot make a move to get the boy or I'll be caught. Hiruzen Sarutobi has already got enough eyes on me as it is. I'm assuming he's taken into account some of the rumors floating around the top." "Please, define rumors," Kaharu queried. "As in, the situation back during the war in Omegakure. When I attempted to recruit the assistance of Hanzo." "Ah. That one," Kaharu said, looking over at Homura. "It's a shame though," Danzo said, lowering his head. "Those mongrel rebels are causing too many problems for him. Now we barely hear from Omegakure at all." "What is the info detail from your spy?" Kaharu asked. "Unfortunately, I have not heard from him since. All contact with him has been severed," Danzo said, looking up with a grim look. "There is the possibility that he has been either captured or killed. However, whether my spy is dead or not is of little consequence. There is something going on in Omegakure and I intend to find out what it is. Could it possibly be civil war related? Last I heard Hanzo and his forces were involved in a war with the populace." "Perhaps," Danzo said calmly. "But there has been little or no chatter to support this. Omegakure's borders are a strict no-go zone. Completely sealed off." "But what of your plans for Kyuubi?" Homura asked. Danzo looked over at him. "I intend to bide my time till the right moment," the old warhawk said. "Presently, the little bundle of energy is proving to be a nuisance around Konoha. Reports from my overseers say that he is causing much havoc for the villagers, befuddling the Hokage monuments and making a mockery of what this village stands for. It's starting to become a real errand. The demon is just a little troublemaker. He can cause no harm as of yet," Kaharu said. The Hokage should keep a tighter leash on it, Hamura stated, earning a nod of agreement from Kaharu. Unfortunately, the Hokage is continuing to make it a point that the boy is nothing more than that, a little troublemaker, Danzo said. He is currently attending the academy and scoring at a rather unsatisfactory level. Grades at average, progress hindered. No genius of course. But in spite of his incompetence, he is still the container of the Kyuubi and must be treated in high discussion and must be controlled. Little monster. Nothing more than a kettle about to boil over. Before any more words could be spoken, there was the sound of shattering glass overhead and suddenly, a body came plummeting down from the ceiling, landing with an ear-splitting crash right in the center of the table. The very impact caused it to leap off the ground about a foot and shock the elders and surprise Danzo. When the body came to rest, it was revealed to be one of Danzo's root guards, dead with a kunai lodged in his head. Danzo gritted his teeth and rose to his feet, looking around. "We've been infiltrated," he yelled. "Guards." Just as the guards were gathering at the railing, ready to come to Danzo and the elders' aid, there suddenly came a rain of shadowy figures from the ceiling above. Emerging through the massive hole in the skyline, the figures leapt through the air, straight for each corresponding guard. The solid figures landed one after another beside her in front of every guard on the upper and lower floors in sight. The guards leapt back in surprise, drawing swords and ready to strike. But before any of them could, each of the small figures dressed in black went up in flaming balls of fire. The explosions rocked the very foundations of the estate, disintegrating a couple of the root ninja and blowing apart the others. Blinded by the onslaught of explosions and caught up amidst the blasts, Danzo, Hamura and Kaharu remained where they were, holding their ground. It was when the explosions faded and the smoke lifted they looked around to find that all the guards in the immediate area had been dispatched. Danzo frowned and, from his cane, drew a straight-bladed sword, looking around for any more attackers. However, what he failed to notice was that the corpse that had fallen from the ceiling before had a seal tag placed upon its chest. So, just as Danzo was turning on his axis, a puff of smoke exploded from the dead root ninja's chest, and once it cleared, it revealed the crouching assassin, glaring directly at Danzo. The two village elders spotted him first, but before either of them could react, the unknown assassin threw his arms out towards them, flicking his wrists, and suddenly, clusters of shuriken flew out from under his sleeves, hitting the elders like targets on the range. They were dead before they even hit the ground. Sensing the assassin behind him and killing the elders, Danzo spun around, performing a few quick hand signs before slashing out with his blade at the attacker. A stream of wind escaped his sword, extending the blade's attack indefinitely as he made the horizontal slash. The assassin however saw the attack and crouched flat down onto his stomach on the table, letting the attack pass over before throwing his right arm forward. Another cluster of shuriken flew from his hand at this and flew straight at the old warhawk. Danzo readjusted his blade and slashed downwards, effectively knocking aside some of the shuriken and attempting to kill the intruder at the same time. The assassin, however, pushed off of the ground and leapt to the side, spinning through the air in rapid succession, just as the wind blade came down and struck the table, destroying it in a hail of splinters and dust. Danzo suffered a couple of scars from the shuriken he didn't deflect, thrown by the assassin. He readjusted his attention and glared at the boy, slicing through the air with his wind blade again down at the short man. The assassin managed to leap through the air again, this time retreating. Flipping through the air, the assassin flung his hands through the air, sending a third barrage of kunai at Danzo. Danzo leapt out of the way, gritting his teeth as he watched the assassin gain distance, landing on the second story on the railings of the above walkway. The remaining elder growled and slapped his hands together again in another series of hand signs, inhaling air quickly before throwing his upper body forward and across, letting loose a series of wind trails from his mouth, which sliced through the air, straight at the assassin. It tore up the second-story walkway, effectively clouding the whole area with smoke and seemingly consuming the assassin, sending him to his doom. Danzo breathed out and in, catching his breath and frowning up at the second story, seeing the dust and debris continue to rain down from his technique. Scanning the area, he saw that there was no more presence to be weary of and lowered his head. Sheathing his sword away, he confirmed that the battle was over. Sighing, the old man prepared to make his departure, turning on his heel and intending to head back to HQ and attend to this new problem. However, when he turned and his eyes fell upon the shadows near the entrance, he stopped in his tracks and his expression showed a slight surprise when he saw the familiar silhouette of the assassin standing on the ledge right above the entrance. He was standing at an angle that would have deemed him invisible to the naked eye. Upon being spotted, the assassin stepped over the ledge and dropped to the ground floor, landing in a crouched position and a light thud. When he did and rose to his feet, Danzo furrowed his brow and was about to draw his sword when he suddenly detected another presence beside him. Looking to his right, he saw another or. Shocking enough, the same assassin steps out from the shadows, followed by another and another and another. Soon, he was surrounded by over a dozen more assassins, all wearing the same clothing, and was the same height. He looked around him, seeing that he was surrounded by copies and smirked. He adjusted his grip on his sword. Nothing more than shadow clones. In a swift lightning-fast movement that was impossible for a man of his age to perform, Danzo spun on his heel and drew his sword, a loud whip crack of wind sounding and ripped through the air, striking many of the clones and wiping them out. They all perished in puffs of white smoke as the trail of wind emerging from the sword slashed through the air and cut through them one after the other. Stopping mid-spin, Danzo once again adjusted grip and performed several hand signs. Once completed, he spun around fully, slashing his sword across and effectively scarring the inside of the building and killing the rest of the clones with a final wind slice. They all went up in puffs of smoke, with an explosion of debris to follow from the old man's attack. "You'll have to do better than that to defeat me, assassin," Danzo called out, straightening his stance and looking back towards the entrance, only to find that his opponent had vanished. He looked around, trying with difficulty to try and find his attacker. "I've braved many conflicts in many countries over my years as a ninja of Konoha and have learned many techniques. It'll take more than a clone jutsu to get the better of me." It was then, when the dust cleared again, that Danzo was faced again with another onslaught of clones emerging from the shadows, only the numbers have beyond doubled. Surrounding him on all levels of the building, Danzo saw hundreds of clones standing, perched or sitting around him casually. He was surrounded and effectively closed in by a mass shadow clone technique, which made him raise his eyebrows in surprise. "Mass shadow clone jutsu, eh?" he curiously stated, looking around. "Well, 1,000 more just isn't going to cut it." Slowly raising his sword-wielding arm up and, with the pommel of his sword's handle, pushed up one of the many bandages covering his hidden eye, Danzo revealed his secret weapon. It was underneath the bandages he concealed a 3-tomo Rinnegan, immediately setting it to glare directly at the masses of clones surrounding him. Very well then. Performing a brief variety of more hand signs, Danzo then took in a deep breath and, with one swift movement, threw his upper body forward once again. Fire style. Grand fireball technique. The next attack left his lips with a loud boom and a rush of hot air. In merely a few seconds, a massive ball of flames escaped his lungs and quickly spread throughout the room. The old war hawk himself guided the technique, sending it spreading into the masses of clones, obliterating one after the other and directing the flames in every possible angle. From here, he performed another variety of hand signs and, increasing his range, spun around and performed yet another fire-style technique in a blink of an eye. Fire style. Phoenix flower technique. Danzo shouted, smaller balls of fire shooting out from his lips this time, targeting individual groups of shadow clones one after another, sending them into oblivion like the rest of them. He kept spitting out fireball techniques one after another with absolute precision, eventually coming down to one last assassin standing by the entrance. For this last one, he directed one last grand fireball technique, only to have the assassin raise his right hand and produce what appeared to be a glowing ball of blue chakra. The swirling ball struck the fireball technique head-on and dispersed it in a blink of an eye. As the flames dispersed, Danzo saw that the last assassin was still alive and easily assumed that it was the real one. In their wake they had completely destroyed the conference hall, burning walls and scarring the entire room. The entire structure was left crumbling and ablaze amidst the destruction. It was a miracle this place was still standing. Danzo smiled, seeing his opponent still alive. He clapped his hands together slowly. "Oh, exceptional. Absolutely exceptional skill for a common assassin," Danzo exclaimed in his stoic voice, showing no hint of emotion whatsoever. He lowered his hands, watching as the assassin stepped forward a bit from the shadows. "I appraise your abilities to manipulate chakras so well. You truly are something more." The assassin flicked his left and right wrists, two short blades suddenly shooting forth from under his sleeves at the wrists with audible slicing sounds. Clenching his fists, the young male slowly proceeded to continue forward, intent on finishing the old man once and for all. All the while, he listened to him talk. "You've coordinated your techniques well. Skills like that would be very useful en route," Danzo stated, lowering his head a little. "How would you like to join me, assassin? Together you and I will be able to take Konohagakure from the Hokage and make this village a better, safer, and more just society. I can make you a viable asset of my organization." The assassin stopped in his tracks, looking up and taking a closer look at his opponent. Considering his observations quickly, he then stepped back into the shadows. "No? Then perhaps a deal then. Name your price," Danzo offered. Frowning, the assassin flicked his wrists again, his blades retracting. This sight made Danzo smile, but it struck him a little curious as he watched a short figure reach for his right sleeve and adjust something concealed underneath it. But it looked as though he was just fixing his sleeve and nothing more. "I can give you anything you want. Maybe offer you some suitable accommodations or a certain amount of just name it." Stepping forward, the boy raised his right arm upwards towards Danzo and with his left, gripped the trigger hidden underneath his sleeve with his finger. Suddenly, with a pull of that trigger, the barrel now protruding from under his sleeve went off with a loud bang that ricocheted around the hall. Danzo let out a loud off of discomfort and staggered back as the air was knocked out of him. With his steps of agony, the man looked down at his stomach to see that the assassin had unexpectedly fired with some sort of device a kunai at an extremely high velocity. It had impaled him straight in the stomach, with blood already beginning to seep out. Without knowing exactly what the assassin had used to hit him, the warhawk collapsed to the ground with a loud thud. He was dead within seconds, his cane and sword clattering to the floor, joining him. The assassin lowered his arm, content with his job and adjusting his sleeve to cover his kunai gauntlet. With a frown, he walked forward, coming to stand next to Danzo's lifeless corpse. No lingering shred of pity or any signs of emotions could be seen on him, mostly due to the mask, but his body didn't rattle or tremble at all. The assassin just stood silently and glared down at the old man. Shifting a little, the short man glanced down at his shoulder, where he saw a trickle of blood escape a tear in his coat. He ran a thumb over it and found that it had been cut by Danzo's air release technique. The jutsu had left quite a gash in his side, but it was to be of no consequence. Ignoring it for now, the assassin turned back to his kill. Without hesitation, he rolled the old man over, seeing his Sharingan lying still in its socket. Proceeding to extract it, the young assassin knelt down and simply took the Sharingan from its user. It wasn't messy, it was just a clean push and pull. He placed the eyeball into a water flask from his pocket and sealed it. Afterwards, he then took the old man's cane and, sheathing it onto his back and pocketing the Sharingan, turned on his heel and began to leave. However, the assassin did not forget to clean up the mess he had made and tossed a kunai with an explosive tag attached to it straight up into the ceiling. Just as the assassin exited the facility through the front doors, the bomb went off, causing the unstable roof, as well as most of the cliffside to come cascading down onto itself, burying the entire site. The assassin didn't even look back at the explosion or the avalanche of rubble, only raising his right arm to allow his falcon to land onto his shoulder. He pets it in congratulations and allows him to fly off, freeing him for a job well done. Chapter 2. Graduation. That very next morning. The local ramen bar was surprisingly quiet around this time. Much more disappointed than usual, the owners expected to be having a lot more customers than one this morning, since they were, after all, offering a new breakfast special ramen that was both healthy and nutritious. However, the only people they managed to attract with this new sale were Ruka and Naruto, but that was about it. The only person sitting at the counter at present was their favorite spiky-haired blonde, who was now gorging on a delectable bowl of a special morning miso ramen. Tucci and AM both stood at the counter and smiled as they watched the short bundle of energy consume his third bowl this morning, before grinning up at them happily with squinted eyes. Slow down Naruto, you'll choke, AM exclaimed. Remember, savor the flavor. Let it rest in your mouth before continuing its journey down your throat, Tucci told him. It has to go down in luxury, otherwise you will end up with an unpleasant stomachache in the foreseeable future. Oh, don't fret old man. Naruto said, wiping his chin of some excess ramen broth. I know exactly how to savor my ramen. It must be treated with the very dignity it was created for, to be eaten and enjoyed. You must hold it in the highest respect and let it go down remembered by gorging on it mercilessly and swallowing it without hesitation. That's my way of ramen. Ha ha. Good one, kid. Tucci exclaimed, taking the pot of boiling noodles and assorted ingredients from the stove and carefully pouring another bowl full into Naruto's empty one. Here. Have another one in the house. Thanks, old man. The boy exclaimed before once again gorging on noodles. He was careful not to splatter any on his black fur collar jacket or strain his right arm that was wrapped in a few bandages. It was while he was dining gracefully on his meal did AM fully take note of the bandages around his arm and pointed it out. Her father went off to do some of the dishes and allowed her to keep an eye on their favorite customer. Man, this is good. Naruto said, a piece of noodle and some broth sticking to his cheeks. Hey, Naruto-kun. What happened to your arm? She asked, blinking in surprise. Did you hurt yourself? It must have been a pretty nasty wound for it to be bandaged up so much. Naruto looked up at her briefly and then towards the area of his arm where the joint met the shoulder. He smiled and looked back up at her, grinning. Nah. Don't worry about it. I just fell out of a tree while training. It's no big deal. AM sighed and smiled at him in relief. That's good, Naruto-kun. But just try to be careful while you're training, okay? Yeah? Naruto exclaimed, giving her the thumbs up. I'll be careful. He then dug back into his meal a second later. His boisterous smile and happiness made AM giggle, who then headed off to do some of her other duties. Unknown to her, Naruto took a quick glance at her over the edge of the ramen bowl his head was ducked into, the angle at which his head was placed, sending an overcast shadow that concealed much of his eyes, but revealed it in a different light. In his stare, there was a significant change, like a mask had just been removed by the very child these eyes belonged to. They were no longer glistening with their usual happiness, they were dark, drawing in the shadows and creating an eerie reflection, with the sapphire gleam turning into a slightly duller shade of blue, with rings of fatigue appearing as ringed bags beneath his eyes. These weren't the eyes of a human, no. They were the eyes of a tired child. Eyes of a rabid dog. I'm glad you don't know me that well, Aoyama-chan. The boy thought in a faraway voice, before turning back to his food and beginning to gorge on it again. He downed it in the next several minutes and sighed happily, licking his lips. Yummy. That was so good. Am smiled over at him from the cashier area where she stood clearing up some of the notes from the desk. Well, I'm glad you liked it, Naruto-kun, she replied, shrugging. My dad makes the best ramen in the entire village. It's him that you should be singing your praises to. They make great ramen too, Am-chan. Naruto exclaimed. Am blushed and rubbed the side of her cheek with her hand bashfully. Well. I don't make it that good, Naruto-kun. Of course you do. Naruto said, leaping off of his chair. Pulling from his pocket several bills, he handed them over to Am and nodded to her. I've got my genin exams today. Wish me luck, okay? Of course, why wouldn't I? Am replied, smiling kindly down at the boy who smiled back. Good luck, Naruto-kun. I know you will do well. Thanks, Am-chan. Naruto shouted with a wave as he left the shop. Bye old man. Thank you for the ramen. See ya at lunch, kid. Tuchi's voice followed as Naruto began jogging up down the road towards the ninja academy. He set himself a fair pace, which was pretty fast for a boy of his age, but not a bit of a surprise, due to his occupation and whatnot. He continued his run, passing by individual villagers, as well as small groups of people along the way. Many of them watched him run by, whereas some gave him dirty looks behind his back. The yellow-haired youngster ignored them and pushed on, going so far as to gently shove by people to keep up his pace, calling out sorry to them but not stopping, so as to not waste time. Eventually he reached a point where he could see the academy, about a mile down the road and smirked, only to feel a familiar presence come up beside him and glance to his left. When he did, he saw a very familiar face running right beside him, wearing a green spandex uniform with orange leg warmers, as well as bearing black, bowl-cut hair and very big eyebrows. Naruto raised an eyebrow when he saw the boy also wearing silver shackle-live accessories on his wrists and ankles with markings on their sides, indicating that they were weight seals. The boy turned and grinned at him. Why if it isn't my good friend, Naruto? How are you this fine and beautifully painted early morning? The boy exclaimed in question. Naruto smirked back at him, continuing his run. I'm fine. And a good morning to you too, Lee. Naruto replied, nodding to him. Going for an early hour run? Oh yes. Yes indeed. As always. Good to see you're still keeping in great physical fitness. It was after the two of them had been running for several more yards in silence, did they both smirk at each other and immediately pick up the pace. Side by side, on equal ground, the two of them gained speed, dust up hurling behind them as they shot down the road at an unbelievably fast pace. They passed people by, who watched in shock as two blurs, one yellow and one green, shot past them. To the academy, Naruto-kun. Lee yelled, picking up speed. I will beat you to the gates this time. Not on my watch, bushy brows. Naruto yelled back, gaining even more speed. The two of them were moving so fast that it looked to them that they were gaining tunnel vision. However, it was all due to their speed and eye focus, and with the increase in their speed, they continued to move down that tunnel. The academy drew nearer and nearer, and both of them were rushing at it with all their might, panting and gritting their teeth. It was then, as soon as they were within reach of it, they both skidded to a halt, uphurling more dirt and dust before stopping just short of the gate. Lee then turned on his heel and began running in a different direction, waving back at Naruto who took a moment to watch his friend depart. It was a tie this time, my friend. Lee exclaimed. Till next time, when I challenge you to a marathon run around the village. And wait, bushy brows. Naruto called back, waving at him till he was out of sight. Once Lee was gone, Naruto headed into the academy, hands in his pockets and a smile on his face. However, he dipped his head so that his eyes became overshadowed, masking the true emotions reflected in them. It was dropping his usual cool and happy mask partially that allowed him this breather. Boy. What a night. Thank the Kyuubi for his rapid healing powers, Naruto thought, moving his right shoulder a bit to adjust the tension. Must have been one hell of a jutsu. But I'm just glad that I finally have those old bastards off of my case. Permanently. His fur collar black jacket with red flame patterns shifted as he pulled his right hand out of his pocket, pulling out a kunai and tossing it so that he held onto the blade and glanced down at the handle. There, he saw the familiar seals of the secret new jutsu and technique he had developed and had used on several occasions, but only for emergencies. He furrowed his brow and shrugged, pocketing the weapon back into his orange pants pocket. He adjusted his arms again, his jacket parting slightly down the zip area to reveal an athletic chest and torso pressed up against the tight netting of his mesh shirt. "I just want to get this thing over with. Goy." After working his way through corridor after corridor, he eventually arrived at his homeroom and entered. Shaking his head, he looked up to see that the classroom was partially filled with students, all of them sitting or standing around, talking to others. A few eyes gazed at him as he entered the room, and he took his seat in the center, second row. He groaned and sat down, rubbing his forehead. "Ugh. Should have slept in." "You're telling me? You look awful," another voice spoke up from beside the seated blonde. He looked to his left to see one Shikamaru Nara looking at him with a raised eyebrow, fingers laced where he sat propped up, obviously having tried to doze off before. Naruto blinked as he looked at him, reaffirming his usual mask of deceit and smiling. "Well, I'm not exactly the type to wear makeup, aren't I?" Naruto replied to his earlier comment. "It's not like you're looking any better though." "Duh, I always look like this." Shikamaru replied, running a hand through his pineapple-shaped hair, scruffing it up a bit close to the ponytail. "It's too troublesome trying to do your hair in the morning." "Spare me a moment," Naruto said with equal exhaustion, while holding up his right arm to show him the bandages around his arm. "I just got up after one hell of a training session last night. It was a real mess, I tell ya." Shikamaru shared the bandages at a glance before looking up at Naruto's eyes. "You know, if you spent more time studying than training and honing in on your techniques, then perhaps you might stand a better chance of balancing out your practical and literary scores a bit and pass with at least dull colors." "Oh yeah, well you're not doing too hot yourself, buddy," Naruto rebutted in a cocky tone. "Last I checked you were failing in both practical and examination." "TSK. Whatever," Shikamaru said, resting his chin on folded arms and lying out on the desk in front of him. "It's too much of a drag. I say go with the flow, get the best with what you got, and try scoring high. Well. If you can bother to reach high." "My god." Naruto thought, giving Shikamaru a highly animated look of sympathy and disbelief. I have never met anyone with a level of motivation as low as Shikamaru, and on top of that, 100% laziness. "How do you think you did in yesterday's written examination?" Shikamaru asked, surprisingly still awake where he sat, with his arms and head on the table. "Do you think you got a good mark?" "Oh, I'm sure you'll be surprised," Naruto exclaimed, resting his feet up on the desk and putting his hands behind his head. He let out a shy smile and smiled up at the ceiling. "I just want to become a genin today. That's all I've got written down on my schedule." "Same here," Shikamaru barely replied, earning a tick mark to appear on Naruto's head. "What a slacker." For the next half an hour, students filed into the class one by one till the entire room was filled and every single seat was occupied. Shortly after the bell rang, Iruka Yamino himself stepped into the classroom, carrying with him a folder containing the class's results. With a smile on his face, he placed them out on his desk and then turned to the class, standing before them in front of the blackboard. "Morning class." The young Chunin exclaimed, clearing his throat and adjusting his headband a little. "I'm pleased to announce that, upon checking and marking all your exams myself last night, I have determined from the results that all of you have passed with flying colors. Except for Naruto." A smart elect classmate, obviously Kiba's voice from what Naruto could tell, called out. "Dead last to the end, am I right?" This got quite a few laughs from the rest of the students, with Naruto furrowing his brow and glaring daggers at a group of them to his right, who immediately shut up at the sight of him. The way Naruto angled and projected his glare caused them to shake a little at the look in his eye. "Actually, Kiba," Iruka said, rubbing his forehead with the back of his left hand. "Naruto, in spite of his efforts over the years, has given him only, excuse me, satisfactory marks in the written exam. I passed it with full marks." There was a deathly silence, and Naruto grinned and glanced over at Shikamaru with a cocky look on his face. The Nara boy looked back at him and nodded, his expression easily showing his defeat. "No way. Not in this lifetime. How can the dead last in the class get full marks? He's a loser. A loser doesn't score that high." "Well, guess again kids," Iruka replied, sharing a small grin with Naruto and glancing up at the rows of students. "Apparently, Naruto has a lot of hidden potential in him. I expected a lot from him this year and, obviously, from this written exam, he surprised even me with his results. Geniuses aren't just descendants from great clans. All of you have to learn that with hard work and studying, you can achieve greater than even a well-respected member of a genius family. Not to mention it is much more fun not training a genius," a quote I believed one of the three great Sannin used. He gave Naruto the thumbs up, who returned it before turning towards the rows behind him. Seeing all eyes on him, the spiky-haired blonde flipped them all the finger before turning around and reaffirming his attention on Iruka. "My congratulations to you all," Iruka exclaimed, "you've all done very well. I am proud to call you my students." He then turned towards the board behind him and pulled out a piece of chalk. "But the exams are not over yet. Now that the written exam has been completed, it is time to commence with the practical exam, and that means performing the basic techniques and skills that a ninja is required in the field in order to survive." Iruka wrote on the board. "Practical exams. First stage Henge jutsu." Nodding, Iruka turned around and smiled. "If I have taught you well and you all have practiced very hard, you should perform adequately. Now if you will all." Suddenly, the door flung open and a familiar pale pink-haired Chunin dashed in, panting slightly. "Oh. Sorry I'm late, Iruka. I got held back by Asuma." The students watched as Mizuki joined Iruka at the front and the two Chunin shook hands. "That's quite alright, Mizuki, we were just getting started." "Great." The Chunin then leaned in, holding up a hand to Iruka's ear and whispered. "So. How is Naruto doing?" "Fairly well actually, he passed with full marks on tactics, mathematics, literature, history and techniques," Iruka replied back before stepping forward and facing the class. He just missed a rather surprised and annoyed look from his fellow Chunin, but he hid it away quickly so as not to arouse suspicion. However, this look was not missed by Naruto, who was at this moment glaring at the other sensei whom he did not take any liking towards. "Okay class, now that Mizuki has joined us, it is time to commence with the first stage. I would like you all to line up in front of me from left to right, and when I come up to each of you, I want you to perform a standard Henge jutsu for me," Iruka said, using his pen to draw out an invisible line in front of him. Quickly, the students filed out of their rows and down to the front, lining up side by side at arm's length from each other across the floor. A lot of them were still throwing disapproving looks at Naruto, especially Kiba, Ino and several other students. The boy ignored them and took his place between Choji and Shikamaru. The Akimichi boy smiled at him and they both put their fists together as a sign of respect. "Nice going there, Naruto," Choji exclaimed. "You too, Choji," the young male replied. "Okay, first up, Shino Aburam," Iruka said to himself, starting at the end where the boy stood quietly with his hands in his pockets. The Chunin went down the line to one student at a time, with Mizuki watching from the sidelines. Iruka watched as each student performed the technique, marking them for quality and correctness. He would often advise the students one after another to put the pouch on the right side or trim the hair a little or fix the scar up. Other than a few of these, a lot of the students performed them perfectly, even Naruto when he was asked to perform it. He then even performed a reward technique at the end where he into a naked female with blonde hair and whiskers, knocking out both Iruka and Mizuki from blood loss, as well as several of the boys in the class. Postponing the exam for extra 10 minutes as the fallen took some time to recover. Eventually, they were all back on their feet and could continue. Once the last of the students had performed the Henge technique, Iruka then rubbed off of the board and wrote in. Second stage replacement jutsu. Iruka turned and grinned at his students. "Alright class, the next test is to see if you can all perform a standard replacement. As you know, this technique can be life-saving in the heat of battle and can also dub in an inanimate object to take your place when you are being attacked or want to avoid being attacked. So, remain as you are and I will come around to each of you." And the process restarted, the students performing the replacement technique one at a time, grabbing whatever object was closest to them and replacing their physical selves with that object. On a majority of the techniques, the students replaced themselves with sharpeners, staples, chairs, and even Sasuke replaced his body with Iruka's desk. Eventually, it came down to Naruto and the boy stepped forward. Iruka nodded to him from the get-go, while a lot of the students watched with smug grins on their faces to see if the dead last could pull off another lucky one. "The FT. What a joke," Ino muttered to Kiba. "No one can do better than Sasuke-kun. I bet you the loser will screw it up." "I'll bet 10 on that," Kiba replied. Naruto smirked, hearing the murmuring flow over the students, and slapped his hands together into a single hand sign. Somewhere along the line of students, a familiar purple-haired girl, who was twiddling her fingers together nervously, smiled as she watched her Naruto prepare to perform the technique. "Come on Naruto-kun. You can do it," she thought. Suddenly, Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke, just like every other student before him, and in his place stood an inanimate object. Well, if you could call it an object. Sitting, or rather, standing in Naruto's place, head down and an orange book flipped open in his hand, stared upwards at a rather startled and befuddled Kakashi Haddock. As the smoke cleared, the students and teachers who had watched Naruto perform the technique looked on with rather shocked expressions as the Jonin blinked and looked around him. "What the? This isn't my lounge room." It took him a while to figure out what had happened. When he did, he looked up in front of him and at Iruka. "Darn, this is the third time this month," he grumbled. Turning on his heel, the Jonin looked back down at his book and walked out of the classroom, reading to himself in audible mumbles. "Now let's see." Kakashi takes the man's hand gently into hers and says with powerful passion. "Make love to me baby, like there's no tomorrow." The door slammed shut as Kakashi departed, leaving a rather shocked class in his wake. "Tee hee." A voice exclaimed from above, causing everyone to look up to see Naruto sitting up in the railing above the classroom, grinning down at all of them. "I was actually aiming for his book, but I ended up grabbing him by accident." Iruka blinked and then smiled, whereas the students were just staring at him in disbelief, mouths agape. "Well. It was impressive enough, Naruto. Come on down." The Chunin exclaimed, and Naruto punctually joined the rest of his students on the ground. Ino blinked as she watched Naruto file back into the line. Wow. That was actually pretty impressive. Kiba, who was standing beside her, grumbled and crossed his arms, Akamaru whining a little at his master's displeasure. "Speak for yourself." The scruffy-haired boy replied, looking away and gritting his teeth. "Great, I can't believe that Naruto actually outdid me in both stages. Grrr. How did he get so good?" Once all the students had performed their replacement techniques, Iruka then moved into the third stage, asking all the students to step outside onto the training field. The dusty earth promised some action as the students lined up to stand just outside of a white line, drawn to form a large rectangle with lengths of 100 × 50 meters. They watched as Iruka and Mizuki took up positions in front of the class side by side, with Iruka pulling out his clipboard and taking a couple of notes down, before looking back up at his students. "Okay, now it's time for us to commence the third stage of the exam. Close combat," Iruka stated, gesturing towards Mizuki next to him. "Each of you will take turns in fighting against Mizuki here. Now don't be put off because he's a Chunin, it's just to test how fair you'd be if you were to encounter an enemy ninja who is stronger than you. In this part of the exam, you are to only use taijutsu or the use of ninjutsu and taijutsu is prohibited, as well as the use of shuriken and kunai. Killing is also prohibited, and each match will end either in forfeit time or if the combatant is knocked out cold or is unable to battle." Mizuki nodded his head. "Alright. So who's going to be my first opponent?" This was a question answered in order by name, as a student was called up alphabetically to fight against Mizuki. Everyone fared very well, save for those who lacked excessive taijutsu, but used the standard academy forms anyway. Sasuke did exceptionally well, so did Kiba, as per expertise, and Choji and a few others. Some of them were a bit less confident, such as Hinata and Sakura, and Ino got in their fair fights. It was when it came around to Naruto the students were eager to see what the so-called dead last, now nicknamed the lucky last, could cook up with this time. Everyone watched in curiosity as Naruto took to the field and stood across from Mizuki, arms at his sides and a smile on his face. Mizuki took a stance and smiled at the boy. "Come on Naruto, show me what you've got," the Chunin exclaimed. "Do your best, okay?" "TSK. Whatever," the boy replied, also taking a stance, right arm raised and his side slightly facing the Chunin, with his left arm held behind him. "Alright then," said, holding up his hand and dropping it down. "Begin." Mizuki smiled and charged at the boy, bumping up his strength, speed and skill level to a level he knew Naruto wouldn't be able to beat. He intended to have the boy fail miserably. Unfortunately, this was not to be the case. Naruto, seeing the focus of Mizuki centered on him, smirked and straightened himself, dropping his right arm. When the Chunin came in with a jab, the boy, with surprising agility and lightness, spun on his axis and, catching the fist kicked out with his right foot at his attacker's feet, knocking him off balance and tripping the man up as he stepped behind him with relative ease. Mizuki flipped forward and landed on his backside with a loud thud, causing some of the students to wince as the Chunin stared ahead of him in shock as Naruto stood behind him, smirking. Ino blinked. "Hey, what just happened?" "What was with that move?" Choji asked. "I've never seen Naruto move like that. Ever." "That grapple was flawless," Shino whispered, catching Kiba's attention, who was standing right beside him. "His taijutsu performance so far has been relaxed and calm. His movements came out in flow. Not hindrance at all." "Yeah but, I could barely see that." First Mizuki-sensei charged him, and then suddenly Naruto just moved around him, and then Mizuki was on the ground. "How can he move that fast?" Shino asked. The bug user hummed to him, replaying the clip in his mind, studying the boy's movements. "What the?" Mizuki looked behind him, seeing Naruto looking down at him with a smirk. "You know, you'd better watch where you're going, sensei," the blonde exclaimed with a grin. "You were careless and you tripped over your own feet." Iruka raised an eyebrow and smiled, finding Naruto's comments, though teasing, quite appropriate for the moment. Although that last move was pretty good. "Nicely played, Naruto." Mizuki gritted his teeth and got back to his feet, dusting himself down before turning back to Naruto, his anger replaced with a kind smile, an obviously forced one. "Nice move, Naruto. But let's see you do that again." The Chunin said, quickly taking a stance and launching, throwing combinations of punches and kicks at the boy in quick succession, using combos that surprised a lot of the students at their speed and strength. Mizuki was obviously opening up with all he had. Naruto, however, took it into stride. With his arms behind his back, he dodged, ducked and easily avoided all of Mizuki's attacks, moving with such grace and speed within such close proximity of his opponent that a lot of the academy students had to blink and rub their eyes to see if they weren't being deceived. The dead last of the group was actually faring well against the Chunin, who was fighting through bared teeth as he attempted to hit his mark. However, Naruto easily moved around his attacks and once again managed to get behind Mizuki. The Chunin gasped and looked around behind him from left to right, trying to look for his opponent whom he had lost in his forward attacks. Naruto kept behind him, back to back and moving in perfect sync with the Chunin, keeping out of sight with a smirk on his face. So far, he hadn't even thrown a punch yet and was conserving energy. It was when he jabbed his rear end out, knocking Mizuki forward that the defensive mark changed. The students were in utter disbelief as Naruto easily evaded all of the Chunin's attacks, which were becoming more ferocious with each swing. Even Sasuke was in shock as he watched the blonde enter Mizuki's range before quickly exiting, throwing the Chunin off his game. Everyone, from Sakura to Ino and to Shikamaru, was all the more surprised to hear Naruto laughing in enjoyment. He was literally dancing around his opponent. "Ale!" Naruto exclaimed, rushing forward and striking Mizuki with an elbow, winding the Chunin before striking him in the back, causing him to stumble forwards. Mizuki growled and spun back around, throwing another punch at Naruto, who suddenly phased out of sight, only to appear behind Mizuki, back to back again. The Chunin, fed up, spun around again and sent a knee up, only to have it blocked by another knee thrown by Naruto. They both separated, giving each other a certain distance before Mizuki charged again with a shout, with Naruto dropping into a stance this time. The Chunin didn't gain the needed distance in time when Naruto suddenly leapt at him through the air. Throwing his left arm back and over his head, the boy flicked his wrist a little, a blade emerging from his sleeve with a loud slice sound. Mizuki was running forwards when this occurred and was unable to double back in time when his small opponent suddenly landed on him front on, driving both his feet into Mizuki's chest, using his forward momentum to knock the Chunin falling back and, grabbing the side of his head with his right hand, then drove his left hand straight down for the pressure point at his neck. When Mizuki fell flat on his back to the ground, with Naruto on top of him, it was revealed that the boy held back on that last attack and was smirking down at the white-haired Chunin, with utter seriousness etched into his expression. Iruka saw what had happened and was rather befuddled that his best friend was beaten by an academy student. The rest of the students were also in utter shock, staring at Naruto as if he had just grown a second head. That may be the case however, as they were looking at a totally different and rather likable Naruto Uzumaki. "Uzumaki assassination technique complete," Naruto exclaimed, raising his hand away from Mizuki and retracting his blade. "I win." Mizuki stared up at Naruto wide-eyed and dripping with sweat, absolutely shocked to realize that he was almost killed by the Kyuubi's host, the demon, the so-called dead last, an academy student. The first he felt was a grave numbness before he was overcome by anger and annoyance. Naruto grinned at him one last time before back-flipping off of the Chunin, landing perfectly and soundlessly. Adjusting his jacket, the boy then turned away and walked back into the crowd of students, where he was congratulated by a still shocked Choji and Shikamaru, as well as a silent nod shared between him and Kiba. Not bad for a dead last. Not bad for an underdog. They both grinned and turned back to Iruka, who was just checking the marks and keeping score. Once everyone was done with the sparring, they were then led back inside by a very flustered Mizuki and a rather satisfied Iruka. He never expected this part to have gone so smoothly and was expecting the last and final stage to go on just as well. After all the students and senseis filed into the classroom, Iruka sat down at his desk and pulled up another chair for Mizuki, who sat down in it, a frown still etched out on his expression. Iruka ignored his blatant grumbling about being bested by a student and just went on with sorting the marks. Double-checking everyone won, Iruka proceeded with the final stage, riding up onto the board. Third final stage clone jutsu. With a smile, he spun around, tossing the chalk away with disregard. "Alright class. It's time for the last part of the exam and perhaps one of the easiest tests of the lot. You will be asked to perform a basic clone jutsu technique, the one we've been practicing for the entirety of the final term. I expect all of you to create an exact, solid duplicate of yourself with the jutsu. So I'll ask each of you to come up front one by one and perform it in front of the class." One by one he called each student up for the last time, asking each of them to perform a clone jutsu. Each of them performed basic ones, but those who possessed different abilities created clones based on them, such as Shino, who created a bug clone, and Ami, who created an earth clone. Regardless, every student performed well, including Naruto, who had yet another interesting show to display. When he was called up, he placed his hands together in a different hand sign compared to the other students. Iruka was about to correct him, but Naruto's jutsu was already active. Multi-shadow, clone jutsu. Naruto exclaimed. In a series of blinding puffs of smoke that filled up the entire classroom, the students and the jutsu user himself were joined by at least 100 more Narutos. They took up all the remaining space in the classroom, basically suffocating everyone with the amount of clones there were. All the Narutos shouted at each other and pushed each other aside for more room, befuddling an already perplexed class and a rather shocked Iruka to see the number of clones the boy had managed to create. The real Naruto gave Iruka the thumbs up but was distracted from a grin when several of his clones bumped into him. Grumbling, Naruto shoved back, only to start a fight between them. Iruka watched as the 5 Narutos out of the 100 brawled, and so did the other students, who crowded in their seats to try and get a better look. Hey. Get off of me. Quit pushing. Stop touching me. Get away from me, Naruto. Hey. What did I do? No, not you. Him. Me. Yes. No, not you, him. But I'm him. And you're me, okay I get it. Shove off already. That's it, buddy. The fighting and loud arguments continued, which quickly added more to Mizuki's already pounding headache and Iruka's thinned-out patience. It was only when the brown-haired Chunin got a little fed up with the fight that he broke it up. Alright Naruto, excellent work with the jutsu, but you're going to have to work out your little tussle with your clones another time, the scar-faced ninja exclaimed, pushing a couple of the Narutos away and helping the real one up. He smiled at the bruised-up one and nodded to him. But great job though, you passed. Ah. Really Naruto exclaimed, quickly getting to his feet. Awesome. Thanks, Iruka-sensei. Not to worry. The real Naruto dispelled all his clones and, giving Iruka a complete thumbs up, headed back to his seat to join the other students, most of them still astounded by the amount of Narutos there had been. By this time, a lot of those students who had belittled Naruto and called him a dead last were now either seriously rethinking their opinions on him or had set aside their claims of him being a loser. Iruka smiled as he saw Naruto get congratulations from a couple of the other students sitting around him. Perhaps this was turning into a great day after all. Chapter 3. Finishing personal business. Later that afternoon. Ichiraku's ramen bar. Naruto was once again downing his third bowl of ramen at his favorite stand in the village, enjoying its delectability while in the company of his sensei, Iruka, who had joined him on his celebrative visit to the most likely place you would find the blonde and was also enjoying a bowl of his own. Naruto said that he would pay for all their bowls, saying that it was definitely his day of the week, the highlight of his entire life so far. Boy this is great. Naruto exclaimed, pulling his head back and swallowing the broth in one gulp. Slapping it down with his chopsticks and spoon, let out a warm sigh, his breath laced with the scent of ramen. The young male then grinned up at Iruka. I'm finally a genin. You sure are, Naruto, Iruka exclaimed, taking some noodles and popping them in his mouth. He slurped it up quickly, chewed and swallowed, then nodded to the boy with pride in his eyes. I've never been happier to call you my student. Of course, I've always been proud to call you my student. Naruto received another serving of ramen from AM, who smiled happily at him and nodded. Congratulations, Naruto-kun. Thanks AM-chan. Naruto replied, once again gorging himself on more of the delicious noodle soup. Iruka patted Naruto on the back, giving him all of the praises he deserved, while AM and her father smiled at him from the sidelines. You know, now that you're a genin and all. Things are going to be a lot different from now on, Iruka stated. Oh yeah? Naruto looked up at the scarred Chunin. Like what? Well. For starters, I'm no longer going to be your teacher. You'll soon have a new teacher to boss you around and be your guide. I guess I can deal with that. Although, Naruto smiled up at him. I'll always call you sensei. Heh. Iruka replied with a grin, glancing down at his bowl and mixing the broth a little. You'll be on a team with 2 other of your fellow classmates and be led by a jonin, who you will call your sensei. On this new team, you will have to work as a team to train together, work together, fight together, and get along with each other. On this team, you will undertake missions. It will be my bread and butter, Iruka-sensei, I know, the newly made genin looked upwards ahead of him, smiling all the while. I'm familiar with how the ninja system works. After all, I was taught by a number of great teachers. Including you. Iruka looked at the boy again when he said this, blinking in surprise. He then smiled, his eyes shimmering in the honor of being called a great teacher by perhaps the lowliest of all of his students. The man punched him lightly in the shoulder. So. I'm the best, eh? Who else have you had as your sensei besides me? Well, there was Renan. He taught me a couple of cool techniques and taught me a lot about the world outside. There was also Bachan. Although she was drunk most of the time. Still, she had a lot of interesting things to say, Naruto said with a shrug. Anko-sensei was a great teacher too, in spite of her unique training methods and wake-up calls, like sneaking snacks into my bed and forcing me onto the Anbu shuriken range to collect kunai and other weapons while it was still in use. But she was very kind to me. Like you. And she felt the same way as me. Alone, an outcast. A failure. But then, I've had a lot of other experiences with this kind of thing. His teacher's smile fell when he said the last bits and Iruka turned away with a quick intake and exhale of breath. Focusing his attention back on his ramen, the Chunin went on to eat along with the boy for another minute more before re-establishing conversation standards. You'll have a chance to make friends. You'll no longer be alone. It seems for the best anyway. Naruto replied in a shallow voice. I've always been alone, rejected, tossed away. Etc. Konoha despises me more than Madara-cha. You can thank the village elders for encouraging support of the villagers' hatred of me. Iruka smirked. TSK. Well, I doubt they will be a problem now. Huh? Why's that? Naruto asked, looking up at his sensei through cold, unrestrained eyes, indicating he had removed his mask of happiness. Well, due to a sudden and unexpected misfortune, the estate they were staying at was hit by an avalanche of rubble. The whole cliffside the estate was built into caved in on them last night, Iruka stated. Gucci, who was listening in, nodded his head, turning away from his pot of boiling broth to look at the pair. Yeah, and I heard a lot of their guards were caught up in it as well. Poor fellas. You can say that again, Iruka said, shaking his head. Too bad they had to be there that night. Too bad they got caught up in the wake of that avalanche, you mean, Naruto added absent-mindedly without a hint of emotion, looking back at his ramen and taking his cup of green tea into his hands. Blowing on it, he then took a sip. They all had it coming. Iruka looked down at the boy startled, even Tucci and AM looked at the boy in shock at the way he said it. Naruto. How can you say that? Easy. I hold no regrets or sympathy and speak my mind without the need for such petty withholdings. After all, we're talking about 3 pro-war politicians who have caused nothing but trouble for this village. Iruka glared at him while Tucci and AM just watched. Naruto. That's treason against the village to talk like that. Danzo and the village elders cared for nothing more than this village's well-being. They protected it with their lives. You think so, huh? Naruto replied in monotone, looking up at Iruka with his stoic unmasked face. The look surprised the Chunin greatly and he eased away at the look of discoloration and death he could see in his eyes. Does that include trying to overthrow the Hokage many times before, as a lot of the rumors around the village have suggested? Danzo went against Old Man Third many times before, not only recruiting enemies of our village to help overthrow him, but also encouraging revolts within our own nation and using other conflicts to help gain power. He and the elders also used the excuse of the demon spawn to encourage hatred towards me and to try and kill me, as well as to enforce their campaign against the Hokage for his seat and retirement. Iruka remained silent for a moment, giving Naruto a considerate stare and to try and find an argument behind his statements. However, as it turned out, he couldn't find any. Naruto fed and turned back to his ramen. That's what I thought. Good riddance to bad apples. How do you know so much about this? Iruka asked, returning to a normal seated position. About them. And what they've done. That's a rather empty question, it's already been answered, Naruto replied coldly. They've practically told everyone to stay away from me and I tried to find out who was the cause for the villagers' deep hatred and loathing of me. The elders intended to turn me into a weapon of Konoha by isolating me and enraging me, to not only become strong enough to be a threat against others, but to turn people's nightmares into a reality. They wanted to show them what kind of demon I was. Naruto spat to the side in disgust. It's rather ironic, wouldn't you say? AM looked at Naruto with sadness, leaning over a bit and laying a hand on his spiky hair. The boy felt her gentle grasp and moved into it, getting all the warmth he could from this gesture of sympathy. Tucci just stood back, looking on, as well as Iruka. I learned to live alone, that's for sure, Naruto said coldly. I scavenged off the streets, dealt with bullies and lived in the alleys. It was hell. My only way of reprisal was pulling pranks to get people's attention, while at the same time keeping in the dark whenever those who intended to hurt me hunted me down. Iruka looked up at AM and Tucci, who looked at him in silence, before they all looked back at Naruto and neared him to comfort him. AM's hand on his shoulder was soon joined by Iruka's, who patted Naruto on the back as he cried dry tears under the shadows of his lowered head. Things will change, Naruto-kun, AM spoke. You don't have to beat yourself up anymore. Just be strong. Iruka said. Naruto looked up at them, his dull blue eyes gaining a bit of light as he met the smile of those closest to him. These three, Tuchi and Iruka, were some of the only people he could truly trust, and no one else. The boy looked upon them with silence and lack of any emotion before his thoughts and feelings gathered and he smiled up at them in return. "Thank you." He moved his knuckles up and rubbed it against his headband plate, the forehead protector gleaming in the light of the store. Naruto grinned happily at them. "I will protect all of them to preserve their happiness, even if it costs me my life." That night. Stay away from me." A terrified cry sounded over the forests as one white-haired and pale-faced Mizuki retreated through the trees. Leaping from branch to branch, he attempted to cover a greater distance at a faster pace to escape the assassin pursuing him. Looking back, he could see the masked culprit chasing him. Dressed in a black trench coat with a hood and wearing a red and white mask of unidentifiable origins or identity, he pursued the Chunin without restraint. This caused the Chunin to grit his teeth in fear and increase his speed. Reaching into his pouch, the Chun spun around briefly and with a good arm, threw 5 or so balls wrapped in sealed paper. Upon impact of a tree branch he had just passed by, the balls exploded into clouds of blinding flashes and smoke, blinding the pursuer. Mizuki, hoping this would hold him off, continued with all due haste through the trees. He directed his attention towards the outer wall of Konohagakure, intent on making it to the nearest entrance and escape. Wrapped around him, Mizuki was all set and ready to leave. He carried a small backpack with enough supplies to last him a week's journey, and on top of that a pair of windmill shuriken for defensive purposes. He also carried a large scroll at his side, strapped to him by a belt. It was a forbidden scroll he had managed to pinch from the Hokage's office, one of a large collection he knew held untold secrets that would be useful to him. "I don't need this," he yelled in his head. "I don't need this stinking village. Konohagakure has been nothing but trouble for me. I've had it. Once I get out of here, I'm going to." Huh. He stopped on the branch he was on and looked up, eyes widening as he saw the assassin in the black cloak glaring down at him from a branch above. His coat blew in the wind and he barely moved as the tree creaked slightly. Mizuki stepped back, horrified. "What? How the hell did he get in front of me?" Mizuki shouted. The assassin stepped forward, throwing his arms forward and spreading them out a little, extending his fingers and flicking his wrists, a set of kunai appearing between the fingers in both hands. The kunai appeared with simultaneous zip sounds, their blades flashing and the seals on their handles giving them identification. "I blinded him with smoke and flash pellets. How can he still be chasing me?" The assassin crossed his arms over his face, continuing to glare the man down through the slits in his mask. Mizuki gritted his teeth and reached onto his back, slapping a tag onto one of his massive windmill shurikens and gripping its throwing ring. "Fine." He growled. "You want to play? Take this." With a roar of anger, the man stepped forward and threw the shuriken from his back, the blade spinning rapidly through the air, chopping through the wind loudly as it shot at its target. The assassin sidestepped slightly on the branch, throwing one of his readied knives at Mizuki, who moved his head away just barely in time, still grinning confidently. At the same time, the giant shuriken thrown at the assassin struck the branch just inches away from him, slicing straight through it and causing a chain reaction. As the branch began to fall, the seal on the shuriken flashed once before suddenly going off in a massive explosion. The blast caught the assassin inside of its fiery radius and took a chunk out of the tree it detonated close to. Mizuki watched in awe as the explosion consumed the assassin and grinned, holding up a clenched fist. "Ha. Gone down in flames. It's a fitting end for a demon." His laughter was cut short though when he felt something cold and made of steel press up against the side of his neck and he froze. Eyes wide and suddenly, with sweat dripping down his face, he glanced behind him slightly in fear. Through his peripherals, he saw in a mix of shock and terror, the masked shinobi that had been pursuing him, standing right behind him. "Impossible." Mizuki growled. I saw you die. You couldn't have escaped that blast in time. You were moving too slow." It was after glaring at the unmoving and stoic assassin for a few seconds longer did Mizuki eventually see how the masked attacker had done it. His eyes widened in shock when he saw the markings on the kunai the assassin held in his hand. Though they were a bit fuzzy in memory, there was no mistaking it. He recognized it from the markings of the kunai he saw in the Hokage's office in the sealed cabinet, only with a couple more seals added onto it that differed it from that particular weapon. But he recognized the others. "No way. That's..." He looked up into the slits of the mask, and even though the mask obscured the face completely, through the eye slots, Mizuki could see the shimmering of bright blue eyes, and the way they were glaring at him was unheated. Mizuki gulped and turned around, sweating profoundly at this point. "Heh. I never thought this day would ever come. Where I would be beaten by the reincarnation of Konoha's yellow flash." He closed his eyes. What a way to go out. In the Hokage's office, Sarutobi was standing by the center window that sat right behind his desk. From here, he could be seen looking out over the village of Konohagakure, hands behind his back and his pipe in his mouth. Although, at most times there would be a smile of pride gracing his lips as he stared over the rooftops of the village, but at this moment there was a frown of fatigue and discouragement etched on his lips as he stood there gazing at the night sky. Not too long ago, he was informed that the forbidden scroll of the fourth had been stolen from his office and into the night. All the Chunin and Jonin available had been alerted of this and were dispatched into the streets of Konoha and all around it in search of the scroll and the perpetrator responsible. The village was on high alert, now in search of a thief and possible traitor. For half an hour the search had been in progress and the Hokage was beginning to worry for the worst. It was until he heard a silent clatter behind him and, without turning around, closed his eyes and let out a sigh. "So the perpetrator has been dealt with, I presume?" the third asked, sensing the mysterious presence behind him joining the noise. He turned around slightly, looking out of the corner of his eyes to see a masked short figure wearing black propping the scroll against the desk placidly and looking up at the Hokage silently. Sarutobi hummed satisfactorily to himself before turning back towards the window. "Thank you very much." The short figure bowed slightly and turned, ready to exit out the window and out of the office before any of the Chunin showed up. However, before he could leave, the Hokage spoke up again, this time with a smile on his face. "It wasn't your first taste of delivering justice at night, now was it, Naruto?" The figure stopped immediately in his place, though maintained his position of movement on the windowsill. Sarutobi turned to him, still smiling and breathing on his pipe. Though, neither of them moved from there. "You think I wouldn't know?" The assassin sighed, but didn't move, as he replied. "Nothing escapes your wise old eyes, Oji-san. Guess I should try harder to make it so." The boy assassin replied in an exhausted monotone voice. "But you can't always deal justice this way, Naruto," the Hokage spoke up again, this time a bit more seriously. "You're still young, you've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't do stuff that will get you into trouble and possibly get you killed if you're not careful. Tread carefully, and if there are any more problems, just ask for help from friends, or even me. And I'll try to resolve them." "I know," Naruto replied, looking over his shoulder. "But as strange as it seems, I like it this way." "A lot of people feel the same way sometimes and wish they could do what you can do," Sarutobi stated. "But try talking about it instead, use your voice to resolve conflicts instead of violence. Words can be even sharper than kunai. You of all people know that better than anyone else." "But my justice isn't just for the betterment of myself," the boy continued. "It's for the well-being and preservation of all of Konoha. Even though nobody knows it's me, I will do it just so that the people can live on and perhaps realize something through these acts. But then again, if it's to protect them, then I'm willing to lay down my life for them. For you, for Iruka-sensei, for Ayamentuchi, for Iro-senin. Even for those who hate me." Sarutobi's smile grew back into focus at this. "Spoken like a true Hokage," the old man exclaimed quietly. "You're a lot like your father and mother." "Heh. So Iro-senin says." There was silence for the next minute until the third spoke again, removing the pipe from his mouth and breathing out deeply. "You've earned yourself a lot of credit for returning the scroll to me, Naruto," the Hokage stated. "But, even though your actions last night were just and I'm sure a lot of people would praise you for it, you still killed 3 Konoha elders and officials and killed over a dozen of our village's ninja. Brood and the officials were corrupt. Present this in a case with their history of service and direction of allegiance, and I'm sure that'd pass in our court," Naruto replied. "Just cover it up. I doubt anyone would miss them. I was going to deal with Danzo anyway and perhaps put the other elders in their places for all their treatment of you and charge them for insubordination and other shinobi matters," the Hokage stated, smiling slightly. "But I guess it doesn't matter anymore. Just be careful from now on, Naruto, and take care." His words fell on ears, but Naruto had left the moment he finished. Sarutobi just shrugged it off, knowing that this was the boy's way of showing he understood. Chapter 4. Unexpected Occurrences. Early the next morning. Naruto was briskly training in a clearing outside of the residential area, throwing various combinations of punches and kicks and shifting through his taijutsu forms. He had used this field many times before and would use them again if he had to continue to train and get stronger, but for now, he was just using this time to blow off a little steam. The young boy growled as he gave it his all and put effort into making all his stances and attacks correct. Thrust, knee, jab, punch. Hook, elbow, elbow, return. Low kick, spin, low kick. Upper kick. Don't lean in, you're off balance. Kick. Kick, downward elbow. Punch. Punch. Hook, uppercut, uppercut, jab. Naruto thought vigorously, his breaths coming out in long, controlled breaths. He shifted through another style of taijutsu, his punches and kicks becoming more vigorous. "Come on." Naruto growled, sweat pouring from his face as he fought against the weights with enhanced gravity seals straining down on his body. It restricted him, made him work, and that's how he liked it. "I will." Not. Give up. He shouted, punching vigorously, causing sweat to fly off of his arm. Wearing nothing but his pants and his headband meant that people could literally see the sweat running down his body, as well as several recently healed deep scars in his body, showing just how far the boy had gotten in fights and training. Not to mention personal vendettas. Flip. He shouted, kicking off the ground and backflipping through the air, opening up and sending roundhouse and spin kicks in midair, creating loud whooshing sounds as his feet cut through the air. He landed solidly, continuing his combos as his fighting became more diverse and erratic. He then leapt into the air once again, flipping several times while curled up into a ball, before opening up and coming down with a right downward kick. Uzumaki spinning axe kick. Naruto shouted, his heel connecting with the ground. Due to the extra chakra he had pumped into it, the kick had more of an effect than first thought. The moment his attack connected, the ground slit and began to crack, before caving in on itself and collapsing across the clearing for about 15 meters in every direction. The dust rose and settled, leaving Naruto still standing in that position of execution and contact. Panting from 3 hours of workout on just plain physical enduring to jutsu, the boy nodded his head and wiped his face off of sweat before reassessing a proper standing position and calling it quits. Knowing he had an academy to attend in an hour or so, Naruto walked over to the nearby tree he had deposited his clothes and slipped them on. Leaving his black fur-collared jacket unzipped, exposing his chiseled stomach fresh from workout, and putting the large scroll he carried back around him, he then headed off on his merry way. While Naruto was walking through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, he suddenly sensed a familiar presence nearby, but continued walking. He knew this routine, and it was getting quite tiresome having to fight for his life at this point. Closing his eyes, he shook his head with a smile when he heard the familiar hissing sound approaching his sharpened ears. As he continued walking on, his back was turned to the side of 5 large snakes, all of them pythons, following him close behind, keeping to the shadows. Naruto, sensing the presence close in on him, flicked the wrist on his right, his hidden blade emerging with a loud slice. Too late. The instant his assassin's blade appeared, the snake shot at him and in a blink of an eye, wrapped around him about a dozen times before beginning to constrict the air out of him. The boy staggered but could not move, his lungs emptying of all air as he felt the pressure of the snake's apply on him. Inch upon inch of thick pure muscle squeezed down on him. His bones creaked and his bloodstream clogged at the feeling of this incredible pressure. The boy glanced around, trying to find his opponent. Picking up something out of the corner of his senses, the boy visibly grinned before suddenly vanishing in a puff of white smoke. The woman that had attacked him gasped from her hiding place. Rats. A shadow clone. She suddenly picked up the sound of shuriken and spun around before quickly backflipping out of the alleyway. Where she once stood, now 4 shuriken landed impaled in the soft soil. The woman growled as she backflipped away, avoiding more and more shuriken falling from the sky and landing in places where she once stood before stopping, dropped in a fighting stance and skidding to a halt from her built-up momentum. She glared up just in time to see the single figure of the boy flying down at her from above. He cranked back his right arm, his blade once again appearing with a loud slicing sound, to which she became alert too and grinned. Throwing her left arm forward, she shouted. Ninja art. Hidden shadow snake hands. She threw her left arm forward and 4 snakes suddenly shot out of her arm, stretching to an amazing distance and striking Naruto at all 4 crucial points in his limbs, sending him flying straight into the side of a nearby building, where he became pinned. Anko had managed to hit him just as he was 2 meters away from her. Which was a really close call for the snake mistress. At least this meant they could continue. Anko grinned and, clenching her outstretched fist from its straightened fingers, the woman concentrated her chakra and yelled from where she crouched. Ninja art. Shadow python restriction. Suddenly, a python shot out of the ground right next to where Naruto was pinned and immediately began to coil around him, smashing in and out of the wall and wrapping the boy against it. The blonde growled in pain as he felt the snakes do their job of holding him down and glared at his grinning opponent, who licked her lips at the sight. My. I love it when my opponents play hard to get, she said in a rather suggestive voice. Naruto gritted his teeth briefly for a moment, a trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth before a grin spread across his lips. He vanished once again in a puff of smoke, causing Anko to blink in surprise. She smirked, looking down at the ground where she suddenly saw a crack. She detached her snake extensions from her arm and with the same one, raised her fist upwards and directed it down towards the earth. Nice try, kid. Unexpectedly, the ground behind her exploded in a shower of earth, debris and dust, and another Naruto emerged. The woman looked behind her in shock at the grinning boy and suddenly the ground in front of her exploded as a foot shot up at her. It collided with. She was then kicked in the back by the Naruto behind her, causing her to fall forwards and get hit a second time by a third Naruto that appeared in front of her, using the foot sticking out of the ground as extra leverage and sent a knee up into her face that sent her airborne. Uzumaki rising wind technique. Naruto shouted, a fourth clone jumping out from behind the one behind Naruto behind Anko and pushing off of his counterpart's back, leapt high into the air above Anko. The woman saw through squinted eyes and a blurred vision from a bruise suffered from the knee. The clone spun through the air above her before coming down at her with a downward kick. Uzumaki spinning axe kick. Anko smirked. Child's play. The blow connected with her forehead, and just as Anko's body began its dangerous descent, suddenly dematerialized to mud and clay, which Naruto found his leg now wrapped in. He growled in frustration as he and the mud hit the ground, the clones parting to make way for the supposed body of the target to hit the ground. Darn it. Naruto growled, trying to pull his leg free from the mud. The mud, then, in an unexpected twist, suddenly morphed into a nest of snakes. The mass of them then wrapped around Naruto's leg fully and began to overtake the boy they caught from head to toe. Naruto growled as he tried to free himself, but found it impossible. Ninja art. Hidden snake nest imprisonment, Anko exclaimed from the rooftop above as she watched her snakes begin to overcome the four clones. She watched with a grin as the shouting and struggling clones fought against the hundreds of snakes, but to no avail. Not bad brat, but I suggest more training with me to hone those sloppy skills they sabotaged for you at the academy. You can thank Mizuki for that, Naruto stated, sitting on the ledge of the roof right next to Anko as they watched the rather daunting show below. The clones fought off against a mass of snakes, one of them suddenly becoming overcome by snake bites and soon dispersing from the amount of venom injected. The blonde smirked as he glanced at her. But he's not going to be a problem anymore. So I've heard, Anko said through a grin, rounding on the boy with pride shining in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Gaki. You've finally taken matters into your own hands. Haven't I always? Naruto replied, looking out over the rooftops from their position on the building. The two of them relaxed back, putting their hands behind their heads and letting out sighs of content. I need to train more to reach your level, Anko-sensei. I haven't yet reached your level of expertise. Yet you were not only able to overcome a number of Root's best guards, but also kill Danzo in a head-to-head battle and a fully fledged Chunin stronger than even Iruka. Anko pointed out. But on those occasions, I not only carefully analyzed my situation and point of attack, but also calculated the best possible means of execution, Naruto continued, watching as the clouds overhead drifted by, the fight several stories below now over. Danzo was easy, because not only did I know how to fight a Sharingan, as well as him having his whole right side of his body damaged, I also got a little lucky. I had the opportunity to use my kunai gauntlet, which he had never faced before, the boy stated, holding up his left arm and rattling it. Mizuki was easy though. The Chunin who puts too much focus into his point of attack and is distracted by his opponent is more than likely to fall for deception. Like you said. What? I never said that, Anko looked at the boy. I said hard work and hard work can make you into a man. You must have picked that up from Jiraiya. Naruto chuckled. Yeah, I guess Hiro Sennin did mention something like that when he was teaching me about Jinjutsu. And yet, once again, you weren't listening to him. Partially. He really knows how to draw on. I like it quick and simple, much like Iruka-sensei. And what about me, Gaki? Anko asked, causing Naruto to look at her. She made a cute pout and batted her eyelashes at him. What about your oh-so-lovable Anko-chan? The shine of all of your sexual fantasies and adventures. Naruto blinked at her, taken aback with a rather horrified expression on his face. Please. Don't ever do that again. What? This? Anko asked, once again performing a cute pout. Yes. That. Alright, Anko exclaimed, looking back towards the sky. Don't get those white boxers with the orange and pink foxes on them into a knot. Yeesh. Naruto blushed at the reference towards his undergarments and cleared his throat, staring back up at the sky with sweat drops falling from his forehead. Sometimes I worry about how much you're spying on me. Can you blame me? It's the way I work. I was waiting for the perfect time to strike. Stalking my prey, watching its every move from the shadows, and waiting for its attention to slip up. That's my style. Anko exclaimed, pinching him in the arm. Ow. The two of them spent the next half an hour and more talking, sharing a packet of dango Anko had gotten earlier onwards and telling each other stories. They acted as though they were the best of friends, which they were, and Naruto, out of the majority of his dark and depressing life, found that he was enjoying himself. Anko too, who felt she could share anything with the young, newly appointed genin of Konohagakure. Speaking their mind, sharing each other's experiences, as well as being one with the same personality strands, meant that they could have fun together. Soon enough, they both had to go their separate ways, and while Naruto departed over his usual route across the rooftops, Anko slipped into the shadows and vanished in a puff of smoke, heading towards the Hokage's tower. Naruto arrived at the academy not too long afterwards, stopping by Nagasaki's dumpling bar to pick up a box of dango and pork buns to eat while walking. He pocketed the rest of it in its container as he entered the classroom, where he was met with the sight of the usual early birds, including one Shikamaru Nara, who only got up this early so he could get to school and sleep in class and not worry about anything else. Naruto shook his head and took his seat, letting his face fall slightly as he rested in his usual place. Sigh. Another day alone at the academy. Nothing else needs to be said, he thought. Feeling picky, he decided to pull out the packet of dango again and, letting it simmer on the desk in front of him, began gorging on the sweet delights one ball and bun at a time, savoring the tastes so as to pass the time. He got so indulged in his breakfast that he failed to notice Choji sneak by and grab one of the buns on his way, to which Naruto glared up at him for. But the way the blonde's cheeks were puffed up for already having food in his mouth made it difficult to take him seriously. Choji. Please and thank you. Oh. Sorry Naruto. Choji exclaimed, putting it back and looking back at him. Naruto, may I please have one of your delicious pork buns? Naruto smiled and nodded. Sure thing Choji. He exclaimed, watching Choji pick up the bun and walk off, giving Naruto the thumbs up. Delicious, the Akamichi mumbled through a full mouth. Naruto returned the thumbs up and went back to his meal. Naruto quietly continued his meal as one after another, students filed into the classroom. It was while he was busy saucing up one of the last of his dango sticks did he sense a surprising presence sit down beside him. He looked to his right and sitting beside him was none other than the famed Sasuke Uchiha. The raven-haired boy took a seat without any hesitation next to the blonde and then sat quietly staring ahead of him with his fingers laced together. The blonde genin just stared at the boy from where he sat, dango stick in hand and dripping with delectable sauce. Neither of them moved or engaged one another in conversation and Sasuke just sat there. Naruto scrunched his face up in confusion before looking back at his food and taking a bite from his dango, chomping the dumpling and swallowing it before glancing at the Uchiha. It was then, Sasuke glanced over at the blonde and nodded to him. Hey. Hey, Naruto said, completely weirded out at this point. He edged away a bit. What's the deal? What? Why are you sitting here? Naruto asked, looking around at all the other empty seats. There are plenty of other spare seats available. Why sit here? Sasuke shrugged. Does it matter? Naruto frowned. Guess not and returned to his dango and buns. Sasuke caught a whiff of the sauces and the steam and took a longer glance at the breakfast Naruto was having. After a few minutes of watching Naruto finish his dango, the Uchiha leaned over a bit and pointed out the last dango stick. Could I try that? Naruto nearly fell off of his seat when he heard this and looked at the boy. What was that? Could I try that last dango, please? Sasuke asked more politely. Okay, now either Naruto was tripping or he could swear Sasuke was asking him for something. Neither of them had ever spoken before and he knew the Uchiha to be highly arrogant as well as being a high mighty emo loner. But to have the famed Sasuke Uchiha of Iruka-sensei's class actually associating with him in this way, as well as sitting next to him, was a huge step that Naruto wasn't at all prepared for. Shocked, the blonde grabbed the last stick and handed it to him, to which Sasuke sniffed it before taking a bite out of one of the dumplings. Naruto watched through shock and awe as Sasuke swallowed and smiled an actual genuine smile. That's good, he exclaimed quietly before continuing to eat. Okay, I am totally freaking out right now, Naruto said, backing away in his seat a little. Why? Sasuke asked while chewing on the dango dumpling. Sasuke. Is something wrong with you? Naruto asked, raising an eyebrow. After 5 years of being in the same class together and we've never spoken, and all of a sudden you've managed to hold a few brief words with me for the last 5 minutes. So? You're starting to scare me. Naruto replied. Are you coming to me? Sasuke choked on his dango, coughing and slamming his fist into his chest when a piece of dango clogged his breathing canal. He managed to dislodge it and looked at Naruto with wide eyes. What? Because I'll know if you are. The Uchiha gritted his teeth and turned back to his dango, completely shrugging the statement off after the initial shock. Dope. Heh. That's better, Naruto replied, moving on to finish the last bun. I still think you're gay though. And I still think you're an idiot. The two of them turned to each other and smirked but then turned back to finish their food. It wasn't too long though till the pair of them was joined by a couple more faces. Just as Naruto was getting used to the quietness of his surroundings, he suddenly spotted a pink-haired girl and a blonde-haired girl standing right beside him and looked up. He had to restrain himself from blushing when he saw one Sakura Haruno glaring down at him and her friend Ino Yamanaka accompanying her. Sakura Haruno, the complete adoration and love of his life. She was simply a vision of beauty, bearing a smile beyond compare and eyes that shone like emeralds. The girl was a magnificent specimen, any man would say that, and he adored and prolonged the very sight of her for as long as possible. However, thanks to his past memories of pain, suffering, insecurity and rejection, he always hid his blushes and emotions of any indication of affection towards her under a second mask. He could not bear the thought of being rejected by her. Again. Then there was her friend Ino. She was just as much of a flower as Sakura was, and like Shikamaru and Choji, he had known the pair for a long time, ever since he met them when he was younger. But some strange twist in time broke them apart and Naruto rarely spoke to them again. He just continued to admire them from the shadows, hidden and safe, and where he felt the most serenity in the world. But whenever they brought the light over to him, he felt different. He felt happier. He smiled up at the pair, trying to suppress the blush of admiration. "Hey there, Sakura-chan. Ino-chan. What's up?" he asked. Ino, gathering up common courtesy and not wanting to make a scene, smiled and waved at the young male. "Hey there, Naruto," she replied. "Not much." Sakura smiled at Naruto too and waved. "Everything's great too. It's just." "Oh, right," the boy said, looking back down at his empty food carton and sighed. "Sasuke." He stood up and smiled towards the two girls again. "You can have this seat, I'll take my food somewhere else." Okay," Sakura replied, blinking. "Shove over, forehead." "He was offering it to me," Ino stated, doing a complete 180 in her attitude and pushed Sakura aside. However, the pink-haired Kunoichi wasn't going to give up without a fight and shoved back, both of them blocking Naruto's only way of exit and leaving him to watch the fight unfold in front of him. "No. I'm sitting here, Ino pig. Naruto was offering it to me." "Well. I'm not going to let you steal Sasuke-kun away from me. Move." "No. You get lost. I'm going to sit next to Sasuke-kun." "Like hell you are. Take a hike, pig. You could use the exercise." "Forehead." "Pig." "Billboard brow." "Swine." Naruto looked back down at Sasuke to see his reaction. The Uchiha just shrugged at him and went on staring ahead of him. The blonde sighed and placed his empty sauce-filled dumpling container back onto his desk and looked back at the girls, holding up both of his hands and grinned sheepishly at the two fighting girls who were now wrestling each other for the seat. Sakura-chan. Ino-chan. Do you mind if I could move while you two decide who gets to sit here?" "No. I'm sitting there." "Shove off." "Why don't you?" "No. You. Just disappear already." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Naruto mumbled, shaking his head and slapping his forehead protector. This is just like Anko and her mood swings, Iro-Senin with his perverted antics, and Bachan with her drunkenness. At this point, the whole class was now watching the catfight open up before them. Here the two girls were now pulling on each other's hair and grappling through tooth and nail. At this point, they've resulted in overpowering the other with all of their strength. And seriously, it was with all their strength. "Bet a life, forehead. Go find another guy. Sasuke-kun is mine." "Well, I don't see your name on him." "Bet lost." "Make me." It was then, Ino suddenly pushed Sakura forward, causing her to trip and to fall awkwardly on top of Naruto, both of them letting out yells of shock as they fell on top of Sasuke, who was conveniently leaning forward in his usual way, causing him to yell out in shock when he was suddenly pushed forward thanks to an extra weight on his back. The whole class, especially Ino, gasped at the sight they saw. Whether it was good or bad depends on the deliverer and the receiver. Of course, it was rather a peculiar situation. Sakura had conveniently been pushed on top of Naruto, causing both of their lips to collide in a rather weight-distributed kiss. At the same time, Naruto had fallen on top of Sasuke and in his haste had pushed the container of dango sauce onto Sasuke's part of the desk, so when the Uchiha was forced down by the extra weight, his face went splat into the sauce. Now the Uchiha was struggling for air but couldn't remove his face since Naruto and Sakura were on top of him, kissing in their awkward position. Ino giggled slightly at the looks of shock on Naruto and Sakura's faces and how a deep blush seemed to grow on Sakura's cheeks. In the background, the students of the class were slack-jawed at the same time a certain purple-haired Hyuga was fuming. "As she kissed my Naruto-kun." In spite of her usual shyness, insecurity and lack of confidence, Hinata's personality was suddenly pushed aside by an inner persona she never knew she had, and her face was scrunched up with a look of outrage and jealousy no one had ever seen before. Shino, whom she was sitting next to, eased away with wet eyes as he watched the steam rising from the Hyuga's head. "That bitch." Meanwhile, Sasuke was still face down in the sauce and was only able to edge his nostrils up a bit to get some much-needed oxygen. "Please. Of. Me." Sasuke mumbled. What in God's name are they doing? Making out. Sakura, of course, was in a deep state of shock and her mind was trying to process what had just happened. The first thing she knew, she was falling, and the next thing she knew, she found herself with her lips pressed up against Naruto's, who had an equally wide-eyed look staring back at her. But as the seconds ticked by and she tried to move, she eventually found herself to be enjoying this and her eyes became half-lidded and a blush streaked across her lips. Hey. This isn't half bad. She thought, moaning a little and closing her eyes. Naruto. His lips. They are. So warm. Naruto was also having 1,001 thoughts flooding through his mind. The girl who had for all these years saw him as an annoyance and whom he had a crush on but just didn't admit it, was kissing him. This was a completely new experience for him and he had no idea what to think. Sakura-chan. Is kissing me. Naruto thought loudly. I don't believe this. Wow. After a minute or so, with Ino getting as little worried at the lack of oxygen the three of them were getting, Sakura parted and looked down at Naruto with a flushed face, who returned it with his usual wide-eyed expression. The pink-haired girl licked her lips and smiled down at him. Pork. What? Naruto asked, still a little dazed. Your lips taste like pork. Really? Ino asked, smirking cockily at the supposed embarrassment she had caused her friend. So it wasn't that good. No, it was. Sakura's look hazed a bit and she smiled. Amazing. Sakura-chan, Naruto slowly said, his mind beginning to re-register again. Really? Ino asked, looking over. Here, let me taste it. She exclaimed, pulling Sakura off of the boy hastily and without hesitation, kissing the boy. Naruto nearly fainted from the second kiss by the other girl, his expression becoming dazed in an anime way, his eyes becoming wide and empty. Ino melted into the kiss immediately, further shocking an already speechless class, nearly knocking Hinata out at the sight and bewildering a dazed Sakura, who looked outraged at the interruption. Ino pig. Ino moaned as she deepened the kiss, trying to put her tongue into the fray. Meanwhile, looking in on the scene from outside the building, holding a set of binoculars and eating a dango stick, was none other than the purple-haired jonin that had done nothing but encourage the boy all his life. Anko was now sitting and watching with a huge grin on her face as the boy slowly became a man. Way to go, Gaki. Yeah. Go brat, another voice joined her and she glanced to her left to see a white-haired Sanin joining her on the rooftop, looking through a telescope and at the same time, jotting down in his notebook what he called research. The old man giggled perversely and enhanced the view on his telescope. Oh, this is gold. Just the kind of material I need for my next book. And here I just came to see what team Naruto was going to be on. Let me guess. Anko began with a smirk. Is this the famed hero Senin and pervy sage I have been hearing so much about? What? Jiraiya exclaimed, glaring at the woman. I am not a pervert. Anko sniggered. Well, if the boot fits. I am not a pervert. I am. He continued, a creepy expression falling upon the old man's face and at the same time, he held his hands up and wiggled his fingers in the most insanely spine-tingling way possible. A super pervert. The purple-haired jonin rolled her eyes and went back to watching the make-out session occurring between her little Naruto and the blonde known as Ino. Anyway, when's the new book coming out? Oh, which one? Icha Sana or Icha Hot Springs? I forget. Jiraiya replied, putting his eye back to his telescope. The second one. Ah. Jiraiya began. That comes out in a month. Sweet. Anko grinned. Anyway, back at the school. Ino had managed to insert her tongue into the make-out session, much to Naruto's continually growing shock. But before she could take it any further, she was denied any more mouth access when she was thrown off of Naruto by Sakura, who forced her against the side of the desk right next to Shikamaru, shaking it violently. Nara looked up slightly in surprise, checking to see what was going on, but then shrugged and went back to sleep when he found out it was nothing. Too troublesome. Chapter 5. Teammates and Friendship. What do you think you're doing? Sakura shouted at Ino. So. Good. The girl moaned in response, being the only reception Sakura was able to get from her dazed-looking friend. After a kiss like that, who wouldn't be surprised? Alright. Listen here you hussy. Naruto-kun is mine. Ino shook herself out of her daze and glared at her pink-haired rival. Oh yeah? Well. You can have Sasuke. I can take Naruto if that's alright with you. What? No way. Not after that. Naruto-kun is mine. No mine. No mine. You stay away from him. He's mine. I don't think so. Sasuke lifted his head from the sauce pit and looked up, eyes narrowed and expression set in a way that increased its comical appearance by how the sauce was spread all over his face. He licked his lips as he pushed Naruto off of him slowly, looking down to see the dazed look on his face as the blonde unconsciously fell flat onto the desk in front of him. The Uchiha shook his head and wiped it clean off the sauce, stopping just for a few seconds to taste it. Not bad, he mumbled, in spite of his ego and pride being shattered. Naruto, on the other hand, was dizzy from the overload of processed information. That was so nice. He mumbled in his phase, cheeks blushing red and drool leaking out of his mouth. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at him before pushing him away. "Stop flooding the place, dope," Sasuke said, pointing out the drool leaking out of his mouth. It was a pretty hilarious sight, especially since Sakura and Ino were still bickering. It was only with a much-needed entrance by Iruka that stopped the fight and brought everything back down to earth. "Alright students, take your seats." As the newly made genin took to the rows, Iruka noticed the state Naruto and Sasuke were in. Firstly, the Uchiha was covered in sauce and looked as though he had been roughhoused by a hot dog. Then there was Naruto, who was lying in a semi-conscious state with a look of bliss and a blush on his face and a drool hanging from his mouth as he lay splayed out on his desk. There were no signs of life coming from him. "Hey, what happened to Naruto?" "Well, let me evaluate," Kiba exclaimed from behind, a smirk on his face as he used hand signs in an attempt to put visual effects into use. Pinky fell on Blondie, Blondie fell on Emo, Emo's face fell into a container of dango sauce. Pinky kissed Blondie, Blondie kissed back, and second Blondie kissed Blondie upon removing Pinky. Simple as that. Iruka blinked and stared at the underdog of the class, who shrugged at him for further inclination. A few seconds of silence was to follow before Iruka's brain caught up with him. Moving on, Iruka cleared his throat and looked down at his notepad, readying to make his announcements for the day. "Now that you're all graduated to shinobi status, it is time to initiate the final stages of your inauguration. So to speak, it is time to assign you to your teams." The class remained silent and listened in on this new information while Naruto dazedly, but surely, regained consciousness to the real world. All shinobi in Kunoichi of Konohagakure, as well as all the neighboring countries with ninja support, have been assigned to teams. Teams consist of 3 subordinates and 1 jonin or team leader. In these 3-man cells, all of you will learn to function as a team to complete your missions and learn the values of teamwork, Iruka explained. By working as a team, you can accomplish tasks greater than what one ninja can perform. "So, how does this thing work?" a random student called. "Do we have to do everything as a team?" "Well, that is a yes and no," Iruka continued. "Yes, team assignments and duties require you to associate with your teammates and perform all the tasks given, such as mission work, training, tutoring, gatherings. But that doesn't mean you can't train and get stronger on your own time. You can continue to get stronger at your own pace, but you must maintain constant vigilance and communication with your teammates in order to create a strong force and be able to accomplish future missions faster. Most of the missions distributed to ninjas in Konoha require functioning teams, which is why a lot of the ninja are seen coming and going from the village." The students nodded in understanding, a hush murmur escaping over the ascending rows. Furthermore, each team is assigned their members based on their scores achieved in their exams and their full year's marks, Iruka stated. Once these teams are listed and the names are distributed, they are made official. There is no going back and there is no arguing it. You will have to cope with your teammates and learn to get along with them. So, let's begin. Iruka looked back down at his notepad. Team 1. During the time Iruka read out the commands, Naruto managed to regain consciousness. Like recovering from a hangover, the boy groaned and shook his head, looking around through half-lidded eyes for the ones responsible for his sudden drop out of reality. He looked towards the upper rows, where he saw Sakura and Ino waiting eagerly for their teams to be read out. Sakura spotted Naruto looking up at her and waved, to which Naruto waved back with a grin. "Boy. I will never get tired of that smile." Shaking his head, he stared back to the front of the classroom and waited for his team to be called out. Eventually that time came. "Let's see. Team 7 will include Uzumaki Naruto." Iruka began, Naruto's head popping up at the sound of his name. "Baruno Sakura." Sakura pumped her fist. "Wusha." And she stuck her tongue out at Ino, who fumed at being outmarked. The blonde girl folded her arms and sulked where she sat, sending a few mental curses Sakura's way. "Regardless, Naruto will be mine, forehead. You can count on it. And Hyuga Hinata," Iruka concluded. Hinata's eyes widened a bit and Sakura deflated in a second upon hearing this. Ino was also a little surprised, as were a lot of the other students. Naruto blinked and turned to look up at the quiet purple-haired girl sitting next to Shino. The bug user glanced at her, his sunglasses flashing as he watched her face grow a bit in redness and her eyes shimmer in surprise. "What?" Sakura shouted. "Well." Iruka cleared his throat and smiled, glancing down at his notepad. "And Team 7's jonin leader will be." There was a smashing of windows and suddenly a ball of bundled up sheets flew in. When it unraveled, much to Naruto's dismay, who slammed his head repeatedly on the table, shouting why upon realizing who it was, there stood Konoha's hottest kunoichi. Anko Mitarashi. Finishing up her last dango, she tossed the stick away and in an all-cool style manner, placed her hands on her hips. Ha! Right on time too. Anko exclaimed, pointing at the 3 students she was assigned and grinned. You and you. Meet me at Ichiraku's ramen bar in 6 minutes or your asses are going straight back to 1st grade. All the students in the class were staring at the woman with slack-jawed expressions, especially Sakura and a rather nervous-looking Hinata. Haruka just rubbed the back of his head in an uncomfortable manner, knowing that this was going to become a real pain for him in the future. Naruto groaned and looked up at the woman with a deflated and defeated look on his face, seeing Anko grinning at him happily. You? Why are you? Of all the jonin in the village. How can I? Oh. The realization soon dawned on him and he immediately rose to his feet. Immediately becoming enraged, he leapt at the woman, only to be quickly restrained by Sasuke, Kiba, Akamaru, Shikamaru and Choji the moment they realized what was going to happen. They struggled to keep him in his seat. Oh. You knew and you didn't tell me. Arg. Let me at her. Let me at her. Rarg. The sight was rather comical. Anko laughed out loud, finding the scene in front of her the most hilarious she's seen all day. I see you're happy to have me as your jonin guide, the woman exclaimed, running a hand through her hair. That's great. The angrier the better. She cocked an eyebrow as she watched Naruto struggle against the 4 of them. That's what I really like about you. So forceful. Kinky. Sakura's eyes twitched as she looked the woman up and down, analyzing her figure and the way she made her appearance known. Who the heck is she? I have never seen this woman before. A cold chill ran down her spine at the grin she gave Naruto, staring him down without a hint of fear at all. Boy, she gives me the creeps. Hinata gulped, having met this woman before on many occasions when Kurenai invited her out or over to her place. Sure, she was comfortable around her, but the prospects of having her as her teacher made her nervous. Anko? Our teacher. Oh my. Said purple-haired woman looked at her 3 teammates, ignoring the hawks from the other students, and jabbed her thumb over her shoulder. Come on, get moving. You have 5 minutes left. She folded her arms and looked at her nails casually, while at the same time, mumbling a countdown. 4:59. 4:58. 4:57. 4:50C. Okay. We're going. Naruto shouted, jerking himself out of the boys' grips and sprinted out of the classroom, waiting at the door to be joined by a hurrying Sakura and a timid Hinata. Anko grinned and clapped her hands, coaching them on. Come on, ladies. Move it. That goes for you too, Naruto-chan. Fuck you. Came Naruto's voice echoing down the hallway. That's the spirit. Anko then began to follow, but before she left she turned to Haruka and winked at him. See you soon, Haruka-kun. She left, leaving a blushing Chunin and rather appalled looks from a lot of the students. The thought of Haruka and Anko together made them feel a little ill. Several minutes later, the 3 members of Team 7 were sitting at Ichiraku's ramen bar, each of them with a cup of green tea in their hands and drinking happily from them. Anko joined them several seconds before time expired and treated them all to this social tea outing before getting down to the actual business. She took a long dry sip from her cup and after setting it down, rounded on the 3 sitting next to her. Well then. I guess introductions are in order. Anko exclaimed, causing Naruto, Sakura and Hinata to look at her. The woman adjusted her coat and crossed her legs, showing off some of her legs. I'll start. My name is Anko Mitarashi. I like dango, sweet bean soup, snakes, and playing with my prey. I dislike hot and spicy food and people who judge you before they get to know you. My favorite hobby is tea ceremonies. And my dream is… well. Let's skip that. Naruto, Sakura and Hinata blinked at the same time. Huh? Anko grinned at them and pointed in their direction. Okay then. Your turn. Tell me your name, your likes, dislikes, your hobbies, and dreams for the future. Go on. You first, Pinky. Sakura developed a tick mark at that reference but went on anyway. Alright. My name is Sakura Haruno. I like dumplings, umabashi and cherry blossoms and She glanced over at Naruto and giggled slightly, causing Naruto to grin and rub the back of his head nervously. I dislike Ino and I wish to fight her to prove that I am stronger than her. My hobbies include memorization and playing trivia. And my dreams for the future include becoming a kunoichi and raising a family. Interesting, Anko exclaimed, rubbing her chin. But it's boring. Sakura was shot down at this and she immediately became pissed. Just kidding. Anko sniggered. Okay. Your turn, hotshot. Naruto grinned. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like training, practicing my ninjutsu, ramen, and everyone I care about. I also dislike people who judge me and the time it takes to cool ramen. My hobbies include training, writing. I guess. And my dream is to become the strongest ninja in Konoha so that I can protect all those closest to me and this village. He held up his fist as extra leverage to his statement. "Good on ya," Anko exclaimed, giving him the thumbs up. "Okay, now you bright eyes." Okay." Hinata began, taking in a deep breath of air to compose herself. "I'm Hinata Hyuga. I like cinnamon rolls and Naruto-kun. I do not like shrimp and crabs. I like pressing flowers as a hobby and my dreams for the future. I air to fight Neji and my father to prove that I am stronger than they think." Naruto turned and smiled at the young girl, seeing the sincerity and courage behind her words. The purple-haired girl looked at the blonde and, upon seeing him smiling at her, smiled back and blushed heavily before looking away, running a hand through her hair. Sakura also smiled at Hinata, then turned to Naruto and nudged him in the arm. "You're pretty popular now, Naruto-kun." "Yeah. I guess so." Naruto replied, but retracted into himself as his thoughts exposed a rather inconvenient truth he did not want to become aware of. "But am I liked now because of me or for what I have done?" "Well then. Now that we all know each other," Anko exclaimed, rising to her feet. "I'd like to get one last thing over with. All of you come with me," she said, paying for their drinks and departing. Naruto, with Sakura and Hinata at his sides, followed after, wanting to know what the Psycho Jonin had planned for them. Chapter 6. Passing Fancy. Anko stood in front of her students in the middle of one of the many training grounds, checking her nails as the three of them looked around them. It was just a large clearing bordered by a forest of trees and with three posts standing proud in the center of the field. Naruto and Sakura looked at each other and shrugged, and Sakura shared with Hinata, showing the evidence of all their confusion. They all then looked back at the purple-haired snake Jonin as she flicked a piece of dirt she found on her trench coat, covering a full upper body mesh. "So Anko-sensei," Hinata began, fingers laced together and hands held up to her chest. "Why are we here?" "Yeah. What's the deal?" Sakura blurted out. "Are we, supposed to meditate or something? Get in touch with our inner self?" Anko snorted. "Yeah, like I'd get you three to do something as boring as that." She shot back, smirking at them after lowering her hand to her side. "Guess I should tell you why I brought you out here so hastily." "Well. Hurry up then. We don't have all day." Naruto shouted, waving his arms around and jumping on the spot. The snake mistress grin widened. "Alright then. Here it goes. But I warn you, the following information may be a shock to you," Anko said, taking in a deep breath to steady herself and add a little more tension to the moment. To the three, the suspense was killing them, as noted by their nervous expressions, especially on Hinata's face. "Alright. As you may know, you were given exams at the end of your ninja academy training, signifying your graduation from the academy and your ascent to shinobihood. This is, in part, true. However, the reason you were given these exams at the end of your last semester at the academy was to determine candidates worthy of possibly becoming actual genin." Sakura blinked at this. What are you saying? That the end of semester genin exams were pointless?" No. That's not what I'm saying at all." Anko replied, letting out a sigh. "The exam was just an actual test. The real exams are actually given by the Jonins to the teams they are assigned, which are much more practical and test all aspects of what you have learnt over the course of your time at the academy." "So then. These exams the Jonin are given," Naruto began, folding his arms. "They are just to weed out the weak ones and see which ones are to become genin." Anko grinned and pointed at Naruto. "You got it. So then wait." Sakura continued on step. "If we're taking this exam now, then that means only a set number of students are going to make it as genin. Exactly how many are allowed to make the cut?" "Glad you asked." Anko exclaimed, slipping her kunai from her side holster and spinning it on her finger. Snatching it into a single-handed grasp, she ran her tongue along its edge and grinned. "Out of the 27 to graduate, only 9 students will be able to make the cut. To put it more simply, it's a make-or-break test with a 60% success kill-off ratio, or more specifically, only 3 teams can be formed out of the 9. Hinata nodded. "So that means you're going to give the final decision whether or not we make it or not?" Naruto grinned. "And it's safe to say that the Jonin decide our final fate." "Sounds fun, doesn't it?" Anko exclaimed, delightful venom dripping off of the tip of her tongue. "It's Jonin that administers the final tests. And if you haven't figured it out already, I've already got a test planned for you." Quickly, she reached into her trench coat. Acting as though she were drawing a weapon, the 3 youngsters leapt back in response, drawing their own kunai and readying for an attack. Anko smirked. "Good. They're able to catch on pretty quick. Let's put that to the test." She snickered and drew 3 slips of paper from her trench coat. Quickly, she then tossed the 3 pieces of paper towards them, to be caught by all of them, and analyzed upon being caught. When they saw that they were merely pieces of paper outlined in red with plain, unidentifiable seals on them, the 3 of them looked up at the snake Jonin in confusion. "What are these for?" Sakura asked. They don't seem like any ordinary seals or tags," Hinata pointed out. "Correct," Anko exclaimed, nodding towards them. "Those are custom-made paralyzing tags. I was in a rush, so I had to improvise. Anyway, here is how this is going to work. Since the genin teams are supposed to be scheduled to be tested tomorrow morning, I have decided to give you 3 of my tests now so I can administer my answer later without worry and not have to be concerned about the other teams getting in our way. Your task is to try and tag me with at least 2 of these. The first 2 to tag me win, while the other third team member that doesn't gets tied up over there," Anko exclaimed, pointing towards the 3 posts in the middle of the field. "That person will have to stay there all day until tomorrow as a consequence. Any questions?" Naruto, Hinata and Sakura stared at her dumbfounded. The impact of what she had just told them was unbelievable, making it a rather comical sight to the purple-haired Jonin. It was until their brains registered did they eventually react. "What?" Sakura yelled. This is insane." Hinata blurted out, but her voice didn't carry out with as much ferocity as intended. "That means at least one of us will end up tied up and humiliated," Naruto roared out. "It's basically just a race to see who can tag you first. And the loser is prosecuted. What a sick joke." "It's no joke," Anko exclaimed, grinning while twirling her kunai again. "It's to make things more fun and interesting. This way, at least one of you will end up tied to a post and I get to laugh at you. Simple as that." She looked down at her watch and nodded. "You have 5 hours. After that, we will take a break. Then we can continue till 7. That sounds fair." She looked over at them, seeing their freaked out and dismayed expressions. She grinned and clapped her hands together. "Excellent. You may begin." Snapping out of it, the 3 students crouched low and leapt away, vanishing into the surrounding forests. 2 hours later. Anko was sitting on top of one of the posts comfortably, a box of dango opened up in front of her and an iPod in hand. With both earpieces in her ears, she listened to her favorite rock music while eating out, smiling happily, as if oblivious to everything else around her. She bobbed her head slightly when a good chorus came on, the earphones blazing. "Oh yeah. Millimeter. That's the stuff." In the trees of the surrounding forests, 3 sets of eyes were watching her closely from afar. Perched on a tree to Anko's right, but too in depth for her to see them, Naruto, Sakura and Hinata were watching their sensei closely, observing her, summarizing her up with their eyes. They knew they had to remain hidden and come up with a plan to overcome her. Sakura's eye twitched as she watched the woman aimlessly listen to her music, bopping her head to the music and enjoying a nice snack of dango. "The nerve of her," Sakura growled. "How can she listen to music and at the same time ask us to tag her when she's clearly not interested in this test at all? We can just go in there and take her now." "Not just yet," Naruto said, grabbing her shoulder to keep the girl from going in. Sakura growled and turned to him. "Come on. Are you stupid or something? If she's not paying attention, then we've got a chance of taking her." She tried to jerk her shoulder out of his grip, but the look in his eyes as he glared out towards their sensei stopped her. For the first time ever, Sakura saw a look of a dead man glaring ahead of him, his once kind bright blue eyes now a dull shade of blue, with rings under them, showing fatigue and exhaustion from years of suffering. She immediately placed them from just one look and she was shocked none to say the least. "Then Naruto," Sakura whispered, blinking as she stared slightly wide-eyed and almost fearfully at him. Hinata looked too and also saw the look. She had a similar reaction, only she gasped audibly upon seeing the change in Naruto's eyes. In fact, to them, he didn't look like Naruto at all. He looked like a completely different broken man. He looked at them, seeing them staring at him in shock and fear. Knowing what they were looking at, his look softened a bit and he reached into his back pouch. From it, he drew a white and red mask, slipping it over his face easily and raising his hood. "I know," Naruto said, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. He then glanced round at them and nodded towards them, seeing a change in expressions. "I've got a plan. But first, Hinata, can you use your Byakugan and see if there is anything out of the ordinary going on? If I know Anko, she is not going to make this easy for us, even though we're just genin." Hinata, returning to the real world with Sakura, nodded her head and looked ahead of her, slapping her hands together into a hand sign. Sakura looked at her in surprise. "Byakugan? You mean the Hyuga family's infamous?" "Yes," Hinata replied, opening her eyes, with veins suddenly appearing on the outer side of both eyes. "Byakugan." Her vision expanded and she immediately zoomed in on their target. She looked around through her enhanced field of view, trying to look for any traps or anything out of the ordinary. It was then, through her field of view, she spotted something a little bit strange, a trail of chakra leading out of the woman's headsets, something she knew was off. She followed it, careful not to strain her head too far, and spotted something in the bushes, something long with an animal chakra makeup. "There's something," Hinata said, catching the pair's attention. "Chakra streams. Faint, but it's there. And there's a animal. Like a reptile or something." Naruto glanced behind him, not moving his head much towards the trees below. He smirked when he spotted the problem and jabbed Sakura's attention in the direction with a slight hand movement. She followed it and also saw the problem and a story below them. She gritted her teeth and looked back at their opponent. "Great, she found us and she knows we're here," Sakura said. "Told you she was tricky," Naruto stated. "She would have known you were going to attack her before and she would have easily finished you. That's why we've got to come up with a plan of attack before moving in." Sakura nodded, drawing a shuriken and, without turning her head, tossed it straight down at the snake hiding in the bushes below. There was a hiss as the snake was struck and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Anko's ear twitched, causing her to glance around and smirk. About time something happened. Naruto glanced at Sakura, the girls turning to him for further instructions, while Hinata kept "So what do we do?" Naruto rubbed his chin and thought. "It's a risky wager, but can you use genjutsu, Sakura?" Sakura shrugged. "It's not an affinity of mine, but I've experimented with some. What kind do you want me to use?" The boy glanced at her and stared at her through his mask. "Alright, here's what I need you to do." A few minutes later, Anko waited and continued listening to her music, tapping her fingers and clicking at the rhythm. It was at this time of anxious waiting, the awaited attack finally came, and Anko picked up on the sounds of shuriken and kunai heading her way. The cluster of them shot from the trees to her left and she grinned, catching the first 4 between her fingers and quickly throwing those back at the other 4 headed her way, knocking them out of the air easily. "Too slow," she exclaimed, only to get a mighty shock when the ground behind her exploded and out jumped a masked Naruto with his hood pulled over. He came down at her quickly, right arm drawn back and blade emerging with a slice. Anko smirked and threw her left arm behind her, tossing a cluster of shuriken at him. They struck head-on just as he was 3 feet from her and he disappeared in a puff of white smoke. "Like I said. 2. Huh." Anko looked ahead of her now, craning her neck back to do so to see another cluster of 4 kunai flying straight at her. She backflipped, throwing her legs up to avoid getting hit by the first 2 that thunked loudly against the log side where her legs used to be hanging and crouched low atop of the stump, low enough to avoid the last 2, which shot just over her head. Anko smirked. "Not bad, Pinky," the woman exclaimed, spotting the ruffling in the trees ahead of her. She held up her right arm, the sleeves shuffling and her arm twitching as she pumped chakra into it. "Ninja art. Shadow snake hands," she shouted, throwing her right arm forward, the 4 familiar snake lengths shooting out and flying directly for the place he knew where the little girl was hiding. They struck the bushes head-on, a light cry emerging forth and making Anko grin. She tugged on them, drawing back her snakes, and when they emerged, they pulled along with them a familiar pink-haired student. Upon drawing them fully, Sakura flew right into her hand and Anko grabbed her by the ring of her shirt collar, holding her up to see the girl staring fearfully at her. "Gotcha, Pinky." Anko grinned at her. Sakura stared at her through fearful eyes for the next few seconds, but then, a grin suddenly appeared on her face and the girl exploded into a cloud of cherry blossom petals. Anko blinked in shock, watching as the petals blew around her. "The cherry blossom clone?" she asked. "No. It can't be. It doesn't feel like it." Suddenly, the cherry blossom petals overcame her, becoming a really thick cloud, and the woman suddenly found her hands grabbed and held down by a pair of invisible, strong hands. She spat on the blossom petals swarming around her mouth and tried to get a better look to see who was doing it. It was then the purple-haired girl was able to grasp the full seriousness of her situation. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Genjutsu? How can they?" It was then, a smirk appeared on her face. "Oh, Sakura. Heh. She has quite the talent in producing illusions." Realizing she didn't have much time left, Anko bit on the corner of her mouth, drawing blood, the pain quickly forcing her out of her stupor. Her eyes widening, she realized that her hands and arms were being held down by both Naruto and Sakura, and Hinata was coming at her from in front, tagging. Gritting her teeth, Anko's arms jerked slightly and she managed to aim her hands upwards, catching the attention of the 2 students holding her arms down. "Ninja art. Hidden Mamba technique," Anko exclaimed. Suddenly, 2 gray snakes shot out of her sleeves, forcing Naruto and Sakura to release her in surprise. The long gray snakes coiled around their victims and their heads protruded upwards, mouths becoming agape, showing the black gum underneath of the most dangerous and venomous small snake in the land of fire. They hissed loudly and plunged down at their victims, biting into their necks. Anko intended to knock them out with poison and administer the antidote as soon as she dealt with Hinata, but got quite a shock when the two students disappeared into puffs of smoke, both of their places replaced by logs. The woman blinked and glared ahead of her, seeing Hinata lunge at her with a tag. Holding her mouth open, a snake quickly shot out of her mouth, intending to strike the girl. Hinata, though surprised, quickly acted and leapt into the air, flipping over Anko and landing behind the woman. Anko's hidden cobra tongue missed her target and struck the ground instead, but retracted quickly when she realized she had missed. Spinning around and rising to her feet, Anko smiled and placed her hands on her hips, watching as Hinata lunged at her again, tag pocketed and Byakugan blazing. She struck out at her with an easily identifiable gentle fist style of fighting, unleashing devastating combinations at Anko, who easily dodged and backed away from the girl's assault, smiling. "Not bad, Hinata," Anko exclaimed, slipping around the girl when she struck at her with a straight jab, only to stumble forwards when she missed her mark. But her Byakugan was able to keep track of her, and she managed to pivot out of her stumble, quickly setting her sights back on her mark. "But you'll need the help of your teammates to help subdue me." Suddenly, a pair of hands shot out of the ground and grabbed Anko by her ankles, surprising the woman and causing her to look down, where she saw the face of a masked Naruto pop out of the ground. Were it not for the mask, you could see the grin plastered on her face. "Who says she doesn't?" Anko growled and was about to throw a punch down at him, but couldn't when she heard the sounds of rushing footsteps coming at her from behind. She glanced behind her, seeing Sakura rushing at her with a tag in hand. Grinning, the girl leapt at the woman at full speed. Anko tried to turn around and move to counter, but couldn't since Naruto was holding onto her legs firmly. She wasn't able to do anything in time when Sakura landed on her and slapped her tag onto her back, immediately jumping off as soon as it was on. The woman tried to reach back to remove it but was soon overcome with a hot electric effect. Small streams of purple electricity coursed over her body from where the tag was placed and she growled in pain, nearly collapsing to her knees. This was a sign that she had been hit. Looking up, she saw Hinata coming at her again with another strike, her palm glowing with chakra. Not wanting to be hit by that, Anko reached up with her thumb and ran it over the trail of blood running from her lip where she had bitten to awaken her out of the Jinjutsu. Once patting her hand with the blood, she placed it on top of Naruto's face still protruding out of the ground and shouted. "Summoning jutsu," she yelled. Hinata was halted from her attack by a blast of white smoke, with Naruto's yell of shock accompanying her little cry when the entire area was filled with blinding smoke. Sakura had managed to back away just far enough to be within shuriken range and also far enough to watch what was unfolding. The three students watched from their positions and Hinata and Sakura backed away slightly in shock when they saw a giant snake appear where Anko once stood. The massive serpent leered down at the two girls it could see while it was on top of Naruto. Its tongue flickered out, tasting the air, and once getting a good whiff of its targets, let out a loud hiss. Sakura backed away in fear and Hinata, trembling from head to toe, also backed off. Anko sat atop of her summon's head, smirking as she looked down at her opponents. "That was good, you three," she exclaimed, running her tongue over her upper lip. "But let's up the test a little." "Hey. No fair," Sakura shouted, but immediately had to jump away when the snake's tail swiped at the pink-haired girl. She commando rolled along the ground before assuming a crouched fighting stance upon stopping. "Everything's fair in the midst of battle, Pinky," Anko stated. "There is no mercy, sympathy or chivalry in our line of work. You must understand that." Not too far from the snake's position, the ground cracked and following the fist that punched out of it, crawled a dirt-covered Naruto. The yellow-haired Gaki growled and shook his head of any excess debris and glared behind him at the towering snake leering over his two girl teammates. He knew he had emerged behind Anko and had the jump on her. Anko smirked as she looked down at Hinata, who she knew had a tag on her. "You're mine now, bright eyes," she exclaimed in a simulated evil voice, although she was technically sort of villain-tolerant. Directing her hand, her snake lunged in at her with its jaws wide open. However, just before the snake could attack Hinata, the girl suddenly vanished in a yellow blur and the snake ended up kissing dirt, literally. Anko blinked and spun around, seeing Hinata appear beside Sakura, accompanied by their teammate Naruto. "Here, Hinata, take this," Naruto whispered, giving Hinata his seal behind his back as Hinata assumed a stance. She took it and blinked in surprise. "Then Naruto-kun, I trust you know what to do with it. Now. Let's go," Naruto shouted, drawing a kunai and taking a stance. "Right," Sakura and Hinata said, also taking their appropriate fighting stances. Anko's snake turned on them, along with Anko, who was still crouched atop of her giant snake's head. She grinned as she watched the three genin take their stances and ready themselves for battle. The jonin had to admit they made quite a strong team. "Not a chance, brats," Anko shouted, drawing her own kunai and grinning. Do you think you three alone are enough to take on a fully fledged jonin? Hell yeah. A double familiar shout sounded from behind and above the purple-haired woman, a gasp emerging from Anko's lips. She glanced behind her, shocked to see a pair of Narutos flying down at her, one of them with his right hand held outwards with a swirling blue ball of chakra pulsating and growing in his hand, and a second Naruto feeding it chakra and giving it shape with his two hands. The ball of chakra grew and spun rapidly, with visible streams of wind entering it as the two attackers flew straight down at Anko and her snake, drawing dangerously close to her. Hope you're ready for this. Shit. Anko growled, crouching and leaping off of her snake's head and into the air in time. Shadow clones. And when in the hell did they learn that technique? Rasengan. Naruto growled, thrusting his attack forward and sending it into the back of the snake's head. The attack was devastating, a blast of swirling wind slicing at the snake's head, the effects of burning from friction, and the force of the attack being so great that it shook the ground and caused the trees to blow violently in the wind. The snake hissed and screeched loudly in pain as it was driven straight down into the earth, forced into it with a loud, splintering crash and a blast of dust clouds and debris. Anko gritted her teeth. Damn it. Huh. She looked behind her again, straining her neck to look upwards. She had almost forgotten about her other opponents and got a real big surprise when she saw Sakura flying at her from above. Kunai in hand, glowing blue with enhanced chakra, the girl let out a yell and lunged at the woman, thrusting to blade in her direction. Eat this. Sakura shouted. Anko growled and maneuvered in midair, twirling around with her own kunai in hand and batting Sakura's away, directing it safely to her side and watching Sakura fly past her. It was then she spotted something out of the ordinary about Sakura's weapon. What the? She thought, seeing an unusual improvised seal carved into the blade side. It was when she realized what it was it too late? A puff of smoke shot out of the seal followed by a blur, and from that blur, Naruto shot out and straight at the purple-haired woman, blade in hand, and moving at such a high speed that it would be impossible to avoid him. Anko growled and raised her kunai up, both of their weapons colliding with a clang. However, it wasn't Naruto's intention to lock blades with her head-to-head, as at his current level of skill, he would be beaten in just a few minutes. Instead, he just grabbed her arms with his free hand, holding her in her place, and pulled them together tightly. At the same time, both of them were now falling out of the sky. Anko grinned when Naruto wrapped his legs around her waist, further restraining her. Oh. I didn't know you felt this way about me, Anko exclaimed. You're pretty good with the ladies. Do you want to make out with me, too? She teased, recalling Naruto's early experience with Sakura and Ino. Tempting, but no, Naruto exclaimed. Suddenly, Anko caught a whiff of another attacker's movements and glared behind her, where she saw Hinata leaping at her with two more tags. It took her a split second to reach the two falling ninja, since she got a better jump start from the ground and was soon upon the purple-haired jonin, whose eyes widened. Ah shit. Anko muttered. Take this. Hinata shouted, slapping the two tags onto her back and leaping away. Naruto did so too, kicking off of Anko's stomach and backflipping away. While Hinata and Naruto landed perfectly, Anko crashed to the ground. As soon as she died, the three seals combined took effect and the woman found herself zapped by high voltages of electricity. Her back arched off the ground as she was overcome by the stunning effects of energy and with a cry, collapsed to the ground when the seals took their full effect. Naruto, Sakura and Hinata, amidst the rubble of the clearing, approached the woman and circled her, but were cautious at the same time. Forming a three-man circle around the unconscious woman, they looked down at her and watched her lie there, eyes closed and a clear sleeping expression on her face. Naruto removed her mask, all three of them blinking down at the woman. Is she dead? Sakura asked. I sure hope not, Hinata voiced, her Byakugan now deactivated and her hands held up to her chest. Don't worry, she's alright, Naruto said with a smirk. She's just unconscious and judging from the seals, will be for the next hour or so. So, what should we do with her? Sakura asked, looking up at Naruto who lowered his hood and put his mask away, his eyes and face back to normal. Both Sakura and Hinata were relieved that he was alright and the childish smile was back on his face. Naruto grinned, glancing towards the three posts, the girl's eyes following him. I have an idea. The three of them then grinned evilly down at the woman and they quickly got to work. An hour later. Anko's eyes fluttered open as she awakened from her sleep and she looked up. Trying to move, she found that her arms and legs were stiff and unable to move and when she looked down at herself, she found to her bewilderment that she was tied up. Growling, she fought against her restraints to no avail and eventually gave up when she found that there were chakra restraining seals placed on the rolls in her, courtesy Sakura and Hinata. The chain and cuffs were of course thanks to Naruto. Sorry if it's a little uncomfortable, a voice spoke up in front of the woman, making her look up. When she did, she saw Naruto, Hinata and Sakura sitting around on a picnic blanket with an array of sushi, ramen, dumplings, and other assorted goods, along with some tea, set out in front of them. Anko saw that it was Naruto who was speaking to her. "We didn't know how good you were at escape techniques, so we had to take some extra precautions." Sakura, looking up from her plate of sushi, smiled up at the woman. "Those tags you made were specifically designed so they were supposed to knock you down on the second one, but literally knocked you out on the third one. You should consider a different test, Anko-sensei. You underestimated us and didn't expect us to attack you like that," Hinata exclaimed, taking a dumpling in her mouth and chewing. Delicious. "Here you go, Hinata-chan," Naruto said, taking a pair of chopsticks and a dumpling and holding it up to the purple-haired Hyuga kneeling across from him. "Say, ah." "Ah," Hinata responded, opening her mouth and being fed by the young ninja. Naruto grinned and turned to Sakura, holding up a piece of sushi for her. "Hey. Sakura-chan. Open wide," Naruto exclaimed. Sakura smiled and opened her mouth, saying ah as well and taking the piece of sushi. She moaned at the delightful taste and swallowed. All three of them shared looks and laughed with each other before looking towards Anko again. "So, Anko-sensei. How'd we do?" The woman, tied up, bound and unable to do anything, smiled at them and nodded, lowering her head humbly. "You guys did exceptionally well. It was a real surprise. You operated as a perfect three-man cell, just as a true genin team of Konoha would. You used your skills to the best of their abilities and came up with a perfect strategy to overcome an obviously superior opponent. I could not ask for any other students to be on my team than you three." She looked up at them with a grin. The three of them beamed, their faces brightening at this prospect. "So, did we pass?" "Damn right you did," Anko exclaimed. "Team 7 will be starting its first real mission tomorrow as the first and latest genin team of Konohagakure." "Yay." The three of them cheered, throwing their hands in the air. "Now, could you three do something for me?" Anko asked sweetly. "Anything, sensei," Sakura said. "Untie me and let me have some of that dango." Her voice roared, using the infamous big head jutsu Iruka was famous for. Chapter 7. A new mission. 3 weeks later. Naruto struggled valiantly against the lashing claws of the beast caught in his arms. He growled against fierce resistance and muffled his ears as best to block out its loud, monstrous war cries. However, he was still deafened by them, but bit down tooth and nail to resist the screeches. But no matter how strong his mental endurance was against such an audible onslaught that nearly broke through his very eardrums, he could barely stand up against the razor-sharp talons of this creature. Try as he might, he could barely keep his grip as the monstrosity set upon him like a wolf, a ferocious demon wanting to break free against the arms, attempting to pin it against the attacker and the ground. As much of a tussle, and as hard as it was, Naruto found it a lot easier to tame a wild falcon, eagle and dog than this stupid cat. "Arg. Why you little rat?" Naruto yelled, the cat's claw scraping across his face. "That's it," he shouted, wrestling the brown furry creature onto its stomach and attempting to keep it down. Sakura and Hinata watched from either side of him as he rolled around on the ground with the cat, giggling at the sight. "You want to play sumo? Then let's play." The little cat, Tora, howled loudly and turned the tables for the 5th time, managing to end up on Naruto's chest and was lashing angrily at his face. Naruto cried out in pain before grabbing the cat's arms and trying to get it into a headlock. "You'll pay for that, cat," Naruto cried out. "That's dirty play. No claws. This is Snake to Pinky. What is your status? Over." Anko's voice spoke up through the receivers in the group's ears. Sakura giggled, seeing Naruto once again unsuccessfully grab the cat by the neck and try to throttle it, only to have the cat jump up onto his head and scratch his hair and forehead brutally. The pink-haired girl then turned and placed her fingers on the receiver piece, transmitting a reply to their team leader. "This is Pinky to bitch. But Snake. Brat." Anko shouted back, causing Sakura to wince at the screech in her earpiece. "Sorry. Snigger. Snake," Sakura replied with a grin. She looked back at Naruto to see him continue struggling against the claws of the cat. Hinata was now crouching beside his flailing body, trying to help him remove the cat despite its protests. "We've caught the cat. Slippery little rascal. Please verify." Brown fur with a red bow around its right ear, designated. "Tora." "That's the rat," Anko exclaimed. "Geez, this is the 1127th time it's gotten away." Sakura's eyes widened. The 1127th time the cat's managed to run away from its owners. Naruto and Hinata stopped struggling. With Naruto managing to keep the cat in his hands at arm's length above him, he sat up and he and Hinata looked at Sakura with widened eyes. "What?" the pair in the background shouted. "Well. I've been keeping score. I've got a record booklet right here of all the missions ever undertaken." Every Jonin's got one, but they may tell you something different in this case. Anyway, this is the 1127th time the cat has managed to escape from its owner, Madam Shijimi, Anko said. I had to chase the same little monster when I was a genin. I think the cat has been around since the very first Hokage. Really? Sakura asked, raising an eyebrow. It's got a heck of a lot more lives than 9, I can tell you that, Anko stated. A curse among ninjas. It says here it took Team Minato 7 hours to try and catch it, thanks to it clawing up Kakashi and Obito's faces more than once. Slackers. Naruto called, the cat going back to scarring his hands. Its claws lashed at his hands in lightning fast and I'm style, and Naruto bit his lip in a humorous manner to resist its onslaught. We got it. GRR. In less than. Arg. 2 hours. Excellent. You just beat the old record by 5 minutes. Congratulations, brats. Anko exclaimed. Pack it up, we're heading on back. Stupid cat, cutting into my training. Naruto growled. Sakura smiled and pulled out the cage from the scroll they were given. Upon opening its lid, Naruto tried to put it in, but the cat continued to put up one hell of a fight. After futility lashing away at Naruto's hands, placed his hands and legs at the 4 corners of the frame to the cage door and held its place. Sakura secured the cage and took a stance as Naruto tried to push the cat in by force. They both growled at the effort as the cat continued to protest against going into the cage. Come on, cat. Naruto growled. Get in there. He eventually managed to put it in and Sakura quickly shut the cage. Naruto staggered back and fell to the floor in exhaustion and watched as the cat flailed around inside its cage. The spiky-haired genin backed away as he saw the cat trying to get out and Sakura put the cage down for fear of being scratched by its claws sticking out of the spaces between bars. Put a seal on that damn thing. Naruto shouted, pointing a shaky finger at it. Hinata quickly did so, placing one of the top end at the door and a small one around the lock. The 3 of them collapsed in exhaustion, with Naruto sprawling out on the grass. Ugh. I hate these missions. An hour later. The question of why the cat ran away from its owners over 1,000 times was soon answered when, as soon as the cat was returned to its owner at the mission briefing room, they saw how Madam Shijimi, the fire daimyo's wife, treated her cat. A fat woman, dressed in royalty, smothering the cat with hugs and kisses, almost suffocating it. Tears of anguish could be seen escaping the cat's eyes as the woman hugged her cat. Naruto, Sakura, Hinata and Anko watched as the woman paid for the mission and left with her cat back in its cage. When the door closed, Sakura shook her head. I kind of feel sorry for the little fellow. Madam Shijimi must take better care and consideration for her pets, Hinata explained. Naruto frowned. Well, tough for it, the blonde said. He rubbed his right cheek, his hands, face and head noticeably wrapped in bandages and covered in band-aids. Ow. Stupid cat. I should have put some ointment on these scratches before I wrapped myself up. Oh, I've got some ointment, Naruto-kun. Hinata exclaimed, holding out a bottle to the young man. Naruto looked towards her and smiled brightly. He grasped the bottle and looked at it, getting a whiff of its herbal scent and nodding his head. I made it myself. It should help. Thanks a lot, Hinata. The pair was interrupted by the Hokage, who cleared his throat to catch their attention. Sarutobi nodded to the team and smiled, seeing them line up in front of him, with Anko hanging to the side, hands in her pockets and a smirk on her face. Excellent work, Team 7. I am really proud of you 4 for capturing and returning that the pet cat, Mr. Shijimi. And congratulations for setting the new record. Anko. He looked towards her. What's the time? Anko pulled out her booklet, Naruto, Sakura and Hinata quickly moved over to her and craned their heads to see the times. They whistled at the number of times and teams involved in the missions. Let's see. Anko murmured. Team 5. Team 21. Team Guy. Ah, yes. Team 7, consisting of Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno and Hinata Hyuga. 1 hour, 56 minutes, and 37 seconds. She slapped the book close, nearly hitting Sakura's nose. The woman and the team grinned over at the Hokage, except Hinata who merely smiled proudly. Read it and weep. Wonderful. The Hokage exclaimed. As an added bonus for breaking the record, I will add an extra 30% to your mission pay. Well done. Sakura and Hinata high-fived each other and Naruto knocked knuckles with Anko. What time did you get, Oji-san? Naruto asked. When you were on Team Tobirama. The Hokage rubbed the back of his head and hid as much of his expression under the shadow of his funny hat as much as possible. My team got 27 hours, 56 minutes and 72 seconds. The cat managed to cross the borders into Kumagakure. That was our best time. Naruto, Sakura, Hinata and Anko stared at the Hokage sitting behind the desk silently for the next several seconds. Even Iruka and some of the other staff also working in the room at the time paused to gape at the Hokage. After a few seconds had passed and Naruto tried to contain his laughter, he just let it out. Holding his gut and trying to maintain his stance, he pointed and laughed at the great old Hokage, with Sakura and Anko joining in and Hinata in a fit of giggles on the side. Even Iruka had to shove a fist in his mouth to stop himself from laughing. Hahaha. Naruto laughed. TT that's. Hahaha. Priceless. Hahaha. Shut up. That cat has been troubled since before you were even born. It nearly started a war between Konohagakure and Kumagakure. Sarutobi exclaimed, only to make Naruto laugh harder and fall to the ground, with Sakura and Anko nearly falling to the ground, laughing. Kumagakure demanded a public execution for the furry demon as it tormented the Raikage when it managed to enter its office and scare his wife. His wife was allergic to cats. We managed to avoid a war when we agreed to split the bill between Kumo and Konoha for capturing the cat on the original mission. This only seemed to add fuel to the already raging fire and now Sakura was on the ground laughing. The laughter carried on for another minute or so before eventually everyone calmed down and, with sore guts, everyone was on their feet again and paying their humblest respects to the Hokage. Sorry, Hokage-sama, Anko said, wiping a tear away from under her eye. Please. Carry on. Of course, Sarutobi Hiruzen replied, a tick mark visibly seen on his head. Clearing his throat, he held up a scroll and began reading out the missions received today. Alright, the next missions for your team are as follows. They consist of several simple D-rank missions. Walking the dogs from the local store, mowing the Fire Lord's lawn, getting a few kites out of the first Hokage monument tree. They've been building over the past few weeks and it looks a bit messy, requirements are to return them to their owners. And. Whoa. 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 Hold the phone, Oji-san. No way. Naruto shouted, crossing his arms in front of him dramatically. I'm not doing one more D-rank mission until I see a C or at least a B-rank mission on that scroll. Anko sighed and folded her arms too. To be honest, I agree with Hokage-sama, she stated. Sakura nodded her head in agreement, a frown appearing on her face. All these D-rank missions are putting us off. We need to at least work out and put our skills to the test with at least a C-rank mission. Hinata shrugged, hands held up and fingers laced together. I'm not that fussed. Sarutobi sighed and shook his head. Goodness. These four are going to make me bald. Pwedi puis Oji-san. Naruto said, pouting cutely, with Sakura doing the same. Pwedi puis. They said at the same time. Alright. Alright. Stopping that, Sarutobi groaned, pulling out a random scroll from the C-rank pile. Okay, here is a lucky draw. The old Hokage tossed it over to Anko, seeing the woman catch it and open it. One C-rank mission. You and two other genin teams are to escort Miss Haru Hashimoto back to her country village in the north, the land of bamboo reeds. She is of a wealthy family who rules the village and the lands, but has been brought here for protection due to an unfortunate uprising. Now that the uprising has been quelled, she has been called back to receive her inheritance and lead her village. So. What do you say? Hell yeah. Naruto exclaimed, pumping his fist. Busha. Sakura also shouted, giving Naruto a high five. The two of them grinned at each other. Hinata smiled and looked at Naruto. This'll be exciting, huh Naruto-kun? Yeah. It will be. Naruto replied. Well, there we go. Anko said, pocketing the scroll. What other teams do you want me to bring on this mission, Hokage-sama? Offer the positions to Team Asuma and Team Kakashi to accompany your team on this mission, the Hokage said. Kiba and Sasuke have been arguing for a C rank and Team Asuma needs to get more experience outside of the village walls. Perhaps you can bring Kurenai for assistance. Yes, Hokage-sama, Anko exclaimed with a smile. But just before they were about to leave, a new voice shot up from Team 7, making everyone stop in their tracks. Wait a second. Wait a second. Sakura shouted, waving her hands in front of her. Why do we need so many teams on this mission if it's just a C-rank mission? Why does it require us to subtract such a segment from our overall shinobi force? Sarutobi raised an eyebrow, finding the question quite surprising. He chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Well. You may not like it if I told you, youngsters, the old man said. Go on. Fill us in. Naruto exclaimed, standing beside Sakura for support. Yes. Please do, Hinata said, also accompanying Sakura on her other side. The Hokage sighed and rubbed his forehead. Very well then. Here goes. An hour or so later. Konoha North Gates. WHHH. ATT. Naruto's yell echoed throughout the village, scaring the birds out of the trees and causing the Inuzuka dogs to howl at the sheer volume of the outcry. Sakura and Hinata giggled as they watched Naruto stare gawking at the Jiao. The Jiao, her litter, is a human-powered transport that requires the service of 2 to 4 men to lift the center chair, better portable room, either covered or not, by holding the poles at their sides or on their shoulders. This one was a bed-sized one with a futon and was encased in a wooden portable with a roof and locked doors. The elegant red veils over it concealed the royally designed view windows on the sides, front and back. Inside it sat the silhouette of the young woman they were escorting back to the nation. "I don't believe this," Naruto shouted. "It's barbaric. I'll say. My goodness," Anko said, placing her hand on her chest in mock shock. "How can the Hokage make you endure such awful and brutal torture?" The woman then smirked and thumbed towards it. "You'll be one of the first to carry it." Naruto let out one of the loudest and biggest groans in his life, which Sakura laughed at and patted him on the back sheepishly. "Don't worry about Naruto-kun," she said. "This way, at least you'll be getting some good exercise." Naruto's face fell on this, and a sweat drop appeared on his head. Anko grinned and poked Sakura in the shoulder hard, which made her rub the spot to ease the jab. "Don't you go teasing him, Pinky," Anko said. "'Cause you're taking over after the first 3 miles. This time, Sakura deflated and her face fell. Hinata just shook her head at the pair and they simultaneously hung their heads in shame and disappointment. "So? When can we get moving?" The voice of the woman from inside her human transport carrier asked. Her voice was delicate and soft, matching the tone and feeling of the very veils that concealed her from the outside world. "I am most eager to get back to my village. It's been so long." Anko and the 3 genin waiting turned towards the Jiao, the Jonin blinking in surprise before smiling at the silhouette. "Such manners," she exclaimed, folding her arms over her chest. "Don't worry. When the other teams get here, we'll move out. Don't worry ma'am, you'll be back in your home village by the end of the day." "Very well," the woman replied, before silence fell. The members of Team 7 waited patiently with their bags and their job, Naruto going to stand by his side of the Jiao, and Sakura and Hinata talking about different herbal remedies and healing techniques using palm oils. During this time, Anko pulled out a particular orange book and, with her back turned to her students, began reading and enjoying it. It didn't take long for Team Asuma and Kurenai Yuhi to meet the team at the gates, with Ino, Choji and Shikamaru going to join their respective friends. Ino joined up with Hinata and Sakura, and the 3 began an animated discussion about boys, whereas Shikamaru and Choji shared some quality time with Naruto beside the carriage. "Hey there Kurenai," Anko greeted the family raven-haired woman. "How's it going?" "It's alright," the woman replied, hands on her hips. Asuma pulled up alongside her, also waving. "Hey Anko." "Hey." The woman looked between the 2, studying them closely and placing a finger on her chin in thought. The 2 blinked as the woman looked between them with that calculative face, and Kurenai only knew from experience with her friend that she was deducing something between her and Asuma, and that was not good. Anko-chan. "Alright, spill it. You 2 are going out aren't you?" Anko said, poking Asuma in the chest. "Come on buddy, don't just stand there blushing and gawking. I know you 2 have been hanging out an awful lot with each other. My eyes don't play tricks on me, and neither does my watch. Unless my binoculars are designed to be optical illusion, a couple of nights ago I saw 2 silhouettes through the window of your house, doing things that only a couple would do. Knock." "Anko?" "Shoosh." Kurenai shot out a hand, clasping it over her friend's mouth and wearing an expression in a fashion similar to when Naruto was in an animated rush to put a clamp on something life-threatening. Catching Anko by the mouth with her hand, shutting her up, Kurenai looked behind her to see their student staring at them, apparently having been drawn to their conversation about Asuma and Kurenai being together, or something. Seeing that they'd stopped, the students returned to their own devices, while Kurenai rounded on Anko, looking rather flustered. "How many times have I told you not to spy on me and Asuma?" she hissed. Anko took a moment to think, eyes looking upward and finger to her chin. She blinked as she thought, before looking back at Kurenai and grinning nervously. "I'm guessing this is the 20th time." 27th. Kurenai hissed, looking over at Asuma, who was standing there, cigarette hanging loosely from his mouth and face as red as a tomato. "You. Say something." Asuma shrugged. "Don't ask me. I'm no good at solving arguments when we're clearly backed up into a corner." "Ugh." Kurenai deadpanned before glaring back at Anko, breathed a word of this to Kakashi or anyone else, and I promise you the next I use on you will have you talking to an inanimate object for the rest of your life. Anko smirked. "Not possible." "Why not? I know you, you're not as twisted as me." "Oh yeah." As the argument and later discussion of the mission continues on, we are moved back around to the boys group by Jiao. Shikamaru, Choji and Naruto talked and laughed with each other, and Naruto slowly began to feel that perhaps this was what it was like to actually have friends that stay by your side for real, even against their parents' wishes. This made him feel grateful for their friendship and loyalty. You see, I always did like regular pork with rice, you know, the red one, but add it with the juice sauce from the rice and add a side of wonton noodles and you've got yourself a wicked combo there. Choji exclaimed, rubbing his stomach and licking his lips. Boy, I could go for some of that now. Naruto also licked his lips, folding his arms and leaning against the side of the jiao. Yeah. A boy that looks good in my head. Either that, ramen, or women, Shikamaru pointed out casually, though it looked like he didn't mean it in a joking way. Choji just chuckled, while Naruto glared at him with a tick mark on his forehead against his headband. He thrust his fist at the boy, teeth gritted. Who asked you? I only assumed. Well, Mr. Fortunatler. Maybe you can tell me how many seconds there are between now and when my fist connects with your lower jaw. You won't do it. You think I won't? I know you won't. Yeah? Uh-huh. Arg. Naruto growled, pounding the side of his head with his palm. After doing that a couple of times, he poked an exaggerated declaration his way, jabbing his finger in his direction. The proximity made Shikamaru lean back a tad bit. You're pushing it, buddy. Do you want to die young? Nah. Shikamaru shrugged. Naruto then grinned and patted him on the shoulder. Hey, I'm just joking. Shikamaru shrugged and smiled. I knew you were all along. You're too easy to read. Heh. That's why he can beat you at shogi any day. Choji exclaimed, pulling out a packet of kettles and beginning to munch on them. Naruto deadpanned before rounding on his other friend with an animated freak show expression. What was that? Naruto heard a giggle behind him and turned towards the jiao he had been leaning against. He blinked, trying to peer through the veil and see whether the woman inside was spying or listening to them. However, incapable of being able to see through it, he shrugged and turned back to the pair, who also became a bit puzzled at the giggle. Unbeknownst to them, a bright sapphire eye of the unknown girl peered through the window and at the spiky-haired blonde. Oh. About time. Anko groaned, throwing her arms into the air when she saw Team Kakashi walking down the road towards them. She sighed and placed her hands on her hips. God, how did Minato ever train such a slacker? Hey all. Kakashi said, waving with his right hand while his left hand was preoccupied with his book. Sasuke, Kiba and Shino also waved, the three boys moving forward to join the others. Inuzuka shook hands as he greeted Naruto, Choji and Shikamaru, and Sasuke just hung back with Shino. Shino, however, did greet Hinata and Shikamaru on his own terms, and once everyone was assembled, they were called to gather around the Jonin once they had discussed the mission with each other. Anko took the stand, as she had been the one to receive the full mission specs. Alright, you filthy, disgusting, repulsive, weak maggots. Anko began in her military march tone of voice. Our mission today is a standard escort and bodyguard mission. A C-rank mission that requires us to escort Mistress Haru Hashimoto back to her capital village in the land of bamboo reeds. We will alternate between groups of who gets to carry the mistress every 2 miles, while the others will form a protective perimeter around the convoy. If any obstacles, the most likely we may encounter will be mercenaries and highway robbers, nothing more. We have assembled this cell for not only practical, but educational purposes. Learn from experience. You hear me? There was silence at first, as the genin stared at Anko, leaning back a bit as if she were some sort of giant loudspeaker booming at them. And? Is this psycho your teacher? Kiba whispered to Naruto. The blonde's hair spiked up and he clamped a hand over his mouth quickly. Shhhh. Don't let her hear you. Seriously, this woman scares me, Ino said, trembling a bit on the spot. TFT, you don't know the half of it, Sakura replied. This is going to be a real drag, Shikamaru groaned. This'll be interesting, Shino murmured to himself, followed by Sasuke HMPH of agreement. Alright, Kakashi, Asuma, Kurenai, you get to pick out the remaining 3 genin that can carry the mistress, Anko said to the senseis behind her. The 3 of them nodded, stepping forward a bit. Kiba. Kakashi pointed, while the Inuzuka deadpanned. Shikamaru, you're up. Asuma pointed. I knew it, it's a drag. Shikamaru thought. Sasuke. Get going. Kurenai said. Alright. The Uchiha murmured, walking over to join the selected group. Slowly, but surely, the 4 genin lifted the jiao onto their shoulders, adding on extra weight to their bags, and of course to the leg and wrist weights Naruto was already wearing. Once it was propped up and everyone was in formation, Anko led them on through the gates, grinning and obviously looking cheerful, with Asuma and Kurenai bringing up behind her, and Kakashi way at the back to make sure no one fell behind. Let's move, troops. Chapter 8. Familiar territory. Later that day. The group had stopped at a small stream somewhere on the northern east edge of the Land of Fire, close to the borders of the country. They had placed the Jiao under a tree, with several Naruto clones, Kakashi and Sasuke standing guard around the shade. The others were scattered around the place, sitting, standing or resting under trees. Kurenai was sitting with Hinata and Sakura, sharing an animated discussion, while Ino was with her two teammates, with Shikamaru coming up with different tactics they could use for their Ino-Shikacho combinations. Kiba was curled up under a tree with Akamaru, Shino perched in the tree above them talking to a leaf insect, and Asuma standing close by to Kurenai, keeping watch on the other side of the clearing. Naruto and Sakura, meanwhile, were sitting by the stream, sandals off and feet in the water. The pair was engrossed in sights and sound of the land around them, Sakura's hand on top of Naruto's, as the water gently flowed past their feet and the breeze licked at their hair. Sakura sighed. "It's beautiful, isn't it? The sky." "Yeah," Naruto exclaimed, glancing over at her. He watched as Sakura moved a hand through her long flowing pink hair and looked back at him, seeing his smile. "But not as beautiful as you. Sakura-chan." The girl giggled and pushed him lightly. "You're so sweet, Naruto-kun." Naruto grinned sheepishly at her, and Sakura couldn't help but blush at his look. What is it? I'm sorry. If I ever hit you, or yelled at you, or hurt you in any way. Just because you were trying to help me, or be nice to me." Sakura looked away shamefully, with a frown. I made such big mistakes. Because I was wrapped too much in a stupid crush. It clouded my better judgment. Blinding me. So much. That I couldn't see you for who you really were. A kind, caring, decent guy. Sakura-chan. I've been nothing but a moron. A weakling." Sakura looked up at him, seeing his eyes staring considerately at her. I've been stupid." "You're not stupid, Sakura-chan," Naruto said, reaching up and running the back of his hand down her cheek before brushing a few strands of hair behind her ear. "We just make stupid mistakes." Sakura smiled and placed her hand on his. "I don't want to make any more then." Naruto grinned at her and was about to say something else, but the two were interrupted by a shadow casting over them from behind. They looked around and saw Ino standing there with her arms crossed over her chest and looking at them with a sinister grin. "Getting cozy, are we?" "Huh?" Sakura looked a little taken aback and blushed at the realization of her and Naruto's position. She quickly got up and slipped on her sandals. "Hey there, Ino-chan." Naruto exclaimed, earning a smile and a wink from said girl. "Hi there, Naru-kun." Ino replied, using a new nickname she developed for him. She then lunged at him and wrapped her arms around him in a hug, placing her chin on his shoulder as he looked at her in surprise. "Did you miss me? I haven't seen you in weeks." Naruto grinned in response, a little bit nervous, while Sakura fumed in the background. Of course I missed you, Ino-chan." "Hee. I'm glad. Get off of him, pig." Sakura shouted, yanking Ino off of the boy's back roughly. Ino tried to fight back in the process, but ended up accidentally pushing Naruto into the stream below. He fell in with a yell and a splash. Both girls gasped and looked over to see if he was okay and found to their surprise and amusement that Naruto was sitting in the shallow water, soaked in with a frog on his head, a fish flapping around in his shirt, and a lily pad on his shoulder. It was a pretty humorous sight, which prompted the two girls to laugh, followed by Naruto. Behind them, the other Genin and Jonin looked on with either smiles or interest, while the eyes of the girl from inside the Jiao looked on from behind her veils. "Alright kids, let's get moving again," Anko shouted, ending their break. "We've still got a lot of ground to cover and there is a possibility we might be setting up camp." Once again, the teams were up and running. Gathering up their gear and their person they were assigned to protect, they then, once again, began hiking. This time, it was Choji, Shino and a pair of Naruto clones doing the heavy lifting, while the ones who previously carried it were escorting. Over hills and through forests they hiked, through fields, past farms, past small villages, cottages, and over the horizon they traveled. The clouds above moved with the wind and the sounds of nature made the group feel at peace. But as they journeyed further and further into unknown territory, they began to feel a bit less at ease, yet couldn't contain their excitement. "This is great. I can't wait to see this village," Kiba exclaimed, thrusting his fist out. "First time outside of the borders of Fire Country. Wouldn't you say, Akamaru?" The dog resting in his jacket yipped happily and sniffed the fresh air. "You said it." Choji agreed while munching on a bag of things, humming happily to itself. "I really want to try out the buffets there. The exotic meat dishes, vegetables on the side, and the entrees." The boy licked his lips in anticipation. I can taste the sweet dessert now." "How about you, Naruto? Are you looking forward to touring the village later on?" Kiba called over. Naruto murmured, hands at his sides as his eyes moved from left to right, looking for any signs of an enemy or strange obstacle. This response sort of surprised the other genin, those who were hauling the princess and her jiao looking between one another before glancing back at the boy who was leading them behind Kakashi, Kurenai and Anko. The boy sweated nervously as he walked, his eyes scaling the woods and catching the scent of an upcoming village just over the next horizon. His senses were heightened to their fullest and, like a battle-hardened jonin who knew to expect anything around the next bend, he had a really bad feeling at the pit of his stomach. Kakashi, who had switched places with Asuma so that he could bring up the rear, detected the usually boisterous boy's lack of delight and decided to investigate his sudden change. Dropping back a bit, the man reading the orange book looked down at Naruto with concern. "Are you okay, Naruto?" he asked. "You seem a little on edge. Is something the matter?" "Nothing, Kakashi-sensei," Naruto replied, looking up at the silver-haired jonin with his unmasked face. The older shinobi was met with the cold eyes of Naruto's real face and couldn't help but blink at the look he received, which was one of a painful past, before watching the boy speed up in his walk. "I don't really want to talk about it. I've been to this area before and I do not like it." Kakashi sighed when the boy left his side and shook his head. "Hell, if I saw that look before," he mumbled, having seen Naruto's true nature a couple of times in the past. Anko looked back a bit, seeing Naruto dip his head a little and lift his hood over his head so that his eyes became overshadowed. This was a clear sign to her that there was something wrong and she knew when to trust Naruto's reactions. She nodded her head and looked back towards the convoy. "Everybody, stay sharp," she called out. "No dilly-dallying until we reach the next village." As they journeyed on up the path running up the side of this steep hill, Sakura, Ino and Hinata were still engrossed in their previous conversation about the boys on their team. However, by the time they reached this next horizon, their talk had escalated a little more into something a tad bit extreme for their ages. Kakashi and Kurenai were fortunate to be listening in on their yammering and couldn't help but smirk at the prospects they had with this conversation. "So, what do you think about your teammates, Ino?" Sakura asked, sizing up her friend and rival's expression with one of her own curious ones. "You seem to be getting along well with them." "Why yes. You three seem to be very cooperative with each other," Hinata exclaimed brightly. "You all seem to be the best of friends." "DSK. Heck if I know," Ino said, shrugging. "We get along fine, for sure. But I feel that we need to get our act together a little bit more, you know. We may have brains and strategy that are ideal for practical missions that require hard thinking, but we need more action and brawn to back that up." "What are you talking about?" Sakura replied, making a point with her hand gestures. "You've seen Choji, the guy's a powerhouse. Your team has plenty of muscle, especially with Asuma-sensei. But when it comes down to just us three, we're really short-handed," Ino explained. "Sure, Choji is strong and all, but as far as action goes, there's not enough of it. Shikamaru brings us down right below naught and Choji aimlessly follows him into it." "Okay then," Sakura said. "But what about a more personal opinion, aside from them being A-grade slackers?" "Personally?" Ino replied, giving this more thought and swaying her body with the movements required. "That's all I guess. Even though I have to keep them in line, they are great friends. But putting aside all their great potential as a team and as individual shinobi, I don't think they can even compete with Naruto." The girl clapped her hands together and looked upwards with a dreamy expression on her face and stars in her eyes. "He's such a dreamer." Hiba, who was standing a bit to the right and back, was within earshot of this. When he heard it, he broke down in sniggers. "Naruto-kun is not an object for you to ogle at, Ino-chan," Hinata protested. "He's a good kind friend and he will do anything to make sure you're okay and happy." "Anything, Ino said, a smirk growing on her face. "Well, I'd trade places with you any day just to go out on missions with him. Can you imagine it? More days and nights outside of Konoha's walls with very little or no authority and no parents. Think of the possibilities." Sakura and Hinata were almost appalled by the way Ino was speaking, causing Sakura to slap her over the back of her head. "You pig. We're not even 16 and you're thinking about that." "Hey, give me a break." Ino shot back. "I can't help it if my mind likes to wander. I mean, look at him. Most of the time Naruto's not even wearing a shirt under that jacket and I didn't even notice his build until only a few weeks ago. Check him out. He's practically dripping with sex appeal." "Naruto's not an object," Hinata stated again. "Don't tell me you don't like looking up and down that big piece of meat, eh?" Ino whispered to her. "Come on, admit it. You like to look at him too when he's not looking at you." Hinata flushed brightly and looked away quickly to hide her embarrassment. "And no, I don't. How can you say such a thing?" Ino grinned triumphantly. "Ha. Knew it. Still, it is indecent of you to think of him that way." "Well, maybe not if it's just a little," Sakura added, blushing heatedly as well as her own thoughts started to betray her. She didn't give it much time either until now, when she really started to notice how well built Naruto was underneath that jacket. She had seen him without his mesh shirt before and it started to make her feel funny. Blushing, she glanced over at him, seeing his back to them. He's definitely not like Sasuke. He's much more built since he focuses a lot more on physical exercises than ninjutsu training. And how would you know that, Sakura-chan? Ino asked, smirking at her friend. Sakura stumbled a bit and glared at the girl, fist raised. That's none of your business. Sure. Then you won't mind if I cover up that hole in the side wall to the men's hot springs, then, eh? What? Kakashi sweat dropped while Kurenai just shook her head as the conversation between the girls continued on. Kiba was still sniggering, wanting to eavesdrop more on this gossip, even though he was a little disappointed that they had stopped comparing guys and were just talking about Naruto. A little further down the convoy, Sasuke was idling back casually, hands in his pockets and not really paying any attention to the conversations going on, although he did exchange a few words with a Naruto clone carrying one of the rear poles of the Jiao, balancing its weight distribution. Your teammates always talk so loud? Sasuke asked, slightly annoyed at the laughs and shouts he heard from the girls, though the details to him were inaudible. One is usually quiet, the other I get along really well with, the clone replied. I think it's when the girls get together they're loud. There's a stereotypical view of things, the Uchiha replied. Says you? Naruto shot back. HN. Oh, don't stop because of me, Choji said to them from ahead. I like where this conversation is going. You just focus on carrying. Your side is leaning and I hate having to try and balance it out. And my feet are starting to hurt. The clone shouted and groaned. The convoy trudged on further till they reached the top of the hill they were climbing. As soon as they gathered at the top, they looked down towards the valley below, which inevitably ended at the sea. Here, they saw a seaside village amidst a thick forest of trees, built along the beachfront, where a vast array of piers stood. It was a colorful town with rooftops and buildings stretching for quite a distance for an outskirt port. As trees-covered mountains stretched high on the horizon, with the beach weaving and disappearing into them, the group could see boats of many kinds making port here. The fresh sea air whipped at their faces and they could hear the distant caws of seagulls. It was at this point, as the shinobi gazed out across the land in awe and interest, Naruto finally recognized the village and frowned. He looked up at the Jonin senseis, also admiring the scenery, and spoke in a very serious tone of voice. We have to go around. The 4 Jonin present looked down at him in surprise. Why so, Naruto? Asuma asked. This isn't a village for us to go through, Naruto stated, looking back down towards it. Shinjo Port. A pirate town. A pier where travelers come and go, mercenaries look for trouble, and where the black market thrives amidst the chaos of everyday life. I really detest this place. How do you know this? Kurenai asked curiously. Have you been here before? I came here with Iro Sennin once on one of his trips. Naruto stated. For an 8-year-old, this wasn't a town I wanted to be in. The markets, the drugs, corruption. I even had a bad encounter with a few slave traders when I went off on my own. They thought I was another orphan to kidnap. I see, Asuma replied, looking back down. Either way, we can just go around the edge of town and keep away from the markets. We need to rent an inn anyway so the mistress can get some sleep. I wouldn't recommend it, Naruto muttered, turning on his heel and walking away, back to the carriage. His friends watched as he disappeared behind the Jiao, Sakura and Hinata, looking on with concern as they watched the boy sit himself down on the rock to listen and wait for a decision to be made. We can't let our client spend a night here, Anko said, furrowing her brow. In light of these circumstances, I say we just move on through, get some supplies if we can, and go. We'll camp as soon as we're out of the town. I agree, Kakashi said, looking at Kurenai and Asuma. Besides, I think the locals will take far too much interest in a convoy moving a person of royalty through it. Stick close to it. And move through. Kurenai and Asuma nodded. Turning, they relayed their instructions to the genin. Alright you lot, let's get moving, Anko said. We're going to go through the town. Do not talk to the locals and try not to wander off. I'd hate to have to buy you back from any would-be slave traders. The woman muttered, hands in her pockets and began making her way down the hillside. The genin moved back into formation, this time allowing Sakura, Ino, Hinata and Shikamaru to carry the Jiao again, while the rest of them formed a protective circle around it. Kakashi, Asuma and Kurenai made sure to stick closer to them this time, while Anko took the lead. While they moved down the hill, Naruto shook his head and rubbed his nose with his fingers, trying to ignore the stench of serenity. I'm starting to regret arguing with Oji-san for this mission. Naruto mumbled. Upon arriving at the bottom of the hill and at the front gates of town, the group entered through one of the many access points, which looked disturbingly similar to the entrance to Konohagakure, only with a few major differences. Number 1, the buildings were much more colorful and suited the description as more of a Western European design of village. The buildings were more run down, the roads were paved and more open to civilians, and street lamps, oil lanterns apparently, blended into the 1920s look of this backwater town. The scent of fish, markets and foul play was immediately picked up by the would-be travelers, the Jonin looking around with expressions of focus and seriousness. Anko and Kakashi made sure to keep a grip around a hidden kunai in their pockets at all times, whereas Asuma was clenching one of his trench knives. The rest of the genin were also on high alert, especially Naruto, who kept his hood slid over his head, eyes hidden away. Sasuke and Shino appeared emotionless as usual, Choji and Kiba anxious, with Akamaru who was getting a little sketchy and on edge as well. As for the girls, they stuck close to their charge, and Kurenai kept a close watch on their students. The moment they entered this place, they immediately felt a change in the air. Though a majority of people walking around minded their own business, such as merchants, business owners and people with a purpose, there were however some in the shadows, giving the group strange and considerate looks. Even those armed were staring at them. However, neither of them made a move, as there were some of the nation's soldiers on patrol. Still, if the opportunity came, there was a possibility that they would make a move. Keeping away from the buildings and to the center of the road, the group of shinobi moved on. "Well, at least there is some security here," Kurenai said. "That's a welcome change," Naruto muttered. "But don't feel too at ease just because there are law enforcers," Kakashi spoke up. "A lot of the guards you see walking around work for some powerful organizations, you can tell by the different dress codes. The real soldiers, a part of the country's security and army, are dressed in armor. See?" The Jonin said, pointing out a marching patrol walking in perfect formation and led by a captain who had a more distinguishable outfit that designated him as the group's co. The members of Team 7, 8 and 10 watched the soldiers march by them, the civilians making a gap as they walked on through. They also noticed another group of supposed soldiers walking with the crowd. This group dressed more casually with their own form of clothing, but wore pauldrons, bandoliers and vests that designated them as a separate security force. They were also heavily armed like the guards and maintained order in the streets. Those other ones work for clans powerful enough to own their own security force. But in these times, they remain as one nation, Anko stated. "But why establish their personal security forces?" Sakura asked. "I mean, wouldn't the head village or leader of this nation fight against this buildup in an opposing force?" "This is more of a lawless part of the country, kid," Asuma explained. "In spite of the country's security forces, they are like a toothless tiger now, without a proper leader. This country doesn't have a leader anymore, thus prompting other organizations and former political advisors to squabble over the bits and pieces left for the picking from the downfall of the country's head. The clans had to form their own security for their own safety in case a civil war broke out. They run the country together alongside criminals and organization leaders who are taking advantage of this time to make a quick rio. But once the mistress is returned to her home village and takes charge, will everything change then?" Ino asked. "Probably," Shikamaru replied. "But it'll take a while till this country is back on its feet. Once law and order is properly established, you can bet that these cockroaches will run off and hide and continue their business dealings elsewhere," Sasuke said, but then glanced over at Shino on the other side of the Jiao. "No offense to Shino." "None taken," the boy replied, hands in his pockets. They continued walking on through the crowd as the area thickened with the scent of markets. Even keeping to the edge of town was proving a little too treacherous. As the buildings rose higher into the air, the crowds became more packed and the noise from these crowds grew more and more. It was after a few more minutes of walking through the thickly aired yet beautifully crafted town that they entered the edge of the small market district, which opened up at a central roundabout and a large one. The buildings moved around it, plenty of space to build another 5 blocks, but were occupied by market stands, a damaged fountain in the center, and carriages. The team saw the place was loaded with people, purchasing and browsing through stuff at the stands, and autocratic-like figures, as well as mercenaries, grouped around what looked to be salesmen at separate stands making bids. At these separate darker booths, the crowds were grouped beside carriages towed by horses. These carriages had caged windows and were heavily armored and were flanked by their equally heavily armed guards. Most of these security figures looked more like the described separate security organization's forces, but were instructed to guard a different kind of merchandise. Within the perimeter of guards and what the rich, wealthy and other merchants were looking to purchase were what looked to be prisoners, ordinary people, mostly women and orphans, chained up together and dressed in rags. It looked like a chain gang more than anything else, only these people were exhausted, beaten, obviously starved and put on sale by the salesmen working for the organization specializing in this department. At the very sight of this, the Jonin averted a little to the left, keeping away from the carriages and the people. The genin couldn't help but look, with many in the group rather bewildered at the sight. "Are those prisoners?" Hinata asked. "No. "They're slaves," Naruto replied darkly, glaring at the carriages as they moved around the crowd, who were screaming bids on the people they had lined up, like cattle. "This is nothing but a place where people have goods to buy and sell." "That's horrible," Ino murmured. "I'll say." Kiba growled, to which Akamaru gladly obliged with his own as they watched the salesman auction off another two of these chain-up girls to a satisfied buyer in the crowds and have them carted off. "How can they, trading of human lives? It's sickening." "This is what happens in countries without proper leadership," Shikamaru commented. "Unlawful behavior, illegal shipping and trading occur," Asuma evaluated, the group stopping for a brief pause. "You're looking at a city that is undergoing a stage of deterioration. In our world, this sort of thing happens. It even occurred in many of the hidden villages as well, during and after the Great Shinobi Wars. Most of the villages managed to rebuild quickly to avoid takeovers and backlash from the war, mostly due to their still existing leadership that was in power. But those countries and villages with the leadership decimated and left to pick up the pieces on their own, suffered. This is what happens to the broken, poor, homeless and helpless. Without authority, in a world thriving with mongrels, divided clans and criminal organizations, you see the country deteriorate and eventually fall into chaos. It's been like this for years now, Anko noted. With little thanks to us and to the remaining security forces still loyal to the Hashimoto family, they kept this place from going out of balance. The people, however, are still losing their homes, families and jobs, thanks to a leader not being able to take charge and command the people," Kakashi butted in. "But these things are eventually going to change." The couple of the genin looked at the jiao that Miss Haru Hashimoto was sitting in, watching the silhouette peer out the veiled and protected windows. They heard her sigh and shift in her carrier. "My people have survived on their own long enough," they heard her speak. "I cannot let my village or this country fall into chaos and war. As soon as I am back at home, I will set things right, starting with this town. I give you my solemn vow." The Jonin nodded and, with their genin teams, continued on. The convoy was up and on the move again, pushing through the crowds and easing out of the market district, quickly entering a more residential area. Happy to get out of sight of those slave traders, the group could finally tread more carefully out of sight of any mercenaries, thieves, robbers of pesky dealers and merchants. However, after a few minutes since entering this area, Sakura, who had become more alert with the grouping and presence of the teams, looked around to check and make sure everyone was here. It then occurred to her that someone was missing. "Hey, where's Naruto?" she asked. Anko's head shot around. "Shit." Naruto was looking through the crowds, passing several weapon-selling stands as he forced his way to the front of the slave traders. When he did, he scooted around, eyeing the carriage that had caught his eye. Stopping here, close to the back, he saw a lot of the slaves out of the carriage, most of them still chained up and in a line that led around to the front. However, there were several of them in cages or still in the carriage they were transported here. Judging from the spaces, it was definitely not comfortable for them. Here round the back, behind the auctioneer and outside of the crowd, the genin walked around, hands in his pockets and eyes glaring with distaste at the conditions and at the men possessing this area for their private market. He watched as a separate salesman led a rich autocrat flanked by bodyguards round the carriage, allowing him to inspect their stock. He paused, standing amidst a couple of the cages containing some of the slaves and not too far from the carriage. Naruto walked up to one of the smaller ones at the foot of the carriage, this one containing a lone orphan, and crouched down next to it. This slave was chained up and sitting with her back against the bars of her cage. She had silky, raven black hair, though a little dirty and messy, and was younger than the spiky-haired genin. Quietly sitting in her holding, dirty, bruised and wearing brown rags, the only thing she could do was sit there and ignore the hungry pains in her stomach. It was a deeply upsetting sight to see a girl as young as her in a state like this, as well as hundreds of others surrounding Naruto in this area. When the girl felt the presence of someone next to her cage, she looked up through her long black locks and gasped when she saw the stranger. Her response was immediate, quickly backing away from the boy, chains rattling. She nearly hurt herself in her haste. The young ninja held out his hand to her. Hey. It's alright. I'm not one of them. I'm not going to hurt you. Can I help you, young man? The voice of a man spoke up behind Naruto, the genin standing up and spinning around. He met the face of a stout man with a scruffy brown beard and mustache, wearing a really strange hat with a cotton ball on the end of it. He wore basic casual clothes suiting his profession and yellow and black striped slacks. Naruto was about the same height as him, maybe even a bit taller, and had to look down a bit to meet the man eye to eye. "See anything you like from our stock, sir?" Naruto growled and pointed accusingly at him. "Things. These are people you are selling. They are not just worthless products, goods, or objects. This is sick." The boy growled angrily before pointing to the cage behind him. "How can you keep her here? You can't even stand up in this cage. And on top of that, she looks half-starved." "My boy, please, calm down," the man eased him, looking a little worried at his outburst. The salesman was also slightly taken aback at the look of pure anger blazing in the boy's eyes and the appearance they had taken. I'm just trying to make a living here. I apologize, but this is the best we can do to keep these people well fed and in good health on our budget. Our bosses won't allow for anything more." "Spare me," Naruto said, looking back down at the girl looking up at them. The poor child had become terrified at the argument and had backed away into the corner of the cage, staring up at the yellow-haired boy with fear and was trembling all over. In her slight shaking, her hair had parted a little, allowing Naruto to get a good look at her eyes. It was with this glance, Naruto gasped and swooped down onto the cage again, causing the girl to jump slightly at his movement. He grasped the rusty bars of her enclosure and tried to get a better look at her. And no. It can't be. Looking into the orphan girl's eyes, the boy saw distinctive rings with a light purple shade in her eyes. These rings rippled out of a center pupil, and from Naruto's knowledge of dojutsu and ninjutsu, he knew what these eyes were. Rinnegan. But how? Naruto thought in shock. The Sage of Six Paths was the only one who possessed them. Yet. This child. "Listen son, if you're not interested in buying, then I suggest you leave before the guards come around and decide to shove you into one of these cages," the man said worriedly. "You either leave while you can or fall into line like the rest of us. It's how we survive here. And to work and slave and become someone's object for their sick twisted desires is how these people are destined to survive," Naruto growled. "I refuse to let that happen to this one." He stood up and turned towards the man, pulling out a brown bag from his pouch and holding it out to him. "I'll take her." The man held out his hands and took the bag. Opening it, the bearded man gasped when he saw the gold coins shining and glittering from inside of it, amounting to more than what many Ryo dollars could add up to purchase a horse. He looked up at the boy, seeing him glaring at him. "Hey, are you sure, sir?" the man asked. "She may be young. But her eyes are a little strange. Maybe something." "No. This one is fine," Naruto stated. The man smiled and bowed. "Thank you, sir," the man replied. Quickly pulling out a key from his pocket, he let her out and undid her chains so that she could move. The girl had a hard time standing, so much so that she fell, only to be caught by Naruto. The boy lifted her up and glared at the salesman. "Do yourself a favor and quit to redeem yourself," Naruto said, walking away and carrying the girl with him. The man watched the young shinobi strode into the crowd and took some prolonged time to think. Naruto pushed himself out of the crowd, forcefully, ignoring everything else, and followed the chakra signals of his shadow clones carrying the jiao and headed back towards the group. It was only when he was about to leave the marketplace, he suddenly bumped into a familiar face. He stopped by the side of the archway and looked to his left, where he saw Anko leaning against the brickwork with her arms folded and eyes closed. When she looked back at Naruto, she looked disappointed but at the same time filled with a sense of pride. "You know, you shouldn't wander off on your own in a place like this," Anko said. "Like you said. A lot of bad eggs." "I never said that," Naruto replied, looking up at her with his pained dead man's look, with that exhausted expression in play. "I said this place was Kami's asshole, but I didn't say that on top of the hill, because I knew he'd send a bolt of lightning down at me for saying something like that. All that can reach me here is his farts and his fingers to scratch his ass." Anko sniggered and got off of the wall, walking over to the boy and leaning over a bit to take a look at the child he was carrying. "So. You picked up an orphan, I see." "Yeah," Naruto said, looking down at the girl to see that she had her eyes closed and was sleeping. She looked very peaceful snoozing in his arms, her breathing at ease and body relaxed. However, nothing could fully mask her wounds, the cuff marks on her wrists, and her physical fatigue. "I couldn't leave her in there, not in a cage only big enough for a dog." "So I saw," Anko replied, looking up at his face. "What are you going to do with her?" "She can come and live with me when we get back to Konohagakure." "Sounds like a good plan," Anko said, patting him on the shoulder and leading him the rest of the way out of the market square. "You sure you've got enough money to support you two?" "I've got enough to support a whole family for the rest of my life," Naruto stated, smiling up at Anko. "You'd be surprised how much I get around and earn at the same time." "Really? What's your annual salary?" "About 1,000 Ryo a day if I were to split a bill between hours," Naruto said. "I usually take up high-bid jobs. But that's on a need-to-know basis." "Gotcha," Anko said with a nod, the two of them now walking down the road the shinobi convoy had gone down. In the time Anko had taken to find Naruto and the time Naruto had taken himself, the jiao was bound to have left town already. Unbeknownst to the pair, as they walked down a now emptier street, a figure, dressed in a cloak with a hood over their head and a white mask with a blue fire pattern on the left-hand side, with cracks leading out from the right eye hole, was watching them from the shadows of a tea house next to an inn they had just passed. They didn't even notice the figure in the shadows and the massive sword at the person's side, about 11 feet in length with a thick blade, wrapped in white gauze straps. Furthermore, on the forehead of the mask was the symbol of the village hidden in the mist, with a gash scarred into it. Setting the tea down, the figure looked up, watching as the two shinobi went down the road and out of sight. Hokage. A. Chapter 9. Masks. Sunset. The genin teams had stopped outside of town inside of the forest in a clearing. After walking for the whole day, they had gotten quite tired and were now resting under the orange glow of the sunset on the horizon, the clouds disappearing as the sky dimmed and the birds flying back to their roosts. Within the clearing, the carrier containing the mistress had been set down close to the middle of the clearing, not too far from the glow of the fire Sasuke had set up with the help of Shino and Shikamaru, who had also helped gather the firewood. Toji, Ino and Kiba had added their contributions to the group by gathering some fruits, while Asuma and Kakashi set up some traps and alert wires around the perimeter of their campsite. Sakura, along with Hinata and Kurenai, had prepped each of the group's tents and sleeping bags for everyone, just quick ones that could be easily collapsed and packed away in seconds, just in case a rush was in need. While everyone else had the setting up camp privileges, the Naruto clones had gone off to find some fresh water for them all, and soon came back carrying a large gourd of water with them. The teams watched as the Narutos brought it to the center of the clearing and set it down a few feet out of the fire and began filling up everyone's drink canisters. Once everything was done, the groups gathered at the center of the campsite, with Kakashi taking up a post beside the jiao containing their charge of charge. While everyone sat around and prepared for the night, Sakura caught someone approaching out of the corner of her eye and looked up. "Hey, they're back," Sakura said, waving towards the approaching Anko and the real Naruto. Everyone looked up to see the pair enter the clearing, with the purple-haired Jonin sealing up the only opening with her own traps on her way in, tossing a cluster of kunai down onto the ground, wrapped in tags and tripwires. "What took you guys so long?" Asuma asked, watching as Naruto and Anko walked up to them. However, instead of stopping, Naruto walked by, carrying the girl away in his arms to the tent he recognized as his team's, and laid the girl down onto his pillow. Pulling out a small carrier scroll, he tossed it open and while he was accessing its contents, was approached by his teammates. The rest of the genin had also taken great interest in the new member Naruto had brought along with him. "Who is this, Naruto?" Sakura asked, crouching down beside the girl as Naruto drew a blanket from his scroll and laid it over her. His clones, following the telepathic orders from their host, got a cloth and soaked it in water before bringing it over to the tent and handing it to the real Naruto. "Someone I freed from a life of chains and whips," Naruto replied, looking up at Sakura. "I found her in a cage beside dozens of other slaves. I bought her out of there so she could come and live with me." "That's very kind of you, Naruto-kun," Hinata said. "I just wish I could have helped all of them out, though," Naruto replied, ripping the cloth he had in half and placing the half he folded up onto the girl's forehead. He took the other one and started wiping away the dirt and stains on her face. "You wouldn't believe the conditions." "So she's going to be living with you then, Naruto?" Sakura asked. "Yup. Do you have the proper accommodations for such a thing?" "I've got a big apartment. I guess," Naruto thought. "She can use my bed. I don't use it anyway and I've got the money. I'm not just going to abandon her just like so many others have." "Well then, if that's going to be the case, I'll help you out," the pink-haired girl stated, shuffling over and checking the girl's pulse. At the same time, she did a full body scan, pumping chakra into her right hand and using it to check on her condition, placing it just over the girl's chest. "That's it. Really not necessary. Sakura-chan." "But I want to." Sakura replied, smiling up at the boy. "You're still a kid yourself, Naruto, and you've only ever really looked after yourself your entire life. You wouldn't really know how to take care of someone younger than you, especially a girl." "I'll help too," Hinata stated, smiling up at Naruto with a light coloration of red in her cheeks. "We're all friends, so we help each other out when somebody's in need." "We're also a team," Sakura said with a smile, looking up at the spiky blonde. "Supporting each other is one of the things we do." Naruto looked between the two faces of his teammates, seeing the sincerity of their statements and their offerings of help. This made his heart flutter and he smiled at them. He reached up and lowered his hood, giving them all a few views of the gratefulness in his eyes. "Thank you, Sakura-chan. Hinata-chan." They smiled back at him before looking back down at the girl to continue checking on her. When Sakura had finished her checkup, she retracted her arm, the glow of chakra in her hand dissipating. "She's fine," the girl stated. "She just has a few bruises and is really tired." "She also must be hungry," Hinata said. "Look at how pale and thin she is." "Don't worry about that," Naruto said with a smile, looking up at the two clones he had managed to maintain these past several hours. "Go fetch us some fish. Bring Sasuke and Choji with you. Disperse if something goes wrong." The two clones nodded and left the vicinity of the tent. With some arguments, they managed to drag Sasuke along with them, but had little trouble bringing Choji with them. Knowing where the traps were laid, they headed for the nearby river without much hassle. "So, has the young lady got a name?" Asuma asked, arms folded and leaning lightning against a secured branch used to hold up the entrance to the tent. Naruto looked up and shrugged. "I don't know. She fell asleep while I was carrying her here." "Well, we just can't be calling her that girl or you the whole time," Ino said, walking over and kneeling by the girl's head. She looked down at the sleeping girl, the sight of her sleeping so peacefully making her smile. "But she looks so adorable." "She sure is," Asuma said. "That's not the only thing special about her," Naruto said, looking up at Jonin with a small smile. "I'll tell you later when she wakes up." "Sure," Asuma replied, stepping aside a bit to let some of the other genin through. Kiba and Shikamaru joined them, while Shino was staying back, keeping an extra eye on their client still inside of the Jiao. Akamaru yipped and leapt out of Kiba's jacket, walking over to the girl and taking a sniff of her. The young pump then barked happily and licked her face. Kiba quickly picked him up before Akamaru woke her up. "Whoa. Down boy," the boy laughed, patting Akamaru to keep him quiet while smiling up at Naruto and Hinata. "He says she's a nice girl." "How can he tell?" Sakura asked. "He's got a really good sense of smell," Kiba replied and shrugged. "Plus, dogs have more than just 5 senses. They can come in real handy when getting information on a particular person." Shikamaru sat down on the grass outside of the tent, looking at the dozing girl with a considerate look on his face. "Still, it's amazing that she's doing so well in her condition." "They don't give them much," Naruto replied, he said, looking up at the whole crowd around him. "No medicine, very little food and water. Their slaves are treated worse than cattle. I never want to go back to that poor town ever again." "Neither does us," Sakura stated, with Hinata nodding in agreement. "Well then that's decided," Asuma said. "Strong motion against returning to the town, our trip back will be diverted around it. Though it would take a few extra hours longer. It doesn't really matter, if we just avoid it altogether, no one else will have to become corrupted," Naruto explained. After checking to make sure the girl was comfortable, warm and okay, Naruto pulled the blanket back over her and stood up, exiting the tent. His friends and those scattered around the clearing watched as the blonde headed over to the very edge of the clearing and leapt up into the treetops, vanishing from sight. The rustling of branches and the light full of leaves indicated that he was headed into the forest at treetop levels, but for what reasons was unknown. It was quite an unexpected move. Asuma blinked. Well, that was a little bit strange. Leaving the boy, Asuma, Anko called over from the fire where she was roasting a marshmallow beside Kurenai and Shino. He prefers being a mysterious character and will often wordlessly leave for some place unknown. I've given up trying to adopt him and change his personality to fit normal society. He's just like that. He's not like anyone I've ever met before, I tell you, Asuma said, walking over to the group by the fireplace, leaving Sakura, Hinata, Kiba, Ino and Shikamaru to watch over the sleeping girl. Kakashi is one such person, but he just goes off to read books and is always late, and Anko yo-yo. The Jonin looked at the woman by the fireplace, who was watching him patiently for him to complete his sentence. Asuma gulped and decided it was for the well-being of himself and his nads that he didn't finish. Anyway, out of all of the ninja I know, he's the one with the biggest amount of questions surrounding him. What? Like his history or something? Anko asked, smiling at the Jonin who stopped right by the fire and crouched before it, warming his hands at its hearth. Here's something for you to mellow over. I've only ever been able to witness brief glimpses of his past, mostly because I was involved in it. But even though I was assigned to protect him for a lot of his life, I was often called away on missions or to perform other duties for Konohagakure. Protect him? Sakura asked, looking up at her sensei. What do you mean protect him? Ino also asked. He wasn't in danger, was he? That's not for me to answer that, Anko replied, pulling up her marshmallow and sniffing it. You can try asking him yourselves, but I for one wouldn't. He's had a really hard life. Perhaps even harder than that girl you see lying beside you. Sakura looked down at the sleeping girl, seeing that she had turned over and wrapped the blankets tighter around her, snuggling into whatever warmth she could unconsciously conjure up from it. All the ninjas sitting around her had turned their attention back to the girl and were eyeing her with thoughtful looks of concern. It wasn't just the thought of this girl's unimaginable tragic past, but also one of Naruto's. Could it be? Ino murmured. And Naruto's life was worse. Sakura finished. I mean, he's always smiling and laughing and acting like a total goofball, Ino said, looking up at Shikamaru and Kiba. You two have known him longer, what do you know of him? Not sure. Kiba said, furrowing his brow in thought. I mean, my dad always said for me to stay away from him for some odd reason, saying that he was a bad influence. For a long time I actually did what I was told and believed what my dad told me, but now that I look at Naruto for myself, he's not such a bad guy. He's so kind and is always happy, Hinata said with a smile. I remember. He helped me out so many times when I was training. Encouraging me, believing in me, saying I should keep on trying. He encouraged me to do better and even helped me when I hurt myself. Sakura's head lowered at this and she reached up with her hand, placing it on her forehead at the sudden ache she felt zipping down her body. It made her sick in the stomach and feel ill, emotionally and mentally. Damn it. She thought. I was such a moron. Flashback. An 8-year-old Sakura Haruno was sitting on one of the park benches, away from the rest of the children playing on the swings, slide-and-play structure, and the parents watching over them from afar. With her face in her hands, she sobbed quietly, her body trembling as she shed tears of hurt and rejection. Though this hadn't been the first time she was rejected by one Sasuke Uchiha after so many attempts of gaining his affection, the way he rubbed her off was much more hurtful than any of the times he had done so before. It felt like she had been struck full-on in the chest by a fist or a blade. Sakura had been sitting here for a while now, her crying now turning into sniffs and red eyes as she tried her best to hide it. It wasn't long till someone, who had taken notice of her hurt, decided to act upon it in the most appropriate way possible and approached her. Hey there. Sakura-chan. Sakura turned around and was met by the kind, friendly and lovable grin of Konoha's knuckle-headed troublemaker, Naruto Uzumaki. The boy grinned at her and held up eagerly with two hands a bunch of flowers. When the young pink-haired girl looked down, she saw that it was a cluster of cherry blossoms, all neatly trimmed and tied into a beautiful bouquet with a pretty red bow holding it all together. She looked at it for a moment and then looked back up at the boy, where she saw him beaming at her with hope and happiness gleaming in his eyes. You don't need to be sad, Sakura-chan. He exclaimed. Here. I got you flowers. I know you like them because they're pretty like you and they are the same color as your hair. To the boy's surprise, the girl's look changed to one that reflected her immediate annoyance of the boy and snatching the flowers away from him, glowered. Leave me alone, Naruto. She shouted. I said before that I don't like you. Now go away. But Sakura-chan. Naruto stammered, tears welling up in his eyes. I got them. Just for you. I don't care. She shouted, turning her back on him, wiping away her tears. You're annoying. Now leave me alone. I don't want to see you again. Sakura-chan. The boy looked defeated and, hiding his own tears as best as he could, ran away crying. He only turned back once to see what Sakura did with his flowers and found to his utter dismay that she had thrown them into the garbage. The girl didn't look back or think twice about the boy and the gift he had given her and simply stormed off to think about how to gain Sasuke's affections again after the try and fail she just had today. Her resolve was replenished once again, but in that development had broken the heart of the one who tried to cheer her up. She completely missed the sight of Naruto running over to the garbage where she had thrown the flowers, where he picked them up and ran off. Then flashback. Sakura lowered her head even more, her eyes overshadowing, and her hand fisting into the sheet of futon she had managed to grab. I was so big. Stupid. Moron. She muttered to herself, causing Ino to look up at her curiously. What was that, forehead? Sakura, who would usually get wound up by that nickname from her arch-rival, just sat there, head hung and silent. She shook her head exhaustedly, not even looking up when she answered. And nothing. Sakura replied. Well. If I knew Naruto, Shikamaru said, looking up at the group. No matter how many times you look at him, whether it is deep or not, you can always tell he's wearing a mask. To hide his real face. Hiba nodded in agreement and Akamaru also yipped at this. I know. These days. Most of his smiles and stupid grins he puts on. You can tell they're fake. It's messed up, I tell ya. But what can he possibly hide? Ino asked, looking up at them. I mean, sure. I've noticed something was slightly off about him. He always acted like a total goof back at the academy, even when I met him when we were 9. He wasn't anything special either, low grades, talentless. No genius at all, the girl described before coming to her self-evaluated question. However, I always knew there was something more about him than smiles and pranks. Something deeper. Maybe it's something you won't like, Kiba said, giving the group a thoughtful look over. I mean, I've seen stuff similar to a mask used like that before. My mother. Although she seems a bit tough and scary at times, I know that she's just using that demeanor to set us straight and to discipline members of my clan appropriately. She's especially strict towards me. But sometimes. When I'm wandering the house, I sometimes catch her in the lounge room looking at some pictures with this really sad look on her face. You know. Like one of those expressions from years of being upset. Naruto can't be like that, Ino replied. He's got too much energy and he's always training and focusing on his ninja career and not to mention ramen. Face it, he's too busy to worry about something as tedious as a bad life. Stuff like that is too complicated to explain, Shikamaru pointed out. A past isn't something you can get rid of. It's not like a broom to footprints. More like, these footprints have been made and set in concrete. It simply takes someone with the right tools to get a full imprint of what that footprint can tell you. But this is Naruto we're talking about, Ino began again. That's precisely the point, Shikamaru said. I don't know him as well as I want to, but when I look at him, I see he's got a lot of weight on his shoulders. Burden and living. Naruto's strong, Hinata said strongly, smiling up at the group. I know that if we talk to him, we can help him. Not now though, Kakashi said, appearing before the entrance of the tent so suddenly, looking down at the surprised group. Obviously, the man had overheard the whole conversation and was now contributing his advice to the discussion, hands in his pockets and standing casually. Listen to Anko, don't get involved at the moment. If Naruto wants to talk about it, he will. We just need to give him some space. Maybe it's the space that we have been giving him that's made him like this, Sakura said, walking out of the tent. Her statement surprised Ino, Shikamaru and Kiba, while impacting on Kakashi like a brick to the face, shooting him down. Sakura looked up at the silver-haired Jonin, eyes red and tears streaming down her cheeks. I've seen his face before. And it hurts just thinking about what that expression reflects. Sakura then walked off, leaving the rest of the group to contemplate what had been discussed and what had been spoken. Sasuke, Choji and the two Naruto clones eventually came back with a bunch of fish and assembled around the fire along with the others, scaled them and roasted them over the fire. Along with steam rice, they had a nice quiet dinner, at the same time, offering the mister some, leaving them outside of her chow. When night fell, the teams cleaned up their plates and other assorted materials before heading to their tents and hitting the sacks. Kakashi had first watch, sitting and tending the fire, watching over the Jiao closely, as well as checking on the new girl, who was still sleeping soundlessly. However, as good a ninja a Jonin seemed to be, he or she would always, at times like this, overlook something, and Kakashi failed to notice a faint shadow exit the Jiao and dash into the bushes, leaving her post with no regard for the trouble she could get into while outside of the safety zone. Meanwhile, Naruto was perched up in the treetops overlooking the clearing, hood pulled over his head and a calm expression on his face as he watched over his teammates, Sakura and Hinata, sleeping peacefully beside the girl he rescued. He watched the girl snuggle into her covers more and fall into a deeper sleep, the smile she wore at finally being able to snuggle into a comfy futon, making Naruto's heart flutter. Chuckling, the boy looked around and up towards the treetops above him, seeing the night sky high above in the heavens, glistening like a beautiful jewel. The stars Naruto gazed at twinkled brightly, and the faint trail of a shooting star streaking overhead made the boy smile even more as he knew the universe was speaking to him. He closed his eyes and smiled. Just like Pervy Sage said. The greatest gift to us is life itself, and it is our duty to protect it, to preserve it, and it is our privilege to enjoy it. It was then he suddenly became aware of another presence sitting nearby, and his eyes opened in response. He looked down at the corresponding branch to his left hanging over the campsite, and sitting on the branch just beside his, sat a new figure. It was a woman of course, and she sat up in the tree with him quietly, gazing at him solemnly and with great interest. It was only from a quick inspection and a brief flash to the past, Naruto saw that she wasn't as old as he first thought. The woman was a young priestess, around his age, with long black silky hair, combed nicely, and she wore a white kimono with a bit of purple under it and a red and yellow belt holding it up. She also wore the royal color of red and baggy pants and wooden sandals. In her hair, she also had an ornament of bellflowers, which brought out her look magnificently. Her overall image was one of grace, beauty and distinction, and she also looked very stunning in Naruto's eyes. The only thing he could not see as yet was her face, which was covered by a white mask with a red snake on the left-hand side. As she sat there gazing at her, Naruto chuckled and looked back up into the sky. Why did you change your name, Kitsumi? It's a little bit funny hearing the name Haru Hashimoto. The girl giggled and, standing up, balanced her walk over to the boy and perched on the same branch right next to him, making him adjust his position a little so she could sit next to him. I know using that name is confusing, even for me too. But it's necessary for my own protection. The Hokage insisted upon it, the girl replied. Naruto grinned at her, leaning over and poking her in the forehead of her mask with his fingertip gently, before moving his hand over in admiration of the mask she wore. He had immense familiarity with this mask and smiled graciously at her. You're still wearing that mask I got you for your birthday. The girl nodded and reached up, gripping the base of the mask and lifting it up onto her head. Underneath that mask, Naruto saw her real face, bright red eyes, a perfectly shaped nose, and an angel smile. Of course, her whole look was angelic in appearance, and the sight seemed to brighten his day. It's got sentimental value, Princess Kitsumi exclaimed, beaming at him. You were my first best friend in Konohagakure and you got this for me on my first birthday. I invited you over. I was the only one who showed up, Naruto said. Itsumi's smile widened. That's because I wanted to invite you and only you, she exclaimed, scooting over. And that's why I want to keep the mask and wear it all the more. That's nice, Kitsumi, Naruto exclaimed, looking back up into the sky again. Kitsumi smiled and crawled along the branch the rest of the way over to him. When she was right up next to him, she wrapped her arms around him in a hug and snuggled into him. This movement slightly surprised Naruto, but he accepted her with a smile and a sigh. You were always so good to me, she whispered, closing her eyes. I'm glad the Hokage assigned you to protect me. And I'm happy to be guarding you too, Kitsumi. There is no one else I can trust more than you. Naruto chuckled. I get that sometimes. Kitsumi grinned up at him and nudged him in the shoulder ever so slightly. I'm being serious, dummy. The boy grinned a bit before glancing down at the campsite again, checking on his teammates in their tent and the little girl lying in the folds of her futon, snuggled up and warm. He watched her for some time, with Kitsumi following his eyes to the girls in the tent and spotting his focus almost immediately. Nodding in understanding, she looked back up at the spiky blonde ninja and prodded him to get his attention. You did a great thing, you know. Though it's not much, I can only hope to be able to fill in the missing piece in that girl's life, Naruto explained quietly. I want to give her a better life. I want to be able to take care of her and help her. Well, I'm sure you'll do fine, Kitsumi said, rubbing his chest gently and soothingly. I understand what you've gone through. And what you're going through. Really? Yes, the princess replied with a smile. Like you, I wear a mask to hide my face, mostly because I find serenity and peace inside of it. I was always alone like you. I lost my family in the conflict. Heck. I barely even knew them. I've lost a lot of people I could have called uncle or grandma. Or family, and I never had any friends. She looked down a bit in hurt and gripped his jacket in her fingers tightly, moving closer to him. Naruto blinked as she laid her head against his shoulder. The only one I had was you. I wanted you to be my friend, for both of our sakes. Drowning in pity and sorrow is a blatant reason for such actions, Naruto said in a whisper. You followed your heart and trusted yourself. You knew better, Kitsumi-chan. I did know better, Kitsumi said, looking up at him. I knew you were different from everybody else, but I never belittled you for it or saw you as someone I wanted to stay away from. I never saw it, nor sensed it. You're kind, friendly, and always happy. Even now, I can see it in your eyes. Naruto chuckled. Always could read me better than anyone else. Kitsumi smirked and poked him in the chest. You know it, Buster. So much for the graceful princess to start talking like a tomboy, Naruto commented, shrugging and putting his hands behind his head and rested back into the tree. You're strong. I can tell. Like when I kicked your butt the last time we fought. We were 10 and I was just playing. Naruto replied casually. Plus, kicking someone in the gonads isn't really fair. Alright, it was a tie, Kitsumi resigned, letting out a breath of air. I can still defend myself now though. You weren't the only one training to get stronger and protect others. You've been training. Every day. What do you know? Ninjutsu mostly, potent ones too, but I also know some good ninjutsu. Well, that shows just how different you and I are from each other, Naruto stated. I'm abysmal at, but I know tons of ninjutsu and taijutsu moves. However, the what is and the how is a secret. Phooey. Kitsumi mumbled. Hey. Behave. Ow. Kitsumi giggled. Did you just pinch my butt? What do you think? That's it, Naruto exclaimed and started tickling her. The girl laughed and bit the sleeve of her kimono in a futile attempt to suppress it. It came out in muffled shrieks and shaking giggles. Soon, she was at his mercy, pinned and being tickled. It was in the midst of their little playtime as old friends that Anko was standing beside Sakura and Hinata's tent, hands in her pockets and looking up at the pair playing around with each other, laughing, joking and talking. The snake Jonin smiled at the pair, this being the first time she had really seen Naruto smiling, without the need of a mask. That's me. It'll take some time, but by the time the other girls' hearts warm up, I can be guaranteed a new Naruto. The woman thought while glancing down at her other two genin. She smiled at them. I sense a change in the air. You two girls are sure to make him a happy husband. I know that look. Please don't use it, a new voice exclaimed and Anko glanced around, seeing Kakashi walk over and look up to where Naruto and their client were. He sighed and shrugged. Never thought they knew each other. You'd be surprised how many people Naruto does know, Anko replied, looking back up at the branches. Give him some credit for being a very influential person. That boy has the power to change people and the world. It's a blessing among us ninja, but you can expect tough times ahead, Anko evaluated, grinning at the silver-haired Jonin. And you can bet that I won't miss a single second of it. Kakashi smiled back at her through his mask. You know, I think it will be fun. Chapter 10. Meet the enemy. The next morning. The sun rose up over the mountains, the orange haze and clouds drifting over the sky was like the eye of Kami itself was opening to the waking world. The singing of birds and the warm, welcoming arms of the rays of sunshine was the perfect cup of coffee for the people living in the surrounding lands. Everyone was up and about once more, packing up their tents and sleeping bags and getting ready to move out. A lot of the genin, especially Sasuke, Shino, Shikamaru and Kiba, didn't really need to prepare themselves for the journey since they had slept mostly in their present attire and along with Kakashi and Asuma. Helped pack up the camping gear and turning them over to their designated backpacks. It took just that much longer for the girls to get ready, fixing up their hair, adjusting their uniforms correctly, the usual for a more comfortable journey. The boys didn't care much for appearances and just got ready the old-fashioned way, unkempt and untidy. In the end, the only tent that was left set up was Naruto's tent, where Sakura and Hinata had spent the night, along with their extra company. Anko, who was not much of a morning person herself, had taken the liberty of spending the extra half an hour given to brush her teeth, have a cup of coffee, slip into her ninja outfit and in her semi-conscious state, get dressed. Everyone was careful not to tread on the still sleeping girl Naruto had picked up as they entered and exited the tent. Once everything was packed, the group gathered around the last tent standing, where they watched Sakura and Hinata try to gently wake the girl on the futon under the sheets. They didn't crowd around as much, so instead took up a mere scattered audience forming a semicircle around the epicenter of focus. Kakashi and Kurenai stood by the Jiao, watching over the client and at the same time overlooking the commotion that was focused on the girl snuggled up in the sheets of Team 7's tent. Naruto managed to get past to the front and knelt down beside Sakura, Hinata, and the girl they have, up to this point, unsuccessfully tried to wake up. The blonde-haired genin looked up at Hinata. "How is she?" "She seems to be doing alright," Hinata replied in her usual, soft-spoken voice. "Her wounds have recovered remarkably fast and she seems to be responding well to her new conditions. I'm guessing it's the first time she's slept on a real futon in a long time," Sakura continued, smiling up at her male teammate. "You must have some really good mattresses, Naruto." Naruto smiled and shrugged. "I just get what I think feels the best." "So Naruto?" Kiba exclaimed from where he stood, arms folded over his chest and Akamaru perched happily on top of his owner's head. "What else was so special about this girl that you decided to save her?" The recipient of this question glanced up at Kiba with a more hardened expression than usual and replied in earnest. "Firstly, I would have saved her even without that viable reason. It was the right thing to do and I couldn't just leave her in there." He looked back down at the girl and placed his knuckles gently against her cheek and rubbed it soothingly, causing the girl to stir. "Secondly, this girl possesses a legendary." "Really?" Shikamaru asked. "Which one is it, Naruto-kun?" Ino asked, this new topic also catching the attention of Sasuke, Kakashi and those others who were more into the waiting and watching than the anticipation of a special technique. "Is it a Sharingan or a Byakugan?" Shikamaru asked, letting out a sigh. "Just what we need. What a bother." "No." Naruto said, glaring up at the group seriously. "She possesses the Rinnegan." There was a moment of silence that carpeted over the surrounding group as everyone attempted to process this new information. When it eventually settled over everyone, Kakashi was on his feet and the jonin standing around were in reasonable shock, including Anko. "What?" Kakashi said loudly. "A Rinnegan barber?" Asuma added. "That's impossible." Kiba snickered. "Are you sure you weren't hallucinating or something like Naruto? Maybe you were just dizzy from all the carrying you did with the Jiao." "It was no hallucination," Naruto said, looking round at his two teammates to see them staring at him in shock. He gave them a look of pure honesty and seriousness and they knew immediately from just looking into his eyes that he was telling the truth. Sakura and Hinata nodded their heads at him and they looked down at the girl as she began to wake. Everyone present held their breath and even edged in closer, leaning in anticipation for the girl's eyes to open. They did, fluttering open to meet the morning rays of sunlight and give off their shiny glow. The tint of purple, surrounded by the black ripples, made Choji, Shikamaru and Hinata back off slightly at the sight of them and awed the rest of the group. Kurenai and Anko blinked in surprise when they saw the rings in the eyes and its distinctive definite features. Though her eyes were half-lidded, everyone could see them and Naruto smiled when he saw the girl look in his direction. He grinned at her and gently ran his hand over her cheek. "Hey. Morning sleepyhead." The girl blinked when she recognized the hazy outline of the boy who had carried her out of the stocks. She knew who he was immediately and in response, smiled. She then slowly glanced around to her other side and immediately when she saw the numerous other, unrecognizable faces looking at her. Her response to this sight was also highly instinctive. The reaction was instant. The young girl let out a gasp of surprise and, scurrying out of her sheets, immediately leapt at the boy she knew saved her and hugged him to her, burying her face and hiding herself from view. It shocked Naruto and everyone else, and the blonde couldn't help but grin nervously at what had just happened. The girl holding onto him for dear life scooted around him while still hugging him tightly and moved as best out of sight of the other strangers standing around. Naruto didn't know exactly how to respond to this but eventually came to his senses of what was happening and opted upon them. However, because she was literally behind him, he couldn't do anything but try to get her back around him. Ino smiled and, getting on her hands and knees, crawled over to get a better look at her. Oh. She really is adorable. She's also really shy, Kiba exclaimed, glancing round at Hinata Hyuga. Kind of reminds me of somebody. Hinata developed a tick mark and she glared at Kiba. Watch it, Kiba-kun, she growled in a surprisingly threatening voice, making Shikamaru, Kiba and everyone else look at her and blink, even Sasuke, who had recognized Hinata as the quiet, sensitive type of person from the academy days. Don't push your luck. Yikes, Kurenai thought, glancing round at Anko who was smiling proudly at herself. Perhaps hanging out with Anko and strong friends has given her some backbone. I bet Hiashi Hyuga would be proud of her. She sure is a cute little one, Asuma exclaimed, stepping forward and crouching in front of Naruto, Ino and the girl hiding behind the young male who saved her. What's your name, Missy? Jonin asked the girl. She peered around from Naruto, up at the smiling bunch of people. Blinking curiously, she glanced up at her protector and savior, who smiled down at her kindly. Go on. What's your name? He asked. The girl smiled at him, blushing under his kind gaze and sparkling eyes. Her own Rinnegan eyes glimmered under Naruto's. And my name is Haru. Haru? Naruto said with a smile. That's a lovely name, Sakura said, peering into the tent and smiling at the group. Little Haru. I'm Naruto, the blonde introduced himself, thumbing himself in the chest in emphasis, before directing the young girl's attention to the rest of the gang. This is Ino. The girl next to me and Sakura standing in front of you. The big guy is Asuma. The girl looked from person to who Naruto gestured towards. Their names burning into her mind, Haru continued to follow the boy's directive hand gestures and came to memorize each and every person standing around the tent. That one wearing the gray fur jumper is Kiba and that's his dog, Akamaru. And next to him, the orange-haired guy, that's Choji, Naruto said with a smile before turning to the others. The one with the pineapple-shaped hairstyle is Shikamaru, the purple-haired girl is Hinata, and the two smile-less ones are Shino, the guy with the glasses, and Sasuke. Shino's unease flashed at this remark, whereas Sasuke just grunted and looked away disinterested. The silver-haired guy there is Kakashi, the red-eyed woman is Kurenai, and the other lady over there, my sensei, is Anko. Yo. The woman exclaimed with a grin. Haru ducked further behind Naruto at the sight of the woman, which made her sweat drop in surprise. She looked over at Kurenai. Am I really that terrifying? What? No. Her friend exclaimed nervously. The look on Anko's face, however, told the raven-haired woman to either spill it or I'll make you. The young Jonin shrugged. Well. Maybe a little. Sure. Whatever, Anko said with a groan, glancing round to her right aimlessly. That's what I get for being so nice. Says you. Naruto called over. You sent a cobra once every 2 weeks to me and shoved it into my mailbox and set it to grow to the size of a building and attack me the moment I went to collect my bills. But Sheila misses you so much, Anko called back. I'll arrange another playdate for you too, it'll be good for your relationships with my summons. Hey. What? No. Kiba could help but burst out laughing, along with Choji, whereas Sakura, Hinata and Ino fell into a fit of giggles. Another set of giggles joined them, and Naruto looked down at the little Rinnegan girl still hiding behind him. She smiled up at the blonde and smiled at him lovingly. Naruto-kun is funny. She exclaimed, earning a surprised blink then a small smile from the boy. He ruffled her hair, earning a smile and a light blush from the girl, before Naruto turned his attention towards the others. We'd better get going now. We're a bit behind schedule. Naruto said, rising to his feet, bringing the little girl with him. He smiled as she perched on his back and she smiled back at him in kind, everyone following the young man's lead and getting ready to head off. I'll help with the final preparations. With that in mind, Naruto slapped his hands together into an all-too-familiar hand sign and with a grin, puffs of smoke shot up outside the tent. Shadow clone jutsu. Naruto's physical copies then went about, collecting everybody's bags and handing each of them to their respective recipients before moving to and packing away the remaining collapsible tent. Once it was packed and everyone was carrying their weight under Anko's instructions, they formed into their convoy once again, this time with the 3 girls and a Naruto clone to carry the Jiao, while the rest of them formed a protective circle around their charge. Within minutes, the group set off once more in perfect formation. Some time later. Ah, stupid mosquitoes. Anko grumbled, slapping the side of her neck before looking at the mashed remains in her hand of the once rather large bug that had tried to drink her blood. She winced at the sight and wiped the excess blood and bug entrails on her jacket. Why do they find me so appetizing? Oh, maybe it's because you keep eating dango like it was a prescribed medicine, Kurenai exclaimed cheekily, giving her friend a grin. Anko glared at her. Well, excuse me miss, I know my insect biology so well, but why aren't you being eaten alive by these little mongrels? The woman growled, slapping her neck again as another mosquito decided to have a go at her. Kurenai shrugged before thumbing over at Shino. Ask Kakashi's student over there, he should know a thing or two about bugs. He is, after all, from the Aburam family. Well shades. How do I get them to stop pestering me? Shino's eyes flashed at a remark about his sunglasses and for a fact that he hadn't heard that nickname in a while. The boy simply lowered his head and, with an emotionless expression, shrugged. Say please. Anko shot him a look. Say that again. It took all of those around the convoy with a sense of humor to not burst out laughing, these being Naruto, Kiba, Sakura, Ino, Choji and even Asuma. The real Naruto, who was carrying his little passenger on his back, had to bite his bottom lip to stop laughing, while the girl just looked curiously down at the boy at his strange expression. Kiba literally had to stick his hand into his mouth, Choji pretended to choke on a mouthful of kettle chips, Sakura and Ino just giggled lightly to vent out combustion, and Asuma pretended to cough on his cigarette. Mosquitoes, in this case, are usually attracted to the sugar in the blood. They can smell it wafting off of your body, Shino explained, not at all worrying about the threatening glare Anko was giving him from the head of the convoy. I recommend some deodorant or, unless it is purely a medical concern, consult your personal doctor. And you tell them to buzz off. Anko grumbled, swatting at another one that landed on his lower arm. I would, but they've got issues when you swat their brothers and sisters, Shino stated. Alright. That's it. Anko growled, pulling out a dozen or so needles and beginning to throw them at individual insects one after another, managing to cap a few while the rest of the needles flew off into the forest surrounding the path they were following. The convoy had to stop for a bit while Anko furiously lashed out at the attacking insects. It was a pretty amusing sight from the group's point of view as Anko danced around, attacking millimeter-sized insects one after another. Ino leaned over to whisper to Sakura, holding the other end of the jow up. Should we try and calm her down? I wouldn't recommend it. Better not risk your life for something so tedious, Sakura replied. Does your sensei always act like this? Shikamaru also asked, having leaned into the conversation at the awkward sight in front of them. Well. Yes and no. She's usually more sadistic than this. The pink-haired genin replied. This is getting kind of interesting, Choji exclaimed, at the same time continuing to gorge on his packet of kettles. He smiled over at Sasuke, who was accompanying him around the back where they could get a full view of the commotion at the head of the convoy. Who do you think will win? Mosquitoes. Or the crazy Jonin? Sasuke glanced at him strangely, raising an eyebrow. After Anko calmed down, the group kept on moving. It was after a few more minutes the convoy was in motion did everyone else begin to feel the sting of mosquitoes. The deeper they went down this trek, the more mosquitoes showed up and soon, almost everyone was slapping at their bare skin vigorously in an almost rhythmic fashion to rid themselves of the flying parasites. Naruto had to blow them off of him since his hands were preoccupied with securing the girl on his shoulders. Haru was faring much better as she was able to wave the swarms of pests away. She cutely groaned and murmured as she swatted the mosquitoes away. Naruto's clone, however, fared even less against the insects. Everyone was getting eaten alive. Hey. Are we getting closer to a swamp or a lake or something? Ino asked, slapping the back of her neck. These guys are beginning to be a real bother. Shikamaru grumbled, waving his hand ahead of him lazily. How troublesome. Seriously, Shino. Do something about these friends of yours, would you? Kiba asked, waving away a cloud of mosquitoes that suddenly flew in front of him, Akamaru taking a snap at them, which parted funnily around his muzzle. Fine. Shino mumbled. Slapping his hands together, he formed a series of hand signs. Then, as if he had just performed a wind release jutsu, the cloud of mosquitoes dispersed outwards from Shino's center, and soon the air was clear and the group was safe from further onslaughts. Everyone sighed in relief, especially those who had been bitten worse. A time, Choji groaned. Yeah. Sakura said, scratching at one of the many red marks on her upper arms. Don't scratch your wounds, Hinata stated. They'll become infected if you do that. The purple-haired girl cautioned all of them, rubbing some special lotion she had designed over her skin. The wounds are quite serious. Apply this lotion to them, they will disinfect them. The girl walked over to her friends and gave them each some, to which they gratefully accepted. Naruto was relieved when Hinata came up to him and with a big blush on her face, applied the lotion on his face and exposed skin, to which she then gave it to little Haru. Everyone paused for a moment as Hinata moved from person to person, giving them the lotion, although those who were reluctant to receive it were Sasuke, Kakashi and Choji. When she went up to Anko, everyone got quite a shock when she turned around and with a glare etched on her face, showed them her puffy face and swollen skin. "Please. It burns." Anko groaned, shoulders and body slumped forward and tears welling in her eyes. Hinata smiled and carefully applied it. However, the moment her cream-soaked fingertips made contact with Anko's skin, the purple-haired woman let out a howl and clutched the side of her face in agony. "Arg. It burns." I'm sorry, Hinata exclaimed. "Here, let me put some more on you, sensei." "No. Keep that stuff away from me." Anko cried. "What the heck is that? Acid?" And yet, another commotion shot up in front of the convoy between Anko and another typical issue, to which everyone watched with odd expressions to see how it would unfold and resolve. Kakashi, getting bored easily, pulled out his book and started reading, while Choji shared popcorn with Kiba and Shino, who surprisingly, also took some. Sasuke just raised an eyebrow with his hands in his pockets, with Naruto standing beside him with Haru perking up more on his shoulders to get a better look. With some help from Asuma and Kurenai, Anko was eventually calmed down and once again, the group was on the move. No complaints were heard from inside the jiao from the priestess as of now, and the group could walk on without a fuss from bugs, birds or any other fauna of the forest. Speaking of which, as they journeyed down the path, the forest began to break up and soon, beyond the tree lines, hills of fields could be seen, along with cliff mountains and amazingly enough, bamboo forests. The Genin teams looked around, awing at their developing new surroundings, whereas the Jonin just scanned the area. Eventually, the path came winding past a really big lake, stretching for a mile or so, before ending at a wall of cliffs and trees, with a huge waterfall careering down into the lake, filling it up. The Genin and their Jonin teachers paused for a brief moment, admiring and analyzing the sight. Upon closer inspection, the Jonin saw that rivers branched out from the lake, small streams flowing into the surrounding forests and fields. Kurenai made note of this and pointed it out. "Look. Rivers. Adjacent to the route we've been traveling," Kurenai said. "Well, that explains the mosquitoes," Asuma stated, placing his fists on his hips. "But it still doesn't explain why those mosquitoes were so aggressive." "I can't explain it either," Shino murmured, looking back down the path they had previously walked down. "Streams that small can't host that many mosquitoes, especially in a forest like this. Atmospheric temperature isn't right for them, and certainly lack of food doesn't explain it either." Naruto looked towards the lake. "Do they usually travel far from lakes like this?" "Rarely," Shino stated. "Mosquitoes need a stable environment, the best is still water, to breed and lay their eggs. Shallow water is also most preferable." "Well, there you have it," Ino exclaimed, waving a hand towards the lake. The Genin had set down the large jiao, so they were able to scout the area with their eyes and of course to rest their shoulders from the journey, the wide expanses of water, the shallow shores and the still surface of the lake. It's the perfect nest area for parasites. Not to mention there were so many of them, Sakura groaned, rubbing the back of her neck. "It's like a plague of them has decided to appear or something," Sasuke added, folding his arms. "Guess we were the perfect targets for the biters." It was at these words that something clicked in Naruto's head and upon the shock of this realization, lowered Haru off of his shoulders and put him in the care of Sakura and Hinata. The two girls looked up at Naruto as his attention glanced around at the surrounding tree lines. "What's wrong with Naruto?" Sakura asked. "Is something the matter?" Hinata continued. "We're being watched. Stay on guard." The blonde whispered, getting to his feet and flicking his right hand wrist, the hidden blade appearing instantaneously with a flash of silver. "Never mind them now," Anko said, turning back to the group. "We don't have much further to go. Just one more mile and we've reached the village. We can discuss our bug problems once we've settled into a nice hotel." The woman turned, grumbling to herself as she walked on, the rest of the pack readying the convoy to depart. "I'm sick and tired of resting out on open gravel." "Wait." Naruto called out, causing his sensei to pause and turn around. Everyone else directed their attention towards the young male, who was now standing outside of the group safety circle and scanning the whole area around him. "What is it, Naruto?" Asuma asked, unaware of the scanning look Kakashi was also giving the area. It clicked with the silver-haired Jonin of Naruto's mood and he too picked up something in the air. "What's that smell?" the Jonin thought, glancing around towards the lake. "This scent is rather familiar." But his head spun around towards the tree line, along with Naruto's eyes. Unhindered and focused, the pair glared up into the treetops, their direction of eyes also catching the attention of Anko, Kurenai and Asuma, the three of them becoming more aware of their surroundings. Of course, it makes sense. Mosquitoes amass near water for sure, but the ones that attacked us were much more aggressive than normal ones because they were being commanded by their element, Naruto thought. He flicked his right wrist again, his blade disappearing and being replaced by 3 shuriken stars. Someone with a strong water nature can definitely have an influence over the creatures that depend on it. But that level of skill. And that scent. Anko grinned, glancing up into the tree behind the Jiao and the convoy. The large tree stood directly beside the lake and was the perfect vantage point for an attack. You can come on out. Naruto took action immediately and threw the cluster of shuriken he held into the tree behind the genin. They shot out of sight in a blink of an eye into the leaves, slicing into the branches and causing the figure hiding within the tree to make himself known. The shadow leapt out of the trees to avoid damage from the shuriken and performing a flip over the convoy below, landed beside the lake with a clang of metal and a thud. In front of the large group of ninjas, a large sword, about the size of Cloud's Buster sword, impaled itself into the ground tip first and on top of the handle, sitting expertly upon the pommel was a short figure. About a foot or so higher than Sasuke, the figure wore blue baggy pants with a camouflage pattern with metal leg guards and black sandals. Above that, she wore a utility belt covered by a blue jacket wrapped around her waist. Above her waist, she wore a blue tank top, giving a perfect view of her slender upper body and midriff. The young woman also had red, spiky hair tied up by a headband, symbolizing the village hidden in the mist, with a gash across its surface. The woman also had blood-red beautiful eyes, but the right had a black eye patch covering it. The figure smirked at the traveling group, flicking her wrist as she watched the Jonin and Genin size her up and look her over. Well. What do we have here? The young swordswoman sneered. Here I was, on my way to the market to pick up some groceries, and I ran into a bunch of kids and a sizable carriage occupied by a passenger of royalty. Kakashi, Asuma, Kurenai and Anko sneered, immediately recognizing the young teenage girl blocking their way. Naruto was also glaring, while the rest of the genin, except Sasuke and Shino, were looking at the young warrior with doubtful and curious expressions, unaware of the danger that had just arrived on the scene. Haru, who was standing beside Sakura, hid behind the pink-haired Kunoichi at the sight of the new figure. Hee. If I capture the priestess, her village and Konohagakure will pay a lot to get her back. Who the hell is this, bitch? Ino asked. Another troublesome brother. Shikamaru groaned. First mosquitoes, now girls. What's next? If it isn't Ryoko Takahashi, rogue ninja from the village hidden in the mist, Anko exclaimed, placing her hands on her hips. You know. You're quite young for a missing nin. The young girl chuckled and glared at the lot of them. So. You know my name. I am honored, she said, before checking out each of the 4 jonin standing in front of her. And it truly is an honor to be recognized by 4 of the greatest ninjas of Konohagakure. Anko Mitarashi, the snake user of Konoha and one of its best interrogators. Kakashi Haddock. She looked towards the silver-haired jonin, the copy ninja and wielder of the Sharingan eye. Asuma Sarutobi, former member of 12 Guardian Ninja. And Kurenai Yuhi, Konoha's best ninjutsu specialist. You've been studying up on us, Kakashi said, pulling his hands out of his pockets and stepping forward from the defensive formation the 4 jonin had taken up on side of this new foe. That means you've been watching us for quite some time. The great ninja will always carefully study up his or her opponents before moving in on their targets. The ninja Ryoko exclaimed before leering at the group. Odds are, I can wipe the floor with all of you and your little brats, right here and now. Brats? Sakura growled, eye twitching. She's just a kid herself, Choji said. Why is she calling us kids when she's not even 18 years old? I'd say she's about 16 or something, Kiba said, before a lecherous grin appeared on his lips. But she is quite attractive. Look at that body. Akamaru groaned at this statement and shook his head, while Hinata, Ino and Sakura turned their glares on the drooling boy. One problem though, Kurenai stated towards the red-haired swordswoman, you've lost your element of surprise, which means you're going to have a hell of a hard time bringing down 4 jonin. It was pretty stupid of you making your presence known before attacking us, Asuma also added. It seems that the tables have turned in our favor. I'll take her out, Kakashi said, stepping forward and reaching up to his headband. If info on this one is correct, she should be a piece of cake to defeat. Ryoko smirked at the silver-haired jonin as he stepped forward further, the other jonin behind him taking cautious stances. Don't do anything reckless, Kakashi, Asuma warned. She may be a kid, but she looks strong. You don't need to worry about anything, Asuma, Kakashi replied, slipping his headband up to cover his forehead completely and revealing his scarred eye. When he opened it, he revealed his blazing red Sharingan, the tomo circling the pupil spinning in preparation. I'm pretty confident in my abilities to defeat this opponent. Sasuke and most of the genin behind the 4 jonin spotted the silver-haired jonin's secret device when he glanced behind him and winked at the groups watching. There's no need for concern, guys. What's that? Sakura asked. Is that the Sharingan? Hinata spoke up, blinking in surprise. It can't be. Sasuke shook his head in disbelief and looked back at his sensei to see if he wasn't dreaming. I thought the Uchiha clan was the only clan that possessed the Sharingan. How was Kakashi-sensei? Just as Kakashi was readying himself for a fight, a blonde blur shot in front of the Jonin, and when the cloud of dust dissipated, it revealed the spiky-haired Naruto standing there, face to face with the red-head swordswoman. Everyone in the vicinity blinked in surprise at the blonde's appearance, even Ryoko, as the two of them exchanged glares. "I'll fight her," Naruto stated. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video.